Hi all. Where's that?
Тогда зачем? Я знаю, что ты усыпил меня. Перестань увиливать от ответа. Так ты меня раздевал? Я поняла. Интересно. Это беспечно. Тогда почему ты усыпил меня? Скажи, что говоришь правду. Я тут такое поверю.
That's right. Where is it?
Получается, меня похитил мой одноклассник, который еще и сумасшедший. И что ты хотела сделать дальше? Наверное. А ты не все продумал, да? Прости. Я просто всегда думала, что ты невероятен. У тебя отличные оценки по всем предметам. Ты занимаешься безумно места, хорош в спорте. Никогда бы не подумала, что понравлюсь такому парню. А еще не думала, что все-таки ты немного глуп. Обижаешь? У меня нет родителей. С мачехой и... ну, ухажером. Прости, ты ведь не один живешь, а я и так затерялась. Знаешь, я была бы не против, если бы ты действительно похитил меня, чтобы уютнее. Лай, пожалуйста, похить меня. Погоди, Лай, ты хочешь сделать это со мной? Даже несмотря на то, что я использованный товар, теперь ты ненавидишь меня. Сейчас мне жаль, что занимаюсь этим. Если бы знала, что такая, как я, могу кому-то понравиться. Но, пожалуйста, позволь мне остаться у тебя. Я сделаю что угодно. Все прошло хорошо? А что нам нужно делать? Если ты будешь со мной, тебя ждут различные сюрпризы. Даже если ты хочешь помчаться на рассвете, это не так. Эй, не делай такое безразличное лицо. Ха, ты наконец решил показать мне свой тайный фетиш, да? Ну что ж, радуйся, ибо Алиса сегодня в хорошем настроении. Так значит, ты специально это устроил, чтобы выгнать меня? Я ведь права, да? Тогда зачем ты сотворил со мной такую ужасную вещь? Я не понимаю. Точно хочешь избавиться от меня? Да, сукин ты сын. Тогда зачем ты ранил меня? Тогда почему остановился? Лай, значит, я тебе не нравлюсь? Ты солгал. Ненавижу тебя.
No, said she wanted to go through with it.
А? Да, да, я его девушка. Ну, мы с Клайвом хотели позаниматься у него дома. Он отдал мне ключ, сказав, что вас не будет допоздна. Около месяца.
guys. Okay. Other
Я
side.
же говорила. Старайся не беспокоиться.
Down, step up. Good position. Move back. Big hands. This position. Open. Close. Breathe. Four. Very nice.
Правда? Да, я бы очень хотела. Он пришел раньше меня. Нет, дядя Эдвард думает, что ты
Tide Power Pods have 85% more Tide.
Who needs that much more Tide?
Yeah.
Well, when giving your muddy dog a bath turns into you getting a mud shower, yikes, you're gonna need more Tide. When your wine tasting becomes a wine spilling, yeah, you're gonna need more Tide. Or if your favorite shirt is your kid's favorite napkin. Great, I'm gonna need more Tide. My mom gave me that shirt.
It's a mess out there. Tide Power Pods have 85% more Tide versus Tide Pods.
Isn't it nice to get exactly what you want? Introducing the new My Plan from Verizon. Now you control what goes into your phone plan and what stays out of it. All on Verizon's award-winning 5G network. And for a limited time, when you bring your own phones to a Verizon store, you get My Plan for just $25 a line per month for 4 unlimited welcome lines with AutoPay, plus taxes and fees. Bring your phones to your Verizon store today and get My Plan for an amazing deal. $180 promo credit per phone applied over 36 months when you add 4 new smartphone lines with your own 4G, 5G smartphone on unlimited welcome. Promo credit and eligibility requirements are no longer met. Unlimited welcome, $30 per line for 4 lines, less $5 per line discount. Auto pay and paper-free billing required. Unlimited 5G, 4G LTE. For unlimited welcome plan in times of congestion, your data may be temporarily slower than other traffic. Domestic data roaming at 2G speeds.
Bobcat's cover of Think for Yourself is where pop punk meets the Beatles. Follow this one-man band on tour all year 2023 to 2024 throughout the whole U.S.
Love you.
Get ready to save with Spectrum One. You get Spectrum Internet delivering fast and reliable speeds for $49.99 a month. Free advanced Wi-Fi for enhanced privacy and security. And a free Spectrum mobile line with unlimited talk, text, and data, plus nationwide 5G. Go to spectrum.com/save-more and use the Spectrum One savings calculator to see how much you can save today. Offer subject to change. Valid for qualified residential customers only. Service not available in all areas. Restrictions apply.
Jake from State Farm here to answer your what ifs.
What if I need a policy, but I just can't choose?
An agent can help you choose. At State Farm, we're there for your what ifs. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Call or go to statefarm.com for a quote today.
Imagine a place with an infinite number of ways to experience Disney magic. From a galaxy far, far away to a forbidden mountain. And a land where you're the size of a toy. This is the Happyverse, and it's waiting for you at Walt Disney World Resort.
Hear that? It's a nuevo Buchanan's pineapple. And if you listen closely, you can taste the ñ, cause it's piña. It's delicious, ñes. It's yummy. Buchanan's pineapple. It's piña.
Oopsie.
Tap to taste the entire Buchanan's family. Sip responsibly. Diageo, New York.
No, there's no kind of where. No. Yeah, okay, I was right there, so that means Control delete 19 videos so far. Open. There we go. And then check. There's the remove. Videos. Ooh. No, I want to put that in here.
both of those approaches can be helpful, and you want to start at the beginning and go to the end as you would with any other book.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe for those who are leading a Bible study and therefore choosing a study to do with their group, how should they balance leading studies that talk about books of the Bible versus topical things and even line-by-line Bible studies?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and it does not have a one-size-fits-all answer on the one hand, but on the other hand, it might. So if you're the leader and you are looking at the landscape of what your church does offer and what your church has offered historically, it is important to ask, what have we done, in order to ask, what should we do? And so there has to be a little bit of a diagnostic practice there. I would just say, so if you've done a lot of topical studies, you probably need to not do as many topical studies. It may be that you had a nice balanced approach all along and you continue to offer sort of a mix of studies, but what my guess is, based on having done this for a while and been in a lot of local churches over the last 10 to 20 years, other than not just my own, is that what we're missing is the underlying just general knowledge of what these books say. That is what brings to life a topical study. And so I think it would be amiss to have years where you don't offer anything that is line by line, because that is the gaping hole in people's understanding right now. Most Christians I know have spent a lot of time in topical studies, and they find line by line studies either boring or intimidating. They should find them to be neither of those things. So I would say, as you consider what you're going to offer, if you're going to offer line by line studies, remember that you should be offering them in a way that demonstrates how important they are and how exciting they are.
Another listener wrote in and asked, I know that ideally I should be building my day around prayer and God, but I am newer to this concept and finding Bible study time very hard to fit into my day. I know that's not how I should look at it, but that's how I feel, and it's hard. I feel a pull to learn more about God, but I'm not sure how to get it all done with a full life of work, family, and all the kids' things.
Yeah, I can't relate to that at all. Yes, this woman is all of us. Can we just say that?
Right.
Yes. Yeah, I think we all feel that. And I do think we have been told that you have to have a daily, we call it quiet time. You have to have daily quiet time, otherwise you're failing. And I would want to push back on that. I do think that we need regular practice, because we, like everything, disciplines require rhythms in order for us to be able to execute them faithfully. And that word discipline is closely related to that word disciple. So we would expect that we would have some rhythm to what we're doing. I would say the more important thing to pay attention to is your desire. Desire is what drives discipline. And so if you're feeling a desire to know more and to spend more time in study, ask the Lord to increase it. And then ask Him to show you how to implement good rhythms into your current stage of life. And do what you're doing. Talk to other women who do have various practices. Be aware that there isn't just one way to do this. Like I think I've been pretty open about this. I have never had a practice of a daily quiet time in the morning. Never. And I don't think I ever will. And yet I have found time to study and learn and grow and have devotional time. And so just be aware that you can fit this into your own personality, your own scheduling needs, that there are rhythm elements to it, and there are accountability elements to it. Don't just try to do it on your own. Have spaces where other people are meeting with you in this practice, so that you have the accountability of that to help keep you on course.
Yeah, not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, but yeah, important for everyone to fit it in how they can in their stage of life. So, okay, let's move on to a few different questions about the CIA, the comprehension, interpretation, application aspect of studying the Bible. So we had another listener write in and ask, how can we accurately inform ourselves about the cultural context of a passage so we can discern correct and incorrect portrayals of that cultural context?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's important to remember that depending on what kind of reading you're doing, it may be more or less important for you to identify the cultural context. So it's always going to be important to a degree. But if you're reading the Psalms, for example, it may not be as important as if you are reading the Gospels or another historical narrative. And so if you're in the history books, you do want to pay particular attention. But at any time that you are in a book of the Bible and you're reading something and you are utterly confused, you might want to ask, am I missing something culturally? And then start trying to look and see what you can find. But it is true, we were talking about this a little before we started recording, that not every commentary gives the same degree of attention to cultural context as another one might. And so you do want to sort of begin to build up a sense of who's going to talk about this in their commentaries. And so I thought it might be helpful for you guys to see some of the places that have been helpful for me, depending on where I am in the scriptures. So like, this is a big book, but I think it's worth the investment if you're, or ask for it for your birthday. This is Bruce Waltke's Theology of the Old Testament. He's going to give some attention to cultural context issues, but just generally speaking, he's going to give you a broad sweeping understanding of the Old Testament. I do find the Old Testament is where people get the most intimidated by the cultural aspect of things. So any study Bible will give you some sense of this. But when you're like, that was a little, but I want a lot, you need to go and start looking somewhere else. So Waltke is a good place to look. When I put together the Genesis study that I wrote, this Bill Arnold was a big help to me. His encountering, and I think it's over more than just the book of Genesis, but it is purposefully focusing on cultural pieces as it's exploring how to understand the interpretation and application of the text. Another one, this whole series I think is good. It's the 4U commentary series. It's written at a lay level and by names you recognize, and often pays a lot of attention to cultural contexts to help the average learner, which I include myself in that. And then here's one that's been helpful to me in the New Testament as you study Christ, is Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. So those are just some examples of places that you might go, and what you can do is read the footnotes of those people when you find helpful information, and then that usually will lead you to other helpful sources. And then also just bear in mind, I've just recommended 4 books to you that I have used dipping in and dipping out, and so no one ever recommends a book like this saying, here, every single thing in here is something I would agree with or you would find useful. But that's also a really important part of building your understanding of how to study the scriptures is, I don't have to agree with every single thing in this book for it to be helpful to me.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Sometimes I think people get a little leery about that, of like, well, what if not everything in here is something that I can put my stamp of approval on? It doesn't negate some of the things that are helpful in them. Yeah. Okay, great. Another question from a listener. They said, on days when your Bible study is more studious, so when you're doing more of the comprehension work of looking up definitions and all those kinds of things, what other things do you do to maintain the relationship aspects of time with the Lord?
Yeah, I get various versions of this question a lot, and I don't mean to be obtuse. I don't understand the question always. I think that the implication is that study is not relational, and I do not find it to be that way. Study is not cold and dry for me. Study is a means of relationship. And so if I'm looking to feel a particular way when I study, I can understand how that can feel less relational, but I do not see it as being removed from the relational aspect of my getting to know the Lord. And so I think that's something that develops over time, though, because when you first begin to develop sort of a study method and a study habit, there are so many mechanical aspects to it that don't feel comfortable. And the more you grow in your comfort of just utilizing the practice, the more you have a shorter distance between the work you're doing and the way it changes the way that you think and feel.
Yeah, makes sense. I know that can kind of be a hard thing, too, for women in particular, studying the Bible. It's, well, if I don't feel a certain way, or if I'm not doing what I think. Exactly, right. So it's encouraging to remember that all of our study of the Lord is also building that relationship with Him, even if it's not all devotional in nature.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, a question for you about genres. Would you say that epistles are considered a specific genre?
Yes, not only would I say that, pretty much everybody would say that. So that tells me that I didn't say something clearly in the original podcast.
I'm
Because,
here
yes,
trying
epistles
to
are a genre.
learn.
A letter is a style of writing, right? An epistle is a fancy word for a letter, and so letters abide by particular rules. They have an opening, they have a greeting that he typically gives thanks. He then moves into typically in the New Testament epistles we see this is who you are, and then a shift to this is therefore how you should live, and then there are final greetings and all that. So absolutely, those letters are abiding by particular genre rules, and those are actually intuitive rules for most of us. I've often said that that's the most intuitive genre we can study because we ourselves have written letters, and so we know how they go, and it's how we understand some of the differences in the way that you might look at the epistle of Hebrews versus say the epistle of Ephesians, because Hebrews does not follow all of the typical rules of a letter. It's more like a sermon. So that's a small difference, but it's a difference that can change the way we think about how it might have been utilized when it was originally brought into a church setting. So yes, absolutely, epistles are a genre. Great question.
Yeah. I'm really excited about your answer to this next question because I think I have also had this question myself. So can you describe the difference between speculating about a text and then drawing appropriate conclusions from a text? What's the difference
This is
between
very important. And in fact, I get versions of this question as well because in my Bible studies, I will always say, what do you think Paul means, or what do you think Moses means when he says X, Y, or Z, whatever. And people just go nuts. They're like, I don't want to tell you what I think. I just need to know what it means. And so that speculative aspect and the idea that we might speculate about anything in the scriptures is just to some people feels like, oh, that's out of control. I'm going to say something wrong or think something wrong. And the purpose of that speculation stage is not so that you can necessarily arrive at a right answer in a moment, so much as it is that you can recognize where you currently are in your understanding. We can't know what we need to know until we acknowledge what we think we already know. So it's that when I say what do you think, what I'm saying is take a crack at it, but then we're gonna come up with some good answers to what you should have said. But I think a lot of people don't recognize that in the learning process, part of the learning process is simply saying out loud where you currently are in your understanding, with the acknowledgement that your understanding is not complete and is still forming. So it is important to move from that place too, where we begin to draw better conclusions. And the reason that God gives some of us to be teachers is because we're a little further ahead of you on that understanding curve than you are. It doesn't mean that you're failing; it means that you're maturing. And so part of being able to mature is to say, this is what I think. I don't know if it's right or not. And then having done that exercise, you will listen with a more critical ear, and I mean critical in the sense of discerning ear, to what other people are telling you is what it means when you get to that stage of the process. Like going back to what we were just talking about, not every book has stuff in it that we would agree with. One of the key elements of recognizing that you are thinking critically as you're going through the learning process is that you disagree with what you hear sometimes. And that's a scary feeling for us because we're like, well, the Bible teacher says it, and they love God, and they're open to scriptures. I should always agree with them. But that's just simply not the way that it goes. We have to have our own knowledge of the text. We have to discuss it in conversation with others, and we have to sit under good teaching, and then we ask the Lord to grant us light. It's a process.
Yeah, definitely. Really helpful. So when a passage in the Old Testament is foreshadowing of the Messiah, say Psalm 22, for example, what should be the primary interpretation when we study? So should it be what the original readers understood it to be, or should it be through the lens of Jesus and his work on the cross? Or did the original readers understand it as foreshadowing the Messiah?
I love the questions we got were so great. It's encouraging me that we got questions. So I'm like, these people are really thinking. So I kind of just want to answer this with but that's probably not the most helpful answer. So the way we think about those levels of interpretation, so what it meant for them and for then, what it means for us and for all, what it means for me and for now. You can't have no sense of what it meant for them and for then, even if you are looking backward toward the work of Christ on the cross, right? So I would say, yeah, we will see how this foreshadowed Christ because we have the full disclosure of God's plan that they did not have. So no, when Psalm 22 is being written, is it being written with did David think, I know I'm describing what's going to happen to Christ? No, I would argue he probably didn't even know it was a messianic statement that he's making. I think he was describing his own suffering, frankly. But because he's a type of Christ, we can look back and see, oh, this is how David's words were foreshadowing Christ. Not only that, but Christ himself employs, David's writing. He knew exactly, obviously, how it pointed toward him, and so he helps us to see how those fit together. But it is important to recognize that, like now you can see one of the interpretations we can take is that if David suffered as Christ would suffer, then we also should expect that we will suffer as Christ suffered. And it can help inform a theology of suffering for us. So it's not simply, I don't like it when people say, and see, Christ fulfills this. So there's our interpretations, I'll move on, because I do think there's more there than that. That is a lot, that is a wealth, but there is more there. So yes, we should look at it with New Testament eyes, but looking at it with New Testament eyes does not mean that we skip the part where we look at it with Old Testament eyes. Those two things should talk to each other. They should make sense to each other.
Jen, can you actually describe for listeners again what those three levels of application are?
It's for them and for then, for us and for always. So in other words, what significance does this have for the church of all time, for the great cloud of witnesses, and then for me and for now. When we talk about levels of application, so often the only way we've been taught to think about application is for me and for now. So what I like to push students to do is start with for them and for then. What was their application of this? So when Old Testament believers sang or read Psalm 22, what did it mean to them? Because that matters. And then knowing how Christ shows us what the fuller or bigger meaning was, how does that serve the church of all time? And then lastly, does it have a personal meaning for me? Am I currently in a time where I'm hard-pressed and downtrodden? How can I look to the example of Christ in the words of David and understand my suffering differently?
So another question that we had for you was when and how should listeners or other people listening encourage their kids to study the Bible? I think they're wondering, should they start their children on the CIA, this comprehension, interpretation, application? What would you recommend when teaching your children the Bible? Where do you go?
Oh, absolutely. What's ironic is I think we actually know to do this with the other books they're reading. We just forget to do it with the Bible. So in the same way that you might read Charlotte's Web with your children and have conversations about what actually happened and about what the meaning of that book is and how we might think differently about human relationships as a result of the way that Charlotte sacrificially lives her life. Like, think about that book. Charlotte is a Christ figure in the book, right? And so the same way that you would talk about a book like that's probably a little too on the nose because that book is definitely working on that theme. Sure. But maybe it's a great example for that reason. We should be talking about the Bible the same way. I think that we think it devalues the Bible to make the statement the Bible is literature. I actually think that it elevates the Bible and causes us to treat it with at least the same respect we would treat any other book. And so give your children the gift of being able to read and understand and apply the Bible the same way that they might read and understand and apply any other morality tale. And children's books are filled with morality tales. So give them the same skills that you're using with other books that you'll be talking about actively with them. And if you're thinking, I don't really talk with them actively about other books, then I would just add an addendum here and say, do that. Like have all kinds of book clubs with your kids. So that because all great stories, all stories that have a lasting impact on us are echoes of the one true story. And so as you are learning and growing your understanding of the one true story, give your children the gift of being able to recognize it where it is in the other books that they'll be reading. And you will, I think, find that your conversations are avid around this. Like I wish you can see behind me are all my theology books. In front of me are all of the books that we read with our kids through the years. They go up and around the window that I'm sitting in front of. And so this Bible literacy is a subset of literacy. And so if you want to have children who are avid learners and readers of Scripture, be sure that you're investing in them being avid learners in general.
We had another listener write in and ask, how can you stay focused on what the Bible is saying about God when reading passages that mention him very little?
This is a really good question. When I saw it, when you sent them over, spoiler alert, I do read them before we get on here, or most of them. I love this question because it's important. First of all, there are entire chapters in Genesis or in the book of Judges where we hear, in other books, those are just examples, where God drops out of the text. Like you just don't hear anything about him. And that is something we should be paying attention to. We should say, why am I not hearing anything about God here? Because the author is doing that on purpose. It is intended to communicate something. It does not mean that God is not active. It usually means God is letting humans act like fools and then he's going to show up again. And so what do we learn about a silent God? That's an important thing for us to ask. Does it mean he's unfaithful? Does it mean that he's not paying attention? It means none of those things, right? And so those are good things to meditate on. But then there are other books, other genres in which we would not expect that we would hear about God, like Proverbs, for example. You'll hear a lot of wisdom principles, but they may not explicitly refer to God in a particular proverb. And so then we need to ask the question, how are we seeing the character of God? How do we see the wisdom of God in this wisdom statement? What do we learn is true about God? So let me think if I can think of a good example. What's a proverb that comes to mind for you? Answer not a fool according to his folly would be one. And then the next one is answer a fool according to his folly, right? And so it's like, which one are we supposed to do? And so what we're seeing there is that in God's wisdom economy, wisdom is situational. It depends on which fool and what kind of folly is going on, whether you would answer or not answer. And so pay attention. And isn't this exactly what we see the Lord do in the way that he interacts with people in the scriptures and in our own lives? We know that there are times where he responds to us in our folly, and there are times where, as we just saw, he backs off and lets us live in the silence and learn the lesson the hard way. So there is always a way to think back to what is true about God. God is explicitly present in some portions of scripture more than others, and I love that this woman was paying attention to that and asking a really insightful question about it.
Okay, Jen, let's transition now to a few questions specifically for Bible teachers. So how do you use the CIA, that comprehension, interpretation, application, if the education level of those in your group lacks the level necessary to implement those skills? I think what this person is trying to ask is they don't want their Bible study to turn into a class.
I would say why not? I mean, classes are where we learn things. And that's funny because I find this is a fairly pervasive thought that a classroom is boring. And I would say there's no school like the old school. Like the way that you've learned things that were meaningful to you and useful to you was usually in a classroom. And so don't shy away from that. I do think that we can feel that way because of the heavy devotional approach that a lot of us have been sort of trained into. But you do actually want it to feel like a class. And initially, they may not love it. They will not be accustomed to it. And so that's why it's really important to set a clear expectation up front. Hey, this is going to be different than what you've done before, but I'm going to ask you to trust the process. And I think what you will find on the other side of it is that it was useful and that you do have the feelings to go with the practice, but you will not have them immediately. That's why anytime I start at the beginning of a Bible study, I tell people have a long-term view. Like let the process take its time. And so with regard to different education levels, though, this is a valid concern, which is why I personally try to teach all of my studies at an 8th grade reading level, because most people in our church will have that ability. And then you will have people who are further along. And so the next concern I will hear is, well, if I teach at an 8th grade reading level, aren't the people who are further along in their understanding going to get bored? And I do not find this to be the case. That's what I love about the Bible study space is I think it's an equalizer in the sense that everyone has somewhere to grow in that space. And so whereas someone who has been around longer may find things like marking a repeated word or phrase to be less interesting, or they just may be quicker at it than someone who hasn't done it before, it is still benefiting them. And then when we get to the interpretation phase and the application phase, well, because the Word of God is indeed living and active, there's always more there for the person who has been doing this longer. Not only that, but the person who's been doing this longer, if indeed they have been maturing in their faith, they understand the importance of being a co-learner with someone who is not as far along as they are, and they understand that role to be one of being an encouragement and a help to those who are coming along behind, in a way that even the teacher won't be, because the teacher is always perceived to be so much further along, whether she is or not. So I do think it's an important concern to articulate. I think in practice, it is not that great of a concern if you have it in view and you are paying attention to the dynamics of the group and making sure that no one gets left behind and that everyone has something to challenge them.
Yeah. Maybe just a follow-up to that question. How would you say, how can teachers, Bible study teachers, make their study approachable for women of all maturity levels so that people that are more spiritually mature are challenged, but those younger in their faith aren't overwhelmed? And you spoke to that a little bit. Would you have anything else that you'd like to say to that end?
So I would say that the most valuable teaching experience that I got was the one that I valued the least at the time, and that was when I taught 7th grade girls Sunday school. And so if you want to teaching adults, there's really no better lab for learning those skills than teaching in children's ministry or student ministry. I know some of you were thinking, well, I don't have time to do that. And that may be fair. You may not, although I'll tell you what, your children's ministry and student ministry would fall over if you showed up and said you wanted to help. So if you have enough of a timeline, I would say spend some time learning how to take deep truth and communicate it in simple terms, because that is the skill. That is what makes effective teaching happen at every level, and we never outgrow it. Our listeners never outgrow it. So even if you don't have time to actually spend time teaching in a space like that, it might be helpful to you to listen to teachings that are recorded and available that are geared toward children or middle schoolers, so that you can begin to get into that headspace. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but I can't overstate how it has impacted my teaching approach.
Yeah, really helpful. Good idea. Another listener wrote in and said, I've been interested in leading a women's Bible study at my church for a couple of years now, but have always been hesitant because I don't think teaching is one of my spiritual gifts. I love the way the study of the Word has changed me and want to share what I've learned, but also worry that teaching should be left to those who are gifted in that area. What are your thoughts? So what are your thoughts, Jen?
Well, you won't know until you try. And don't ever assume that your interest isn't telling you something about your gifting. Very few of us have a deep interest or impulse to pursue something that isn't a gift. And I think sometimes we took a diagnostic test at some point that was supposed to tell us what our spiritual gifts were, and we're like, well, that's my list from now on for forever. Now, I'm not saying that this listener necessarily did that, but I do think that in many cases, the gifting that I now know is mine to give to the church is something that I see in hindsight that I did not see on the beginning side of things. And so you never know until you try. Just have honest people around you who will give you feedback and say, hey, that was a great try. This may not be your thing, you know? Or they're going to say, hey, I actually see something in you that I think is going to grow into something that's going to feel more comfortable as you go, and I want to help you get there. But you won't know until you try. I do think it is important to listen to that desire that's in you, because it's either pointing you toward a gift that you do have and you're not aware of, or it's pointing you toward an area of service where the gifts you do have will have some teaching element to them. And if you don't explore it, it's going to take you longer to get into that space than it might otherwise.
Yeah. It's not something that you have to be 100% certain about before you can even take that first step.
That's right.
So outside of the 5 Ps of transformational Bible study that we talked about in one of our previous episodes, what other steps can teachers take to ensure they don't unintentionally teach error?
Well, we had that additional P that was study with people, the little 6th free P that we throw in there. And that one, I think, can sometimes, I think the way actually that I talked about in the Women of the Word was pretty brief. And so you can think that what is entailed there is just, I need to gather with other people and talk about the Bible. But one of the shared spaces for talking about the Bible is the historic conversation of the Christian church. And so I would say if you're concerned about teaching error, you will be a much more conscientious and competent Bible teacher if you have attempted to learn basic doctrines of the Christian faith. And so I'm talking about systematic theology. That's a big, scary word. It doesn't need to be, but you should be learning what is the doctrine of God, what is the doctrine of man, what is the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, of Christ, of the Father. So you walk through all of what's the doctrine of the church. So really, basically, it's what the Apostles' Creed runs through in very brief statements. And you need those lenses to be able to be confident in your teaching of Scripture, because what they're telling you is historically this is what Christians have all affirmed for over 2,000 years as the guardrails through which we understand the teachings of Scripture. They can feel to the new learner like, well, aren't these extra biblical? But they're not extra biblical. They are, I think of them as organizer bins for what's in the Bible. So in the same way that you might organize your closet or your pantry, they help organize the most essential teachings of the Scripture that have been agreed upon as orthodox for 2,000 years into what we can understand them. So yes, I would say doctrine. Gathering with other people, meaning the people who have gone before us in our faith, the people who are currently in conversation in our faith, who have shared an understanding of Christianity together, is essential to proper teaching of Scripture. And you will feel so much relief knowing, oh, I'm teaching according to the same guidelines that Tim Keller taught according to, or that Martin Luther taught according to. So that's what doctrine can help us with, and so much more.
If we're going to do a Bible study with other people, what questions about the passage that we're studying should we ask ourselves prior to meeting with other people? So what questions should we ask on our own, and which questions about our passage should we ask in a group setting? Or is there a difference between, as I'm doing the prep work on my own that I should ask myself, versus the questions I should ask when I'm studying that passage with a group?
So my hope would be that the group has questions that you are also working from to build the teaching before you get together to have a discussion. So when I say teaching, it may be, if you're in a group of 12, you may not be lecture style teaching. In fact, I would argue it shouldn't be. It should be a conversation around questions that they worked on before they got there that force them to examine comprehension, interpretation, and application. That then they discuss in the group. So this is the 3-legged stool of learning that I often will reference. So the work they do on their own then comes into the group and is discussed in the group, and then the teaching time is the 3rd leg that helps to resolve any dissonance that might still exist with regard to the questions they were asked to do beforehand. So on the one hand, you should be looking at the same questions that they are looking at before the discussion happens. On the other hand, you should be asking some additional questions. Those questions are related to the questions that you have given to the group before you get there. And those questions are, which of the questions that I gave them to prepare did they think had an easy answer, but there was actually much more to it? Because that's something we're going to need to explore. And then the second question typically that I use to frame up where I'm going to let the discussion of teaching go is, which of the questions that I gave them sent them into a soul-sucking spiral of doubt or caused them to panic and feel dumb, those kinds of things, because we're absolutely going to talk about those. And so as the leader or teacher in that setting, you do have a responsibility to anticipate how they answered the questions that you gave them and then steer them toward a good answer or a good way to answer.
That's helpful. So in a sense, you're kind of using the questions that people had as homework, in a sense, as your starting point for questions that you can ask in a group setting.
Oh, I would say they're not just a starting point. They are what the group time together should be, because you want them to connect that work that they've done on their own to a meaningful understanding of the text. Otherwise, it's busy work, right? And so when I'm coaching women on how to start teaching and how to be an effective Bible teacher, the homework piece, that work on your own piece, is essential to that, because a successful teaching is not whether you started with a compelling illustration that made them laugh and ended with a compelling illustration that made them cry and they learned some things in the middle. It's, did you teach to the work that they did on their own? And so a baseline solid teaching is, I recognize the work that you did before you got here, and I know that you came in here, if the questions you gave them were good, you came in here with dissonance. You have a good sense of what you want to know and you don't know yet, and now we're going to work together to resolve that dissonance in a way that causes this passage to stick with you. And I will just say that's one of the biggest misses in curriculum writing. I wish we probably could have done a whole episode on curriculum writing, is that often the questions we've been given to do before the gathering time don't create any dissonance at all. They don't cause us to think, oh, I don't know the answer to that. We feel like we answered them correctly and we're going to get straight A's on our homework. Or if the answer's difficult, I just read a little further down and they will give me the answer. And so again, the questions that we should be giving, these comprehension, interpretation, and application questions, should be challenging to them. They should have a hard time answering some of them, not all of them, so that they come eager to hear what's going to happen in the discussion and teaching time.
Yeah, super helpful. Why is it important for women to have their own space to study the Bible together within the church?
Oh, I love this question. It is important for a couple of reasons. One is because if we're learning the Scriptures in a way that is transforming not just our thinking, but our will and our actions, it means that it will lead to confession and vulnerability. And I think any woman who's done ministry in all-female spaces for any period of time knows that there is a level of vulnerability that will only happen in a single-gender setting. So I like to remind people that I do not mean that all we should do is have single-gender spaces, nor do I think that all we should do is have mixed-gender spaces. I think it's a both-and, but I do think that the Bible study space particularly lends itself to single-gender, to all-female gathering spaces, because it enables women to feel comfortable with being vulnerable about what's really going on in their lives. But here's another thing it enables them to be comfortable with. It enables them to be comfortable with having a thought-level discussion in a way that they might not be in a mixed-gender setting. So I just want to unpack that a little bit. Because there are some social penalties sometimes in churches for women who enter conversations at the thought level. It means that we have in many cases been socialized into being quieter in mixed-gender spaces, or only entering into those conversations at the feelings level. I'm not actually dinging the church for this, although I don't think it's great. This is something that is recognizable sociologically in any mixed group. Men tend to offer twice as many answers as women. They tend to enter in at the thought level, and women tend to enter in at the feelings level. A single-gender space is often the first place that a woman will take a risk on saying what she thinks. And so that's why I love all-female groups. There are some other reasons, but that's my short answer for now.
Yeah, that's good. I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with that in their own lives and experiences as well. So that was really helpful. Okay, let's end just with a few questions, Jen, for you. So our listeners had just a few questions. Yeah, just for you. So what would you say is your favorite Bible study that you've either written or done?
This is like asking me which of my children is my favorite. I would say my favorite, it moves around a little bit, kind of based on where I've spent the most time recently. so those two books helped me understand the rest of the Bible so much better that I have just thoroughly enjoyed going back to them again and again. Yeah, so I love those. And then I will at some point publish a study that I taught years ago on the book of Judges, which also mattered a lot to my understanding of the Bible as a whole, because you cannot, the number of difficult things you have to talk about in the book of Judges is vast. And so a lot of those sort of low-level fears that I think women in particular carry about, does God actually love women, or are we second-class citizens? Like we might know, no, I know he loves us as much as he loves men, but then you read some of these things in the Bible and you're like, but does he? And so that book of Judges made me stare down a lot of things that I had not had to wrestle with personally, and certainly had not had to stand up and teach to a group of women. And so at some point that will become available again, and I'm eager for women to learn in a deeper way that God does indeed love all of his image bearers.
What are some of your favorite commentaries that you like to use for deeper study after having done your own study? Or what have been some books other than the Bible that have helped shape your study of the Bible?
Yeah, those are two different questions. So the commentary one, I think I've talked about this, but just quickly I'll just say again, I will start with a commentary. You're kind of reading along, you're like, oh, this one's boring, or oh, I'm really getting a lot out of this one. And when I get to that, oh, I'm really getting a lot out of this one, I start reading the footnotes of whoever they used to build what they're doing. And so a starting point for me that's been pretty helpful are the Life Change series by Mad Press. Do I want to see if I can grab one? I'm not going to reach behind me and grab everything off my shelf right now. I want to. But the Life Change series, their footnotes, their bibliographies are generally helpful starting points for those of us who are not perhaps formally theologically trained, so accessible. And I start with accessible, and then because footnotes are going to move you toward more scholarly things the deeper you dig. But I love James Montgomery Boyce. I love that For You series that I've shown you earlier is a good one, very accessible. And the people who are writing them are people who are using just right down the middle sources. They're not going to take you anywhere risky with their footnotes. And so really you learn by feel, though. You really have to feel your way forward in that process and give yourself time. And then the second one, which books have most impacted my study of the Bible, The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer, hands down, followed closely by Stephen Charnock's The Existence and Attributes of God, which Tozer I found in Tozer's footnotes. So no one had presented the Bible to me, or maybe I didn't hear them do so, but I did not understand the Bible to be a book about God until I was given a vision of God and I lifted up in the knowledge of the Holy. So that's why the doctrine of God matters so much to me as someone who wants people to love the Bible. If the Bible is simply about me or how to live my life better, I could put it on the bookshelf next to a bunch of books that are not divinely inspired, and it would be about equally useful, but it's about so much more.
Well, thanks for sharing those resources with us. So I'm sure most of our listeners know that you're mom, but maybe some don't know that you're also now a grandmother. So the last question we have for you today is, how are you planning to encourage your 3 grandchildren to study God's word when they're a bit older? And what is your prayer for them as they grow and learn God's word?
Well, first of all, I don't want to encourage my 3 grandchildren. I want to encourage my 45 grandchildren, but I do only currently have 3, so we'll go with those 3. I'm like, let's just be a dynasty, shall we? Can we call ourselves a dynasty yet if there's only 3 of them? Really I know that parents and grandparents want the answer to this to be, I'm going to give them a good practice, and I'm going to tell them that they should do it, and I'm going to make sure they're disciplined or whatever. The most effective way for a child to want to love the scriptures is for them to witness your evident and undeniable love of the scriptures. And so what my prayer is that I would show them that in the way that I live my life. And so when they think about sugar, which is the name of my choosing, when they think about sugar, they will think she loved the scriptures because they helped her love the Lord. And I know most parents and grandparents are familiar with the words in Deuteronomy 6 that talk about these things, and I talk about them at every juncture of the day is essentially the way to sum that up. And I think we think that means show them how to do a word study. And I'm not saying it doesn't mean that, but it means that we're constantly talking about what happened with a friend, and how would Christ respond, or what do you think about that in terms of like you being someone who loves the Lord, and maybe they don't even know him, And so I think we've underestimated the power of 1,000 small conversations and overestimated the effectiveness of one big one in so many ways. You can think about the various topics that parents feel anxious about. I can think of 2. One is talking about sex, and the other is talking about faith. And in both of those cases, I would say it's 1,000 small conversations that does the good work of formation. And so trust that those conversations will do that work, and then have relationships that are structured around 1,000 conversations. And you can imagine there are great implications for that. That's going to implicate your calendar significantly, the things you're going to commit time to, because those 1,000 conversations are organic, and we don't get to say when they happen. That means we have to have a great deal of availability. So that's what I pray that my children and my grandchildren will think when they remember me when I have gone to dust. And that is, man, she had time for us, and we had 1,000 conversations, and I know why she loved the Lord, and I know how she loved the Lord, and I want to say.
It's a good word. Thanks so much, Jen, for sharing all you've learned and your insights with us. It's been so helpful. And thanks to all of you who submitted a question for our show today. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you're listening so you can catch up on all the previous episodes of the show. And thanks for tuning in to the Women of the Word podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Women of the Word podcast. I'm Lauren C. Santo. I'm here with my friend and Bible study teacher, Jen Wilkin. Jen, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk with you about all things Bible study.
Me too. Really looking forward to it.
Yay. So the name of this podcast is actually the name of your first book, Women of the Word, which you wrote back in 2014. And that book was all about how women, although it really was for anybody, how they can learn to study the Bible with both their hearts and their minds. And that's what you and I are going to do together today. We're going to explore those topics, how we can know and love the Bible better, and ultimately love the God who it points to. So let's jump in. Jen, can you talk about why you wrote Women of the Word?
Yeah, I was just doing ministry in my local church and was seeing an increased need for studies that were, this is going to sound terrible, but that were just actually getting into the scripture itself.
Yeah.
When I was in my early 20s and had my first child and started finally I wasn't working and had the opportunity to go to my church and attend women's Bible study, and pretty much the entire Bible study diet at that time for the women, at least in the church that I was in, were things that were topical or devotional in nature. And so they were, picking verses from various areas in the scripture and then really telling us what we should think about them. And then our work was to generate the feelings around that. And we'll talk about this as we move through the podcast. I'm sure there's a place for devotional and topical studies, but when it's the entire diet that you're getting, you end up with this whole population of women who have been in church in many cases for many years, going to something called a Bible study, and they still don't know the Bible. So but women's discipleship, this is a little bit of an umbrella issue that was associated with it, women's discipleship was rarely viewed as part of a holistic Christian formation strategy. It was just kind of over to the side doing its own thing. So yeah, that was kind of where things were when I started thinking about this issue and started trying to write my own content and come up with a method that was going to actually teach literacy skills.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, anybody who's heard you speak or write or talk at a conference has probably heard you talk about Bible literacy and your heart for Bible literacy. So can you just talk a little bit about what Bible literacy is and why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah, I do like to distinguish. Sometimes people will say biblical literacy, and that's not a terrible term, but it's not precise enough for me because a lot of times you have people who have some form of biblical literacy in the sense that they might know some content that's in the Bible or idea, they might know some doctrine or things like that. But Bible literacy is simply having a book of the Bible in a language that you can understand and you're growing toward mastery of it. And by mastery, it just means you know how to read it the way that it was intended to be read. And so that's a big missing piece for a lot of people. They have had this book that they're staking their lives on, but in a lot of cases they've just taken someone else's word for what it says.
So from your perspective, what is the state of Bible literacy in the church today?
Well, I think since 2014, I would say we've seen some improvement, which is really gratifying. And I'm not saying that that's just because of women of the word by any stretch, but I think there are more voices out there. I don't know if we had reached the tipping point, you know, at least in women's circles, where women were hungry for more. And I don't mean to remove the debt that we owe to organizations like BSF and CBS and Precept who have done this kind of work for a long, long time. But there was not just a general sense in women's circles at least of wow, I don't know how to read this thing. And it was I called it sort of the dirty little secret that we were all keeping and no one wanted to admit. And so I think you hear more conversation around Bible literacy. I think there are more resources out there for women at varying levels that are helping them build Bible literacy than there were in 2014. But I think that it is such a big problem and it lives as a subset of a literacy problem in our society that we will be fighting this fight for years to come.
Do you think it's something that today, I know you said it's gotten a little bit better than in the past, but comparatively to a few generations ago, do you think we're better off than we were then, or has it gotten worse over the last 20, 30 years?
Oh, over the last 20 or 30 years, I think it's certainly gotten worse. Yeah, I mean, and it's not just biblical literacy that's dropped, it's theological literacy as well. You know, we're seeing that in all our markers. And I think you look around, I'm very sensitive toward the deconstruction conversation. You know, people who are deconstructing their faith, I don't look on that with anger or disgust or anything. I have a ton of compassion for people who are walking through that process. But when I hear the questions that they're wrestling with, I tend to think, I hear you wrestling with a faith that I don't know that you were ever given. Like, I don't know that you ever were given your Bible and shown this is how you can look for these answers on your own. And I don't mean in isolation, but I mean if we don't have that first layer of firsthand knowledge of the text, then it's no wonder that when we hear an idea that we have dissonance with, that we think I'm the first person in human history who's ever had this soul-sucking question, and I'm going to have to jettison everything in order to reconcile the way that I feel. And so I do think that we're seeing that in a lot of those deconstruction conversations. And I think Bible literacy is a big start toward helping someone recognize, oh, I have a historic faith. I have a faith that I can really lean into. And so I think there's that piece with regard to deconstruction. But then I also think when you see just the fractiousness in Christian circles around different ideas from the Bible, sometimes I think people think my end game with Bible literacy is if we all knew how to read it better, we would all agree. And that's actually not what I think. I do think that around orthodoxy, right, things that are in that conversation, orthodoxy, that we would have more clarity and less fighting. But all of the secondary and tertiary issues, I don't actually think that if we all get more literate, we'll agree on them. I think we will disagree far more charitably than we do now because we begin to recognize our own place in this and our own perspective is just limited and we need each other to hash these things out.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So Jen, how did you first catch a vision for Bible literacy? Who in your life kind of set an example for you about that?
Well, I grew up in a home that was filled with books and reading and then went off and studied English. And so I knew how to read books in general and then began to feel a distance between the way that you would read just any book and the way that we read the scriptures. Now, obviously, the Bible is more than a book, but it is a book, right? And so I had started into women's Bible study spaces in these topical or devotional rooms, and they were meeting a need of some kind, but they weren't necessarily growing people into knowledge of scriptures the way that I had exposure to. Even as a kid, we were in a Bible church for a period of time, and our junior high Bible study was doing basically line by line Bible study. So I knew it was a thing. I hadn't seen it in a while. And then I was invited to an inductive Bible study, and I got into that room, and I was like, oh my gosh, these are my people. Because inductive Bible study is essentially just taking literacy tools that you would use with any book and then using them to address the Bible at a literature level, not just at a literature level, but at least at a literature level. And so I began to wonder, why were there only 20 women in this inductive space, and then there were 200 in this other space? And I couldn't figure out why, where all of these really great tools were, was all of the energy in this other space. And isn't there a way for these two rooms to talk to each other, to have a common shared space, a space where the tools are being given to students, and then the evident love for teaching and the really hard-hitting application is all connecting. And at least in the church that I was in, there were not any overlaps there. So I started trying to write and teach for a middle space.
So do you think that there's anybody who would get a pass on Bible literacy, or do you think Bible literacy is really just for everybody?
Well, I have to say I have seen it at every level. You work in publishing. You know how books get all the way through the publishing cycle with so many different eyes on them, and things get out into the world that where verses are used out of context or passages or misquoted. I mean, it could be anything. People take a story and use it however they want.
Definitely.
Yeah, and so and then I've done a ton of traveling around and teaching on this. And one of the things that I'll do sometimes when I do a session is I give everybody a pop quiz over 20 just basic factual questions in the Bible. So it's not interpretation or application. It's just like what kind of animal did Balaam ride, which that's actually the gimme question in all of it. And people can't do it. And they feel that sinking feeling. And I'm talking about people at Christian conferences with seminary degrees, people who are in local churches. I think that because we have such access to things that are Bible adjacent, many of us have lost a habit of actually spending time in the Bible, making meditation just on the words that are there.
Yeah,
I think it's everywhere.
Yeah, I see that even a lot just in my own church and with my own friends of it's easier almost to like recommend a book or a podcast to listen to about the Bible rather than actually getting into the Bible for themselves. So yeah, I understand that too. What would you say maybe to those people who think like it's easier to read a book about the Bible, or I like this person or this author, so I'm going to listen to this podcast, and getting into the Bible feels like really intimidating to me. What would you say to the person that feels intimidated by just the prospect of Bible literacy or studying the Bible for themselves?
Well, I think it is intimidating, especially if you don't have any sense of where to start, which is what Women of the Word was written to help people with, to give them a starting point. But I do think that people don't recognize that you can't possibly read with any level of personal discernment if you don't have that underlying knowledge of the Scripture, and that all of these things that are about the Bible are helpful. Not all of them, but many of them are helpful, but they're not foundational. And not only that, but they are assuming that you have a foundational understanding of the Scriptures if they are wanting to be truly beneficial. But then even, this is kind of scary, some of them are actually relying on you not having a foundational understanding, because then they can tell you whatever their interpretation is, and diminish what I've sometimes called the expert-amateur divide, that the expert stands on a platform or is on a podcast or authors a book and tells you things and you receive them. You're the amateur, you sit in the pews. And for many of us, this is the way that Sunday morning plays out.
Yeah,
Each week, we come and we sit and we receive teaching over a passage that we've spent very little time in ourselves, if any, before we hear the sermon preached.
Yeah.
And it's a passive learning environment. And when we get to the end of hearing that sermon, we don't think, oh, now I understand this passage better and I can just get through it on my own. We think, that's amazing. How did that expert put that together? And so what Bible literacy does is it pulls back the curtain and says, hey, we actually want you to know how this person did the work that they did, because we're all called to be disciples who make disciples. And so, really, so much of the conversation around Bible literacy from my perspective is to be able to faithfully fulfill the part of the Great Commission that has been forgotten for 30 or 40 years. And that's that we're to make disciples and teach them to observe all that he commanded. So the work of being a disciple is the business of learning. The work of being a discipler is the business of instructing others.
Yeah, and it kind of gives people a little bit of the bigger picture. It's not just Bible literacy for your quiet times, but it impacts your discipleship with your friends and coworkers and neighbors, and also how you attend church and are a church member. It's not just kind of what you do well for yourself too.
And you really mentioned you've alluded to what I think are two of the biggest challenges that we're facing in the church today. I've started calling them the two eyes that we need to gouge out, because they both start with an eye. And the first one is individualism, in other words. And this is very deep in the quiet time ethos. It's me, the Lord, and my Bible. That's the sweet sauce. That's the most important time I can spend interacting with the scriptures. And then the instant gratification piece is me, the Lord, and my Bible, and I need what I need from it right now. And that's, those are symptomatic of the broader culture that is telling us that it's my personal experience of it and my feelings in the moment that are defining whether something is of value or not. So a lot of the work that requires to be done around Bible literacy in the church is to restore to us delayed gratification, and a sense that the Bible, while it is written for me, it's really foundationally written for us, for the children of God, and that it's understood in community, not just in isolation.
Yeah, and then that there's some effort that goes into to that. There's work that it's not just I can read the Bible and immediately get everything from the 5 minutes that I've read, or we'll talk about that in other episodes too, just of the desire to maybe want to read the Bible to feel better, solve a problem, find help for something. But I think that's also kind of a challenge for people too, is I just want to go to the Bible, read what I need to read, get my quiet time, check it off the list, move on with my life kind of thing, and that's not building a lot of healthy habits. So what would you say to the person who thinks, Jen, I'm just not cut out for this, I just don't think this is something that I can do?
Yeah, well, usually that's rooted in some past negative experience in which they felt, they felt like they were not capable, or they felt shame or embarrassment around the way that they had tried to interact with the Bible. And it's true that we all have varying levels of ability to understand. I mean, some of us do have a greater aptitude. Some of us have, learning challenges that we're up against. But we have a little phrase, my friends and I, where we say the Bible is for everyone. And that's true. The Bible is for everyone. To the extent that you have the ability to understand it, you should try, because the Lord has given that to us as a gift. And so there are good access points. And sometimes we were never sort of brought in through the front door. And so we feel like we don't know why we feel so clunky at it. And it's really a confidence builder over time if you start with basic tools that really are accessible to just about anyone, and then learn how to use them well. 2 Timothy 2:15, most people in this space would know that verse, that we're to do our best to present ourselves as workers who are unashamed, as those who understand how to rightly handle the scriptures. That's a call on the life of every follower of Christ, I believe. And so we can know that to whatever extent we do have the ability, that we should pursue that. And I think that for many of us, we don't even know what the extent of our ability would be, because we may have had an initial first experience in which we did feel dumb or inadequate. So a lot of this, I want women to have tools. I want people to have tools for reading the scripture, but I also want them to have confidence that they can do the work.
Jen, have you personally ever been in that position where you think, oh, I don't even know if I know what I'm doing?
Yeah, I still feel that way. Yeah. Honestly, I hope it comes across in my teaching and in the way that I'm talking about the Bible. I really do consider myself, and I think a lot of teachers do consider, I consider myself a co-learner. And that doesn't mean that I don't know that I've had more time or more experience. I do know that, but I always think that the one who's teaching is usually the one who maybe had just a little more natural curiosity to keep pushing through, where someone else might have said, oh, I don't know. And to me, that's probably the definition of a teaching gift, is just this: you had more of a natural curiosity to keep pressing when you hit that first barrier. That honestly, every time I start a new book of the Bible, it feels like climbing a mountain. It does, and I just think there's no way that I'm going to be able to get through it all. And then you start to get into it, and you realize, oh, the goal is not mastery. Like, it's about incremental gains, right? Incremental gains across a long timeline. And that's every bit as freeing for me as it is for the person who's contemplating this for the first time. Nobody has to be an expert. You can come and learn basic tools so that we can be co-learners, disciples walking this road together.
What are a few maybe practical steps that people can start taking today? If they're listening to this and they're thinking, I don't feel like I have a great grasp of my own Bible literacy, what are some really practical things people can do today to start improving that in their own lives?
The simplest first step is, I think it sounds so simple that people think that can't possibly be useful, but the most underutilized and helpful tool in building better literacy is repetitive reading. And repetitive reading of an entire book of the Bible from start to finish. And so, there's value to different paces of reading the scripture. Maybe people have done a Bible reading plan, which is fantastic. It gives you, that's a sprint. And then the Bible literacy piece, while a Bible reading plan is an aspect of building literacy, what I have focused on more with the space that I'm in is the marathon approach. It's to pick a book, stay in it, and really just spend enough time to where it gets under your skin. Not to where you necessarily understand every single piece of it or know exactly what to do with all of it, but you know what it says. And repetitive reading is an indispensable, it's the first step, and it's an indispensable step in growing more familiar with this book that honestly we're staking our lives on. And it's amazing how little of it takes before you begin to hear some of the things you were consuming passively very differently than you did before. You begin to realize, I think that's pulled out of context, or that's actually not what that verse says, when someone is sort of paraphrasing something on the fly. And you may not immediately draw some stunning conclusion from that, but that's actually a really encouraging moment when you begin to realize that your awareness is being heightened, and you're growing more discerning in the things that you're hearing. We talked a little about how I started creating resources to address Bible literacy, but really my why in all of this is because I grew up in about 7 different denominations. I talk about it a little bit in the book. And when you know that there's always someone standing behind a pulpit or a podium using the same book, but teaching very different things from it, depending on what room you're in, that's a little alarming. And not only that, in my own family, my immediate family, false teaching took a hold with my mom. She ended up in the Word Faith movement for a number of years, and she had a chronic health issue. And so you can imagine when you have a loved one who felt that seeking medical attention was an act of faithlessness and was dealing with a medical issue that needed to be treated. When I say that false teaching is dangerous, I don't just mean spiritually dangerous, although it certainly is that. In the case of my own family, it was physically dangerous, and which is to say nothing of the emotional and spiritual dangers associated with being told if you are ill, it's your fault. And if things go well for you, it's because you've done things well, right? It's Christian karma. And so when I think about people knowing the scriptures firsthand and being able to rightly divide, being able to hear something and think critically
intellectual exercise at all. Thinking back over your experience as a Bible study teacher, how has the Lord grown your understanding of His Word as you've taken time to really get into it and study it for yourself?
Well, I think like a lot of Christians, I had spent a fair amount of time in the New Testament, but the Old Testament felt scary and weird to me. And like I knew intellectually that the God of the New Testament and the God of the Old Testament were the same, but I wasn't sure I could have proven it to you if I had to, by taking you to the Old Testament. And so I've had the opportunity to teach through Genesis and Exodus, Joshua, Judges, First and Second Samuel. I've spent a fair amount of time in the last 10 or 15 years in Old Testament books, Proverbs and Psalms, and the way that my understanding of the New Testament has just exploded, which makes sense. You know, we know that we need the Old Testament to understand the New Testament, but I have lived through the curve at this point, and will continue to, I'm sure, for as long as the Lord gives me life. But I'm working now on a study of Revelation, and I am seeing just increasingly like so many Christians think that book is off limits to them. Like if there's any book in the Bible that we need someone else to tell us what it means, it's that one, right? But all of the years that I've gotten to spend in these Old Testament books are yielding up this fruit where I'm able to see the connections, not all of them, but more than I would have 15 years ago, right? Which is that idea of incremental gains. And then I get excited about if I've got this much more understanding now, how much more will I have 10 years from now if I keep putting deposits into this? And so, for me personally, my excitement and joy has grown as my ability to read has grown, as I've gotten better at seeing through the lenses, those Old Testament, seeing the New Testament through those Old Testament lenses, the way that it was written by those authors to be read.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. What an encouragement, and hopefully encouragement for other people that they know that they can also do this too. There's a lot of really exciting benefits. Lord blesses our efforts as we take time to learn His Word. So, is there anything else you would say about, you kind of touched on this a little bit, about why Bible literacy is worth effort? Some people could be thinking, that sounds like a lot of work to me. What other encouragement would you give people of why it's worth effort?
It is a lot of work. Yeah. It's the joyful work of a lifetime. And I think that, we think about the Christian life as one of sacrifice, right? Like when we come to faith, we expect that it's going to mean we're going to use our money differently. It might be costly in terms of the way that we spend our time serving others. When we read the words of Jesus to take up our cross and follow Him, it conjures a lot of images of self-sacrifice and discipline. But when we think about the scriptures, for some reason, we don't associate any costliness with being able to understand what's in them. In fact, it's always fascinating to me to see how people respond to current forms of media, current mediums that are giving the gospel story. So TV shows, movies. And there will be this sort of wave of energy among the Christian community of like, oh my gosh, it's finally going to happen. This movie's going to come out, or this TV series, and then everyone is going to finally understand what the good news of Jesus Christ is, because they'll be able to see it. And you can hear how we're unintentionally or unconsciously privileging a medium to say this is what God's been waiting for all of these millennia, was for us to be able to put things on film so that people can understand. But the reality is that the eternal words of God were given to us as words in a book. You know, that is how He chose to do things. He could have revealed truth to us any way. He hasn't been sitting on His hands for 2,000 years waiting for someone to develop the camera, which is not to diminish that some of those things that are created are beautiful and helpful, and maybe the first point where someone does hear and understand the gospel. But the everyday walk of a Christian is one of discipline. That's a disciple and discipline. Those words are related to each other. And so we should expect that this is going to be a discipline for us as well, a really good and beneficial one. And really, there's nothing that we've ever undertaken in our lives that was of value that we didn't start out feeling like we were not good at. And then over time, as we returned and kept honing that skill, we got better at it. And then began to derive not just benefit, but joy from the work.
That's awesome. I think that's a great call to action, a great place to cap off our discussion for today, and really set us up for the rest of the episodes that we're going to be talking about after this. So thanks so much, Jen. And thanks again for joining us for the Women of the Word podcast. Tune in next week where Jen's going to share some of the craziest excuses she's heard about why someone has come to a study unprepared, and we'll also look at overcoming some common barriers to Bible study. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you all here again next week.
I'm Jen Wilkin.
And I'm Lauren Santo, and today we're excited to announce the launch of Crosby's newest podcast, Women of the Word: How to Study the Bible with Jen Wilkin.
2 Timothy 2:15 says that we're to present ourselves as workers unashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. We're all approaching this book somehow, but not all of us are certain we're doing it with good tools and good principles. So join us for the next 10 weeks where we will look at some common roadblocks to studying the Bible, some good basic principles for how we should do that, and also some simple and effective tools for going deeper into God's word.
We're going to take a deep dive into Bible literacy, exploring why it's worth committing to over the long haul.
So if you're like us and you sometimes have a hard time knowing where to begin in your studying of God's word, I hope you'll join us for these conversations starting April 5th.
To subscribe to the Women of the Word podcast, visit crossway.org/women of the word. That's crossway.org/women of the word. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Women of the Word podcast. I'm Lauren Santo here with Jen Wilkin.
Hey, Lauren. Hey, how's it going?
Good. Thanks again for joining me today. So I thought before we get started on this episode that it might be helpful to kind of recap where we've been so far. So the first episode, we talked about the importance of Bible literacy, what it is, why it's important, why it's worth effort. From there, we went through overcoming a few common barriers to Bible study, how to actually get into the Bible for ourselves, overcome some of the barriers that make it difficult to do that. And then lastly, we looked at a few potentially limiting or unhelpful approaches to studying the Bible. And so maybe some women are listening to this and thinking, wow, like I've done some of those things, or some of those approaches are how I've been studying the Bible in the past. And that could be potentially discouraging to people. I know there's times when I've done some of those things and hearing that there's better approaches out there to studying the Bible can feel discouraging to know that the way I'm spending my time might not be the way to make the most of my time.
Yeah, I think discouragement and even embarrassment is the way. I remember feeling embarrassed when and I can even think back on because unfortunately I started teaching the Bible before I necessarily had a lot of good tools in place, and I think of some of the lessons that I taught in the early years. So like I wasn't just learning it in clunky ways; I was showing other people how to learn it in clunky ways. So I got to live with that. But I do think that we need to recognize that this is the secret that we're all kind of keeping. It's this dirty little secret that's in all of our churches, and it's that none of us knows the Bible as well as we probably should. But that with a little bit of help, we can start moving forward. And so again, we should just acknowledge it. And I always like for people to remember that the reason you thought you were doing something the right way is because someone told you that's the right way to do this. And maybe you haven't had enough years to recognize that it wasn't yielding what you thought it was yielding. Maybe you have, but there's a parenting principle that I'll just apply here as well. That's it's never too late to start doing the right thing, and so you can make good progress. And I think what you'll find too is some of the things that were perhaps helpful with a foundational understanding, you'll start to see just how helpful they can be as you develop a base level understanding.
Great. So we're all in this together. Yep. We've all been there. We've done some of the things that might not be the best, and so now we're going to help equip people to study the Bible for themselves well.
Yeah.
So let's get into these 5 principles that you mentioned in the book. What's the first one?
Well, so first of all, when we talk about principles, we're talking high level, right? And so we will have an opportunity to talk more granularly about how this is going to play out. But these are sort of like the guiding ideals behind all of this. And so the first one is we want to study with purpose. And so as we looked at in some of our less than helpful approaches, we've brought various purposes to our study, but we want to have the right purpose in mind. And so the most obvious statement that I could ever make about the Bible is that the Bible is a book about God, right? And I mean, I don't know anyone who's ever owned a Bible or spent time in the Bible who would have said, no, Jen, that is an untrue statement. Right. But unfortunately, many of us, though we know the Bible is a book about God, we have treated it as though it is a book about us primarily. And so we come to it asking, who am I questions before we ask, who are you, about God himself. And the Bible is where God discloses his nature and character to us. And so when we start to study with purpose, we make our main purpose that we will love the God of the Bible better through our study. So again, we're not just studying the Bible for information, we're studying the Bible for transformation. And it's relational, it's not just informational. It's the means by which we get to know the God that we say that we love.
So the first one, purpose, kind of helps just get our mindset in the right place. It's more of a mental orientation of how we look at the Bible, how we come to the Bible.
It is. And I think, again, you have to do a little self-assessment here. You have to recognize, do I have a very well-developed vocabulary about what's true about God? A lot of us really don't. And depending on our background, we might have an overdeveloped vocabulary about God as being super judgmental and scary, or an overdeveloped vocabulary about God being super snuggly and loving, right? Yeah. And the Bible gives us a balanced picture of who God is. But like sometimes I have thought about how we get married on relatively little information. Like, to be fair, you know, I mean, I married Jeff Wilkin, and I had this idea of who I thought he was based on the information that I had. And so now we will have been married 30 years this summer, and I look back on what I thought I knew about him when we first got married, and the things that I know to be true about him now. It's like things that I suspected or hoped they were true of him, now I know are true because I've spent 30 years learning him in a way that I just couldn't have possibly known him when we were married. And the end result of that is not just that I know him better. I would have said when I married him that I loved him a whole lot, but the way that my love for him feels now at the 30-year mark doesn't even compare, right, to the way that it did on our wedding day. And so when we think about the Bible as a means to love God, like many of us, arguably all of us, come to salvation on relatively little information about God. You know, we understand the gospel, the Spirit speaks truth into our inner person, we respond in faith, but we don't really know him that well. There are things that we suspect about him or hope to be true about him, and then when we devote ourselves to learning what is true about him, we see the same thing, I would say an even better thing happen. In a human relationship, you might learn things about your human partner that you don't want to know or that disappoint you, but that's not true about our learning about God. And so as we know him more, our love for him deepens, our faith in him becomes surety, and that's the work of a long time, but it is the purpose behind everything we do. It's not just so I can know about him, it's so I can know him and love him the way that I'm built to love him.
So when we come to the Bible with purpose, it's the to know and love the Lord more. So after we have that purpose, we thought about that, we have our mind straight. The next P is perspective. What do you mean by that?
Well, when we study with perspective, it means that we recognize that though the Bible is written for me and for now, that it was first written for someone else, for them and for them. It had an original audience, and when it was written to that audience, it was written with particular issues in mind, with a particular way of seeing the world in mind. And so what perspective is the work of getting into the skin of that original audience as much as we can. We're 2,000 years or more removed from some of these original audiences, and so what can often happen is we say, well, I don't really care about what this meant for them and for them because it's me time. When it comes to the Bible, it's me time. And there's a principle of understanding the Bible that says that a passage or a verse cannot mean something to me that it never could have meant for them. And people hear this and they say, well, I don't see how that could be true. I mean, a passage could mean something to me that it didn't mean to Moses, at the time that he was writing the words down. Or like, for example, the Abrahamic covenant. Abraham understood those promises that he received from God in a particular way. We understand them expansively because we have the whole story of the Bible, and he only had a little bit of it. But when we say it can't mean something to me that it never could have meant to him, what we're saying is if he and I were to sit down and have a conversation in the New Jerusalem, and I actually think this would be amazing, and I said to him, this is what the land promise that God gave to you means in my generation of believers, that he would be able to look down through time toward that and say, yeah, I can see how you got there. That is a connection point that matters, that makes sense and it's appropriate. But, I've had conversations. I remember one conversation I had with a woman years ago where she was taking the land promises of the Bible in particular back in the Old Testament and saying that God was promising her husband through them. Well, if I were to have a conversation with Abraham in the New Jerusalem and say, hey, the land promises were this promise that I was going to marry Jeff Wilkin, he would not be able to say, oh yeah, I can see exactly how that fits together in the scheme of redemptive history.
Yeah.
So this means that when we sit to study a book of the Bible, before we read it, we're going to take time to ask, who wrote this book? The human authorship matters, right? God could have just had a divine finger come down and write scripture, but he didn't. He wrote through human authors. And so we would expect to see something of that human author's perspective being used by the Spirit to communicate truth in a particular way. So we ask, who wrote a book? To whom was it written? Who's that original audience? And then when we ask that, we ask, when was this book written? So as best as we can tell, in what time period was it written? Because then it's not that hard to find out just some basic understanding of what were the cultural realities of that day. What were the historical realities of that day? Were they educated? Were they uneducated? Were they affluent? Were they poor? What was the region like that they lived in? And that might impact the way that we understand the way a book is written. What are some of the major themes? Because the major themes are going to show us what was top of mind for that human author inspired by the Spirit as they crafted the message of the book. And we would also want to ask, in what style is the book written? So we take into account what are called just genre rules. The Bible is made up of a bunch of different kinds of writing. We don't read them all the same way. We don't read Proverbs as promises. We don't read the law the same way that we would read poetry. Apocalyptic, like Revelation, is using language in a very different way than just a straight historical narrative is using it in the Old Testament. And so we understand that the Spirit inspires human authors to write with known literary forms according to the basic principles of those literary forms. So the first time I read a haiku poem, I thought it was terrible. It didn't rhyme. It was wonky. What are we doing, right?
It's weird.
Yeah, until someone explained to me that there was an ordered way that the syllables fit together, and then you begin to realize that there's a great deal of artistry and care that's taken in those poems to communicate what they do. The same is true of books of the Bible. When we understand the rules of the genre that they're written in, they begin to come alive for us in a way that we didn't see them before.
So those 5 questions, I can see how they're really helpful. It gives us some context, a lot of context really, to why the book was written the way that it was.
Yes.
But I personally, I'm not an archaeologist or a Bible scholar.
Yeah.
Where would I go to find this information?
Yeah, I'll just Google stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Well, really, the most basic place that most of us can get the simplest place is if you just have a good study Bible. And so that would be the ESV or the NIV, like any basic good study Bible that's been around long enough that we would know if it was having some big issue, underlying issue. At the beginning of each book of the Bible, they give you this background information. And it may not all agree if you were to read in a couple of different study Bibles what that background information is, but you'll get enough of a sense of what you need to be able to read through the book by just starting there and reading some information on that. And there's some other online places that you could go for help. But really, a study Bible is a really simple one-stop shop for that kind of information.
Okay, so we come to the Bible with purpose. We remember in our hearts what the Bible is, what the end goal is for. Then we ask these 5 questions to kind of orient ourselves to the book itself. Who wrote it? What are the themes? What time period was it written in? To help us kind of understand the book of the Bible itself. What would be the third P in this process?
Well, you're probably starting to guess what it is just based on what we've already talked about, because you can't be in a hurry if you're going to try to get yourself into the skin of the original learner. And you can't be in a hurry if you're like, oh, I'm going to take a thought level approach to understanding who God is because I want to feel deeply, so therefore I want to think deeply about God. And so what we're talking about in the next P is patience, that you're going to have to let this be a long game. And this is hard for us. We live in an instant gratification culture that says patience is actually not a virtue. It's something you should not require. And the irony of this for Christians is that by definition, the Christian faith is one of delayed gratification. We await a coming king. And so of all people, the children of God should be marked by patience in all things. But we live in a day and age of great impatience. We don't have steadfastness, or we think that steadfastness has only to do with enduring trials or with wrestling our sin patterns to the ground. But steadfastness also has to do with the way that we relate to the scriptures. When we think about patience, what we're saying is we have to allow ourselves to get lost a little bit and then to find our way rather than feel like we know the way immediately. So really the easiest way to think about this is like Google Maps. Nobody gets lost anymore because you can just pull up an address on your phone and get there no problem. But if someone took your phone away, you wouldn't have any muscle memory around the route to get there unless it was a place that you go to all the time. So I was traveling recently, and on the back of the seat in my airplane seat, there was a travel magazine, and it had an article on Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I was like, oh, I'd love to read this. I've been to Santa Fe a lot of times. I want to see what they recommend. And so I was reading this article on Santa Fe, and they're describing, oh, you should stay at this hotel and eat at this restaurant. You should go to this art gallery. And I'm thinking to myself, well, those are not the recommendations I would have given. Those are like touristy places. Those are not really like, if you really want to get a feel for Santa Fe, I wouldn't go to those places. And suddenly it hits me. Someone has paid for this article to be written to tell people where they should go. Well, I wouldn't have known that the article had an agenda if I didn't know Santa Fe firsthand from the many, many times that I have been there. And then it occurs to me how many other articles I read in travel magazines thinking, oh, I definitely want to stay there or go to that, and were they even true? But I didn't learn Santa Fe from one trip. I learned it from many, many trips, learned my way around the streets, learned where all of my favorite spots were and where the best places to eat were. And the Bible is like that. It's a neighborhood. But it's a neighborhood that you have to drive the streets of and you have to get lost in a little bit if you're ever going to know the lie of the land, and if you're ever going to know, oh no, this is where I go when I need help with this, or this is where I go when I want to understand this concept. It takes time.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen overnight.
This particular key principle that you're listing feels the hardest for me because it doesn't feel very methodical necessarily. Or it's like, well, what's the next step? What am I supposed to do next?
Well, and let's talk about too, just we talked about those less than helpful approaches, and one of the things that they're all guaranteeing is give a little time and get an immediate sense of fulfillment, right? And so what we're talking about when we talk about having patience is we're changing our mindset, and rather than but instead seeing it as a savings account in which I get up, I take the time that I have to read the passage that I'm in. Maybe I get to the end of it and I'm not really sure what to do with it at all, but it's time to go to work. And so I take that and I deposit it into that savings account, and I say, Lord, I trust you to yield on that in season. And then it has a cumulative effect over time. Those are two very different ways of thinking about the way that we interact with the scripture. It's not to say that we don't ever have a delightful short-term yield, but if that is our expectation, I think we have fundamentally misunderstood the way that books, and this most important book, yield up understanding and affection.
There's something to be said about being able to mull over something, ponder over something, even if I'm not really sure what it means. And I think that's just not natural. Even in like school or thinking of other learning environments, I've never really been told just sit with something you don't know. It's okay to just like sit there and know what it means. So I think it's just unnatural to think, okay, I'm going to read this, I'm going to spend time in this passage, even if I'm really not sure what it means, and I'm going to be okay letting myself come back to it later to continue working out the answer rather than just like trying to figure it out.
Well, and you may gain some understanding, in that brief contact, but you probably won't gain deep and lasting understanding. So again, going back to the analogy of getting lost, if you ever have been lost somewhere and not had access to a map or a GPS of any kind, and then you do find your way to where you're going, you never forget how to get there again, right? Because you had the right set of brain chemistry happening that it's now indelibly etched on your brain. And I think that's what we don't recognize, like with learning theory, is that we see that dissonant feeling of, oh, I know what I currently know and what I wish I knew. We see that as something to get rid of immediately, and that sabotages the learning outcome. You have to feel dissonance. Dissonance is the beginning of learning. It's where learning begins. And so if you medicate it quickly by Googling something or running to a commentary, then your aha moment is only going to be so effective when it happens.
Yeah. So patience is not only in we don't have to rush through the study or reading the passage, but it's also not rushing to the answer.
That's right. It's okay to consult commentaries and to read what someone said about the Bible. You will encounter those resources very differently if you've given yourself good time to dwell in the I don't know and to just let yourself sit in it and to say, well, maybe it means this or maybe it means this, because then when you hear what people who maybe are smarter than you, maybe have studied it longer, have to say, you'll be able to hear it with more of your own investment in it. Because again, it's your mind that you're to love God with.
Okay, so once we kind of wrapped our minds around patience, not rushing, being willing to kind of sit in the uncomfortable, that's kind of something that goes throughout the whole process of Bible study. And I did just kind of say the next one, process. What does that part of this mean, process?
So studying with process is addressing that question that we looked at in our previous episode of not all ways of encountering the scripture are yielding what we think that they're yielding, but there are good processes that we can follow. And I do just like to point out, this idea of process is not a new idea. Like, I didn't sit at home and come up with it. Now, what I did was sit at home and try to systematize what I was seeing was working. I did. And then I discovered that a lot of other people had done the same work, right? And I thought, okay, but you know what? In this line of work, novelty carries a high penalty. You don't want to be making up new stuff, right? And so I do just like to remind people that when we talk about a process for studying the scripture, it's not new. It is what Dallas Willard would call an old thing recently forgotten. So a lot of this is an active retrieval. It is how do we carry the good deposit from one generation to the next? Well, we use good tools. We use a process. And so we talked a little about the process actually at the end of our last episode.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it more in episodes to come.
Right. But just really quickly, it's moving through layers of understanding. And it starts with, my acronym is CIA, comprehension. What does it say? Interpretation. What does it mean? And then application. How should I change? How should it change? What should I do with it? And there are particular tools associated with each of those levels that can help you move through that process. And so too often, a lot of the resources that we have been given, like something you might go and buy at the Christian bookstore, they do comprehension and interpretation for you, and then they just give you application questions. And so a lot of us have become application hogs. We're just like, just tell me what to do with it. Just tell me what to do with it. And even if you get good application questions, if you haven't done those initial two steps, your motivation and your motive for actually acting on the application point are just going to be dulled. They're not going to be what they would be if you had gone through the whole process yourself.
So what is the last principle?
Well, I hate a little bit that it's last because it probably would have been more pious to put it first and even more accurate maybe, because the last one is that we should pray. And prayer is not something that you do just as an afterthought when it comes to encountering the scriptures. If anything, it should happen before, during, and after your time that you're spending in the scriptures. And so we pray before we study, and we ask that the Lord would remove distractions. We ask that he would open our eyes and give us ears to hear. We ask he would prepare us to receive from his word. So that preparation prayer matters a lot, and just being oriented and just being still, honestly, being able to quiet your thoughts and your heart before the Lord. And then as you're studying, maybe you're not like this, but I am. My mind will start to drift, or I'll start to think about like what I need to do after I'm done, or I'll feel that anxiety building of like, I have no idea what's going on here and I'm running out of time. So all of those things that can sabotage our ability to just be gaining understanding in the moment, we just pray and say, Lord, help me. I can feel my mind wandering. Or Lord, help me. Is there another connection that you want me to make here? Or is my lesson today that I need to trust you, that this is going to be useful to me at some point in the future, because I am not seeing anything right now. So working through that layer of prayer, and then we pray after we study. We ask that the Lord would make what needs to stick, and that if there were ideas or thoughts that we had that were foreign to what would be in the Bible itself, that they would just fade away. We would remember those things. Lord, help us to retain the things that are true and honest and just and pure and beautiful and lovely, and so on. And then I think we pray what we're reading. We pray the scriptures that are applicable to pray to the Lord as a means of writing them deeper on our hearts. So prayer should cover every element of what we're doing and not as an afterthought. It should be sort of an overarching principle for everything that we're doing.
Yeah, that's so helpful, especially too because some of these are processes, and so it can get a little
mechanical.
Yes, and the Bible is a book about God. God speaks through His Word, and so we speak back to Him in prayer. And so the prayer element is so helpful in keeping it tied to the ultimate purpose. Kind of relates back
and dialogic, right?
Yes,
it makes it a conversation instead of just a lecture of some sort. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so that's the 5 P's of sound study that we covered. But I know sometimes that you say there's one extra one. What is that one?
The bonus P.
The bonus P.
And it's the one that it is important to mention because if there's anything that I would say in the decade or so that Women of the Word has been out there, that people will reflect back to me that I think, oh, I don't want you to think that after finishing this book. They'll say, I finally know how to study the Bible on my own. Now, I do hope that their own personal discipline of Bible study is growing, and it's growing in process and all of these principles that we just talked about. But the 6th P would be study with people, study with other people. The Bible is not meant to be read in isolation. It's not meant to be understood in isolation. And so we need good conversation partners. And that means that, and this helps also if you're in a stage of life where you don't have a lot of time. It gives you that nice layer of accountability to stay in the process, but it also gives you good and meaningful dialogue partners. And so don't try to do it on your own. Another layer of dialogue partners that is important for us to keep in view are people who have written on these things throughout the history of the church. Those are also dialogue partners for us. So now I'm talking about commentators, people who have written things about the Bible. We shouldn't just read and study on our own and then never hear what people who've thought about this longer than we have to say about it, or never hear about what our peers are also seeing when we're in the same text. The Lord would not give the gift of teaching in the church if it were not needful. And so it's getting it in its right place in the process and understanding that I'm not meant to do this alone. My latest hot take on Christianity is there's no such thing as an individual relationship with Jesus Christ, because by definition, we're not just saved into a personal relationship, we're saved into a relationship with every other member of the church, local and universal. And so when we think about learning the scriptures, we think about that frame of reference as well.
So we never have to then we shouldn't do it alone. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jen, just for giving us this preview. I'm excited to kind of dive in deeper in the next few episodes, talking about the Bible study process in more detail. And thank you, too, for joining us for this episode of the Women of the Word podcast. Tune in next week where Jen and I will talk through the Bible study process, starting with comprehension. If you found these conversations helpful, we'd love for you to join us for the rest of this series. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We'll see you all again next week. Welcome back to the Women of the Word podcast. I'm Lauren C. Santo, joined again today by Jen Wilkin. Jen, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm excited for today.
Yeah.
So over the next few episodes, we're going to take an in-depth look at the Bible study process. And today we're going to start with comprehension.
Yep.
So let's just jump in. Can you start by telling everyone what comprehension is? What does it mean?
So people actually already typically know what this is. They just haven't necessarily thought about how it applies to how they're reading the Bible. Comprehension is what you were learning when you were in school, when you would read through a passage and then you have to answer questions over what the passage had said to demonstrate that you had actually processed what you were reading.
Right.
So when we think about the Bible, well, really any comprehension exercise, but the Bible in particular, comprehension is asking what does it say? And so it means that you're reading, looking for enough detail that you're getting the flow of the passage and that you could tell someone what you read after you read it.
And probably people sort of do that automatically.
We do, but I think, it's interesting. You might do it if you knew that you were taking a portion of the SAT and that you were going to have to get the answers right. Or you might do it if you were putting together a piece of furniture from IKEA and you wanted to get the instructions right because you knew that there were very real consequences for not reading for detail. But when it comes to the Bible, again, I think because we tend to put the Bible in a separate category, I think we think of comprehension, if we think of it at all, we think of it as, well, I'll just read it once and then I'll be fine, you know?
Yeah.
And so consequently, we don't necessarily give it the directed attention that we would something else in a way that means it's going to be memorable to us the way that it needs to be if we're going to move on to other stages of understanding.
Yeah, we have a tendency to just rush past this part of the process.
Yeah. In fact, I would argue that this is the most neglected of the three levels because it feels like it should just be simple. And in some regards it is. In some regards it's so simple that we hurry past it, and in others we just don't give it the attention that it deserves. Because I think, if you relate it back to the example of like putting together a piece of furniture, wanting to do it right, we don't necessarily perceive any negative consequence for hurrying past it when it comes to Bible reading. We assume that the Holy Spirit will take up the slack for us.
Yeah. Why would you say this is such a foundational first step in the process?
Well, because if we hurry past this, we're very likely to flub interpretation. We're going to base an interpretation on something that might not have been there at all, or we may have pulled out something that we thought was sort of the most top of mind idea in a passage, but since we were in a hurry, we might have missed what that actually was. And so when we slow down and give our full attention and place it within the context that it's in a particular book of the Bible, it's going to shape the way that we think about interpretation, and then it's going to shape the way we're going to think about application built on that. And so when we understand that these things are building blocks, I think if you even think about just in terms of a foundation for a building,
Right.
You want to get that first part right, or the rest of it could be all off kilter.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe let's go a little bit more practically. Can you give an example of what this might look like? I think people listening might think, oh, that makes a lot of sense, but then if they open their Bibles, like, well, I guess I don't really know exactly what I'm looking for. What steps am I supposed to take? What questions am I supposed to ask? So can you walk us through what this might look like?
Yeah, well, so first it's good to think about which tools you would use for the comprehension piece.
Yeah.
And these are not strictly, it's like, I wouldn't say like mark a term over and over again and that's only for comprehension, right? None of these it's not as linear as it might sound
Yeah,
when we're
right.
talking about it here. But when you look at a particular passage and you want to just get to that, I could pass a pop quiz over this moment,
Yes.
it means that you are looking for how the passage was put together. So word choice, am I seeing a word that is repeated, or am I seeing a flow of ideas that I want to pay attention to? And you're also looking for things like, what are the names that are here? What are the locations that are here? Like a big piece of the comprehension puzzle that people will rush by in the Old Testament in particular is they'll see a list of names or they'll see a location mentioned, but we don't necessarily have the natural curiosity to say, wonder why those maps are in the back of my Bible and they might show me where this location is. And sometimes just even the distance between two towns that are mentioned is revealing in the way that we understand what's going on in a passage. Was it a short distance? Was it a long distance?
Yeah.
That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so part of the comprehension stage is allowing yourself to have some curiosity around what you're reading, and then look for the ways that the author has put together ideas. So like, for example, let's think about just an example.
Yeah,
And for the purpose of this, I'm going to use two familiar passages to anyone who's listening. I hope they're familiar. So the first one would be the Ten Commandments.
Okay, yep.
And then the second one we'll talk about the Lord's Prayer to show what this might look. So in the Ten Commandments, most of us know they're in there. We know there's 10 of them.
Right.
But if I said, what's the sixth commandment, you might panic, right? Because we know we're not there. And so most of us know, oh, there's a flow to them. Like they start with the vertical relationship to God and then they move to the horizontal relationship to humans. But have we thought beyond that? Like if you couldn't name them in order for me, then it tells me that you know there's some order, but you don't know a lot about what that order is. And I think we forget to think, oh, these really could have been in any order, but they're not. They're in a particular order. And so looking for the intent behind the way ideas are being presented, and not necessarily trying to draw a whole lot. We're not to the interpretation stage yet, so we're not trying to draw big conclusions. And I think that's the part that makes us hurry past comprehension, because we want to get to that.
Yeah,
That's the sweet spot, right? But you can't get to that spot unless you slow down. So if you were reading the Ten Commandments, wanting to have a comprehension level understanding of them, first of all, I would hope you wouldn't just flip to the Ten Commandments and read them, pull them out of the place that they fall in Exodus, because where they fall in the storyline of Exodus matters very much. So when you're thinking about comprehension, part of what you're comprehending is, why are the Ten Commandments given here when Israel is at the foot of Mount Sinai? Why were they not given when Israel was in Egypt?
Yeah, that broader context.
Yeah, there's a really easy answer for that, right?
Yeah,
Like, why
right,
would God give rules to people who couldn't possibly obey them when they're under Pharaoh's rule, right?
Exactly.
So that's an important, that's a comprehension piece. It's like, why does it go here versus somewhere else? Now, it leans, as you can feel, it leans a little toward the interpretation piece. That's what we want. We want it to be moving us that direction. So, okay, it occurs where it occurs because that's where Israel needs them. They need them when they are able to be self-governing or governed by God in the wilderness and know how to relate to one another in a way that they didn't when they were under Pharaoh's rule. So they're finally free to obey God's law, which is a significant theological concept that's going to help us when we get to later stages.
Right.
And then why are they in the order that they're in? Why would it start with, these first 4 or 5, the first 4 dealing with authority, God's authority over us, the fifth one dealing with human authority over us. And then, okay, then we get into don't murder, don't commit adultery. Well, why is murder before adultery? And again, you don't have to answer these questions necessarily at this stage, but it's important for you to be thinking through them. Why is the last commandment about contentment? Well, why not put that one first? So allow yourself to feel that dissonance of, I don't know that I've ever thought these things or asked these questions before, and pay attention to, well, that's interesting. This commandment is given a lot more word space. The commandment about Sabbath, right?
Yeah.
Or even the commandment about covenanting. Those are the 2 longest ones. Why are those longer than the others? Why not give a short statement like we do for you shall not murder? Give yourself permission to just sit there and think those thoughts, and then note if you can determine what the natural flow is of the argument. And you may not be able to. That's okay. It may take you 2 weeks. It may take you a year. And you can allow yourself to be patient with that. Or it may just be, if you're on a shorter timeline, that you did this good comprehension work, and then when you start reading about interpretation in a commentary, you can trace it back to, oh yeah, I saw that, when I was marking this section.
Yeah, so it's a lot of asking questions, letting yourself ask questions, be curious about the text.
And if there are things that are repeated, then mark those repeated words.
Sure.
And also another really good skill is to ask, can I summarize this if I needed to? That's moving a little toward interpretation because you're trying to get the meaning into words. But you might do looking up words in a dictionary or looking up words in a thesaurus. Another really useful tool here is to compare in different translations to see if you can get closer to what the meaning is of a particular word or an idea. So a great example of this would be, a lot of us grew up with the Ten Commandments in the King James. And so we think of the Sixth Commandment as you shall not kill. But when you look at later translations, it's you shall not murder, which is a more specific statement about taking human life.
Yeah.
In fact, the only translation you'll find out there that says you shall not kill at this point is the King James. And
Okay.
so that can help you. You're like, oh,
definitely.
I never really thought about that before.
Right.
Bearing false witness, what is that? Well, if you look in different translations, you'll get different ways that that's stated, and it can help you to get closer to, oh, it's when I say something that's not true about my neighbor. Because a lot of us grew up with that one being you shall not lie. So it helps us to hone in on the specific language or idea that's there when you're comparing different translations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. And all those questions are very natural and normal, and things that if I took time to think about them would probably come pretty naturally. Just I don't often take the time.
Well,
to
and
do that.
with the Bible, it feels like if I'm asking these questions, I either sound dumb or maybe I'm not good at this. Like,
Yeah,
this is what's so frustrating to me when people are talking about getting into the text more, and they're like, well, why would I ask these questions? Because you feel like maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe the Holy Spirit isn't speaking to me as clearly as everyone else if I'm not getting a lot out of what I'm reading.
Yeah, the questions could mean doubt or
Yeah, they
maybe
can
I don't
mean,
know.
yeah, that's right. And that's not what it is. You should be asking those questions. You're allowed to ask bad questions and learn to ask better questions. Because again, you're just learning how to do this, and there's no shame in that.
So that's a good example from the Old Testament. What's another example from the New Testament? You said the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, pretty much everybody knows the Lord's Prayer. And so again, you could ask similar questions. First of all, you would want to say, by the time I'm reading the Lord's Prayer, what have I read before that? What am I going to read after that? And you find out that the Lord's Prayer is actually in the middle of a whole section of the Sermon on the Mount that is talking about giving, praying, and fasting. And so when he gets to prayer, he expands it out and he gives this model prayer for us. Everybody typically knows it's a model prayer, but they haven't necessarily given any thought to, well, why is the order there? Why does he start with our Father who's in heaven, your name is holy? Why does he end where he ends? Is there any logical progression to his thoughts? Why are they such short statements? Why doesn't he talk more about give us daily bread?
True.
Then, it's a model prayer. So giving yourself a chance to just think through, and then has he said things like this elsewhere, like in the Sermon on the Mount? Well, the answer is yes. And so that would impact the way that you would think about comprehension. The comprehension piece on something that we've memorized, a lot of times we don't do it. It's overly familiar. It's an example of an overly familiar passage for us. And so to try to look at it as though you've never seen it before, and then because you would pass a pop quiz on the factual content of or the language that's there, but have you thought through the bigger questions about like the why?
I think too, sometimes when it's familiar, I find myself almost skimming it. Yeah. It's like, oh, I know what this says. I know I'm familiar with this. And so it's harder to ask questions if I'm skimming the text.
And so it really is just putting the brakes on, slowing down. And again, you don't have to draw big conclusions. A lot of it is asking questions and looking for repeated ideas or words or phrases. Like for example, in the Lord's Prayer, I'll often have people mark all of the pronouns because they begin to realize it's we, it's us. It's not. It's a collective prayer. It's a prayer we're meant to all pray together.
Yeah, corporate, not individual.
That's right. But a lot of people really haven't given a lot of thought to the significance of that until they start paying attention to the language that's there.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the tools that you mentioned that's important for this stage of the process is a dictionary. So if I was reading something in the comprehension stage and I didn't know what it meant, or there was a location that I didn't know where it was, this is a good time where I would stop and look those up. I would maybe take a break from reading or asking other questions, go to a different resource to look something up. At this point, is that what you would say?
And obviously looking up words in the dictionary or thesaurus is more helpful in shorter books that are teaching. So like the epistles or something like that, you're not going to be looking up a lot of terms in an Old Testament narrative that's super long, right? But there are times where it's helpful even in that scenario. So like for example in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts. Well, and then some of us memorized it, forgive us our trespasses. But have we ever thought to look up the word debts or trespasses and see what the definition says to kind of get our imagination going around, I don't think I've meditated on this. And so when we think about what it means to meditate on scripture, I think we think about looking for deep meaning. And we don't realize that the meditating piece can simply just be that repetition, that reading it again and again and again, so that we are ready for when those aha moments start to come. So you would look it up in a dictionary or thesaurus, think of some alternate ways that you might say it. Now, obviously, it's an English dictionary, so there might be some less helpful associations with that word that wouldn't necessarily fit in the context of the Bible. So you want to think about that with care, but you can usually pick those out. I don't think that's that hard. Especially if you're comparing different translations as well, and you can see which English words other translators chose for the same idea.
Yeah, definitely. That's really helpful. As people think about this, are there any pitfalls for people to be aware of, things that could kind of trip us up in this process?
Yeah, I think the main pitfall with comprehension is, I'll give you two. One is to be in too big of a hurry and to think, okay, I've read it 2 times or 4 times. Surely that is plenty, right? I'm good. I've marked up a few things. And the other one is to be unaware of the existing bias or lens that you might be reading something through. And that takes more time for us because, and so an example of that would be if you have heard someone teach over the Lord's Prayer in a particular way and it really stuck in your head, and that's the only way that you can think about the Lord's Prayer, because you heard this teaching over it. Or maybe it's that you heard it taught wrong one time. Or maybe you have some preconceived notions about prayer and how God interacts with us through prayer, and you are laying those on top of what the passage is actually saying. That's why the repetition and the slowing down matters so much, because a lot of times those are hard cycles to break. And sometimes you won't see that you were reading it through a weird perspective until you've done comprehension and move into interpretation and understanding what other people have said. So I would say slowing down is a big thing. You don't want to rush. Trying to have awareness of how you already are perceiving the passage before you try to view it with fresh eyes. And then thirdly, I would say not talking about your comprehension work with other people, like thinking that's just what I do on my own. And when I get together with other people, I'm just going to talk about like what it meant or how it changed me. But when we get into a room with other people and start saying, oh, well, what did you see as a repeated idea here? Or what word did you look up? We really do get some shared light from each other. And one person might say, well, yeah, I know that word is in here a couple of times, but this word is in here 6 times. And then you realize, oh, I got pulled into this one word because it was top of mind for me based on what's going on in my life right now or something like that. I needed this passage to be emphasizing something that it wasn't because I'm going through some stuff. Instead of, no, actually, it's talking about something else.
Lots of Bible study discussions that I've been in focus heavily on the interpretation application side of it. We don't really discuss the comprehension. It feels kind of like
busy work.
Yeah, the thing I have to do before I get to all the other stuff.
Yeah, we think of it as busy work. And that's why I say I think it's the most underutilized, underappreciated step. And it's the kind of step that you only appreciate once you've done it for a while. You're not going to probably the first 2 or 3 times or even the first book of the Bible that you do it with, you may not recognize its value, but your recognition of the value grows over time.
Right, as you see how it impacts then the next 2 steps of the
and like if you've done good work with comprehension in Genesis, for example, then the next time that you study Matthew, you're going to have easier comprehension there because of the work that you did in Genesis, because you're going to start to make connections, linguistic connections, imagery, those kinds of things are all going to start to connect in ways that they haven't when you've invested the time in the comprehension piece.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything else that people usually get wrong about this part of the process?
I would say that if you don't understand genre rules, so I think genre rules are going to come more into play when we get to the interpretation piece. But for example, if you were reading Revelation and you're getting all of this really colorful imagery, and you are trying to mark a repeated image, and you don't have a sense of like its significance in another book, then you could start to try to draw conclusions or emphasize something that maybe isn't going on there. But that leans into the interpretation piece a little bit more. But understanding genre rules means that, for example, if you're in Proverbs where there are several different forms of parallelism happening, and you'll see maybe not a repeated word, but you'll see a repeated idea 3 times in a row, and being able to pay attention and say, oh, this is not actually just strictly the same idea repeated 3 times, it's actually amplifying each time, that they're expanding a little bit each time that it is happening. And so that's a function of that genre. And if you're not aware of it, your comprehension skills might be a little off target, but you'll still be moving in the right direction, because eventually you're going to read some interpretation, and you're going to say, oh, I did see that. I didn't quite understand how the mechanics are working, but now I can see how that's playing out. Or with Revelation, oh, I did see that. I just didn't understand how it connected to another place in the Bible.
For people who might not have thought of genres of the Bible before, what's a good way for people to learn how to figure that out if they would have no context of what this particular book of the Bible, what genre is that? Where's a good resource for people to learn that information?
So a decent study Bible will have some of this in it. It'll give you an introduction to it, but it really wouldn't hurt to go and find a longer work on this. And there are some good ones out there. Literarily is a book that's come out recently by Christiane Aguilé that's helpful in talking through different genres. And then there's a book by Julia Higgins that's come out recently that is it'll take you on a deeper dive into some of the concepts that I've explored in Women of the Word, and will blow out some of that genre discussion for you so that you can better have an understanding of what you're looking at. But if you're doing a particular book of the Bible and you know what the genre is, then there are also some good online resources that you can go to, some good articles that you can go and find. There's not a lot of dispute around genre rules because they're not unique to the Bible. They're things that you can see in other contemporary literary sources of the time.
Yeah, that's a good point to make too, just the importance of understanding genre. Maybe another thing that's similar to that is, how does understanding and seeing the big picture storyline of the Bible help us with the comprehension stage?
Well, it's going to help you discern, like for example, with the example I gave of the 10 Commandments. When you understand where the Bible starts and where it ends and how it's getting from point A to point B, you understand the significance of the when of the 10 Commandments in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. So you understand where it fits in the story of the book of Exodus, but then you can understand where it fits in the story of the Bible as a whole as the Mosaic Covenant, and that's a really important skill. And so the big story of the Bible helps with all 3 levels of this process. It probably helps the most with interpretation, but it never hurts to start at your comprehension level place and say, where am I in the story? Is this creation, fall, redemption, restoration, and to plot where you are on a timeline, on a Bible timeline. And those are easy tools to find and easy tools to use.
How, after people spend some time doing the comprehension stage, how can they be confident or sure that they've gotten their comprehension correct or right?
Well, I'd love to tell you that there's an answer key that they can look at and they'll be like, oh, I did it right. But the truth is that if you had 5 people who were given the same annotating assignment or the same comprehension assignment, you're not going to get exactly the same thing from each person. And if you go and look at a commentary, you're not going to see exactly the same thing either. You'll see general agreement, and that's actually really helpful. I don't think we understand how really helpful that is, but we want there to be, this is the Bible, the Spirit wants me to understand it, therefore all of us will get exactly the same thing. And it's just that's not how it's going to look. And so you're going to have to let yourself let go of that a little bit and recognize not just that in the day or week in which I sit down with other people and talk about this, I'm not going to feel that tension resolve, but you may not feel that tension resolve for months or years around a particular passage. But I do think that you will find it's easy, to say how many times did you mark the word repent, and everybody can say, oh, I got this many, I got that many. Oh, I missed a couple. Like that's always really interesting when there's a certain number for people to look for. People begin to realize I read that 4 times and I still missed 2 places where it was.
Yes.
And so that's actually really helpful, because then you begin to realize the extent to which you are skimming or reading without paying attention to detail. But it's a crockpot method. It's not a microwave method.
Yeah, and kind of highlights again the importance of discussing this part with other people, because if there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer.
It depends, right? It depends on the passage. A lot of the time, it's all of us observing different things and sort of combining our efforts to show each other, oh, I saw this, did you see this? But then there will be some right or wrong instances. I mean, there is a right or wrong answer to why the 10 Commandments are in the order that they're in. Now, it doesn't mean that there's only one explanation for the order that they're in, but there are some wrong answers to that question. And you begin to be better at identifying which ones are not the best answers the more that you have read for detail.
Yeah, and talking about those things with other people may highlight things that you could have missed in that part of the process.
That's right.
Yeah. So you mentioned that more often than not, potentially, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer in the comprehension stage. And I think sometimes that can feel kind of frustrating. Like, why did the Lord make it so scripture is not just black and white, that we can't just read it and instantly all get the right answer?
Well, you probably heard the idea main things are plain things are main things. And so we don't have to panic and think that we can't know anything, certainly from the scriptures. But that feeling of, oh, why don't I get to know whether I did this exactly right or not? It's a little, it's the kind of thing that we feel when we're early in the process, because we haven't had enough time to settle in and say, I know this is actually going to get clearer for me the more I practice using these tools. And so, you think about someone who's a true Bible scholar who has studied the Bible their entire life. They're going to nail the comprehension piece a lot quicker than someone like me, or maybe you, And so some of that feeling of, I just want to get this right, is a little like sitting down for your 3rd piano practice and wanting to be able to play a piece by Mozart perfectly, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean that there isn't a beautiful and right way to play the piece. It just means that you're probably not going to be the person who does it on this particular day.
Yes.
But if you ever want to be that person, you have to be faithful to keep showing up and practicing the tools. You just got to stick with it, and you have to let your ability grow with the passage of time. But you're not going to always be in the dark, and it's not going to always feel as confusing as it does. Now, I've been doing this for a while, and I have to say, every time I make a connection that I wouldn't have made 10 years ago, I'm so proud of myself. I just want to give myself a giant blue ribbon and like toot my own horn and all that. And so really, I would say it's going to take probably longer than you think, but it's worth it. And then when you do start to see, oh, I am making better connections here, it's really just going to fuel your desire to keep going.
Yes, awesome. This has been really helpful, and just a good reminder of how important it is to slow down, ask good questions, be able to kind of linger in the uncertainty maybe, or the not knowing part of the stage of the process. Thanks so much, Jen. And thank you too for joining us for this episode of the Women of the Word podcast. Come back again next week where Jen and I will continue the conversation of the Bible study process, this time talking about interpretation, or what does scripture mean. Also make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you all here again next week. Welcome back to the Women of the Word podcast. I'm Lauren Santo here with my friend Jen Wilkin. Jen, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So today, Jen, we're going to talk about the second stage of the Bible study process, which is interpretation. Out of all of the 3 stages of the process, I feel like this is probably the one I have the most questions about, or the one that makes me the most uncertain.
Yeah, they probably should.
Yeah, okay, that's good to hear. So let's start at maybe the foundational level, like we did last week with comprehension. Just can you tell us what this stage entails? What does it mean? How is it different from comprehension?
So comprehension is asking the question, what does it say? So it's dealing a lot with just getting in your head, what are the facts around this passage? What is the basic structure of the passage? And then interpretation is going to move us to the question, what does it mean? And so that is why it's intimidating, because as soon as we get to a conversation of what Scripture means, we can all feel the weight of that, or at least I hope that we would feel the weight of that. And a lot of us have been trained into a way of thinking about the Scriptures that asks, what does it mean to me? And so moving into an understanding of interpretation that is just, what does it mean, is a big shift for some people, and one that they may not even be aware that they need to make.
So what does that exactly look like in practice? How do we make sure we're not doing a me-centered interpretation, and what's the alternative?
Okay, so when you think about interpretation with regard to the Bible, or really with regard to any book, I want to revisit those 2 questions I just said a second ago, right? So what does it mean to me is assuming that it's my job as a reader to assign a meaning to a passage. What does it mean is fundamentally different. That assumes that meaning is determined by the author and is discovered by the reader. That's very different. That means that I am not just saying, oh, I think this hits me this way. It means that I'm asking, what did the person who wrote this want me to take from it? So, I've written 4 books at this point through Crossway, and I never sat down to write one of those manuscripts thinking, I'm just going to put some words on a page and they can make whatever they want of it, right?
Yeah, right.
And the Lord doesn't do that either. And so we should assume that there is an objective meaning to what we are looking at, and that we need to dig for it. So I think it's significant that the Bible talks a lot about digging for wisdom. Like it talks about that action of digging, digging for buried treasure, that kind of an idea in some of the parables too. And I think we have a very real task to do that when it comes to interpretation. And digging implies that we would be using good tools.
So that makes sense. That what the original author of the Bible had to say had a meaning, and that's what we're searching for in the interpretation stage, not what does this necessarily mean for me. And that's a hard thing to do. I think it's natural for people to want to think, well, what does this mean for me today?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when we do that, and so you've already referenced this having sort of a me-centered approach to the Scriptures, we've already introduced the idea of the Bible as a book about God foundationally, right?
Right.
And so when we move into the interpretation stage, we're going to want to be asking, well, how does what I'm saying about God here impact the way that I understand what is playing out in a particular passage? And one of the classic spaces where I've seen people forget that and make a passage about them or about what they want it to mean to them would be Psalm 139:14, especially in women's circles. We talk about being fearfully and wonderfully made a lot.
Yes.
And the problem there is an interpretive one. It's not that we are not fearfully and wonderfully made, but it's an emphasis issue. It's that when you read all of Psalm 139, you realize that it's actually a psalm about God, fearful and wonderful. And one aspect of that is that I, his created being, am fearfully and wonderfully made, but that the psalm is actually profoundly disinterested in me and extremely interested in talking about God.
So that's maybe one example of how interpretation can go a little bit sideways. We can get it a little bit wrong. Is there another example that you can share that's similar?
Yeah, so the Psalm 139 example is an example of where we forget the textual context. So all we would have to do to correct that interpretive issue is read the psalm from start to finish. So you can see how the comprehension piece would have contributed to our understanding of that one verse. If we took the psalm as a whole and followed the flow of what was being said, it removes that opportunity, so to speak, of making the psalm primarily about something that it's not. But another example, so that's an example of a context issue. But another example that comes up a lot is related to questions of genre. So we touched on this a little bit last time, that genre is going to matter a whole lot for comprehension. It's going to matter a whole lot for interpretation as well. So I have had multiple times where a Christian parent has said to me, I'm just praying for my child who's far from the Lord, but I'm claiming that promise that if you train up a child in the way that he should go when he is old, he will not turn from it. And but I don't know, the Lord's taking a long time, and that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
And I feel so much empathy for a person, sympathy for a person who is facing that with a child, but I also feel a lot of frustration that someone told that person that that was a promise to claim, because that is a proverb, and a proverb is not a promise, it's a principle. It's telling something that's generally true. And so it means that basically, if we train up our children in the fear of the Lord, more than likely they're going to stick with that, right? And you wouldn't not want to do that and assume that they would come to believing faith. And so it's a general principle that parents should be thinking about. But think about the damage that happens when someone is claiming it as a promise, because then if a child doesn't return to the faith, then you have a believer, a well-intended believer, who is questioning the goodness and faithfulness of God, because they don't understand a genre rule, right? And so when we think about issues of interpretation, we need to be looking at all of those layers of context that we talked about when we talked about asking those 5 basic questions at the beginning of reading a book of the Bible. Who wrote it? That's going to matter, because that's the person who's placing meaning there for us to discover through the inspiration of the Spirit. To whom was it written? It's going to matter who the original audience was. We don't get to interpret it just for me and for now. We need to think about what it meant for them and for then. When was it written? That's going to help us think hard about what was life like at the time that this book was written. And then what are the major themes? The major themes would be something we begin to see emerging in our comprehension work, where we're marking repeated words and phrases, beginning to see what the patterns are in the book as a whole. And then that, what style is the book written? That matters a lot. The style is going to have an impact on how we understand the words that were chosen to communicate the ideas that are placed there for us.
And hearing you say that, that sounds like such a simple process. Being aware of genre, which seems like such a foundational level of the comprehension stage, can really help protect us from some dangerous or damaging interpretations that could impact how we think about Scripture, what the Bible says for us.
But it's also why the interpretation piece does feel so daunting for us,
Yes.
because you probably don't have a PhD in literature, right? I don't. You probably aren't an ancient Near Eastern scholar who can tell everything that there is to know about the Holy Land or a particular place at a particular era. You probably aren't someone who has original language skills. And so it can just be like, why are we even trying to do this on our own, right? Like, why don't I just defer to the person who is more qualified than me to do the interpretive work, right? Yeah. So, and my answer is probably going to be predictable to everyone who's been following the podcast. It's because you should absolutely avail yourselves of those gifts. Those are gifts. It's a gift to us that people have a gift of teaching and scholarship, and that they're able to spend. Some people devote their entire lives to one small aspect of interpretation. But again, we don't want to do that until we have taken a stab at this ourselves, and we don't like to take a stab at it because we're like, what if I get it wrong, right?
So what should we do with that feeling? Am I not right to feel that way?
Well, you are right to feel that way, but you're not right to stay feeling that way. And so, going back to an illustration I used previously, it's like when you're learning to play a musical instrument, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't feel absolutely confident to sit down and play something by sight the first time, unless you're a very skilled person who has done a lot of sight reading and is really trained in the instrument. And so, the big roadblock for I think for women in particular in the interpretation stage is you know that you're basically taking a crack at something. You're going to say, I'm going to try my best. But we have this overdeveloped sense of needing to get the right answer the first time. And the learning process means that you're going to make mistakes. But when you have given your best attempt at interpretation before you go to the person who's thought about it for years and years, who is proficient, then you will be able to identify with a lot more clarity and with a lot more stickiness from a learning outcome standpoint whether someone's interpretation fits with the way that the passage flows. Because when you get to those commentaries, they're not all going to agree with one another. Right. So you'll have to discern between what the experts said at some point.
Yeah.
And I've been a Christian long enough, I would imagine you have too, to have rethought some of my interpretations on things. I can look back on interpretations that I ran toward in my early years that now I would say, oh, I know more, I've spent more time in the scriptures, and I would qualify that. I would say that differently than I did.
Can you give us an example of what that could look like? That might help people understand a little bit more of how we can change or come to a better conclusion of what an interpretation for a specific passage might mean.
Yeah, I'll just embarrass myself right here in front of all of you. But I think this is actually a passage that I've actually heard it interpreted in some creative ways too, so I feel a little less bad than minus, that I'm the chiefest of sinners. But when I was in college, I was put in charge of teaching this Bible study, and no one should have let me teach anything probably at that stage. But I remember distinctly one week I taught on the parable of the sower, so the 4 different types of soil.
Yeah.
And I read the parable to the girls who were in the room, and then I was like, and here's what this means. Like, our hearts are like these 4 different types of soil, and so like you have a rocky part in your heart, and you have a hard part in your heart, and you have a part in your heart that's just grown around with all of the worries of the thorns of life, and then you have parts of your heart that are fertile soil, and that's where you're really seeing a lot of progress in your sanctification. And I'm like, peace be with you, and send them all home, right? And it did not occur to me to just turn to the next page where Jesus literally interprets the parable, and he does not say what I said. He talks about the 4 different types of soil as 4 different types of listeners who hear the gospel and respond to varying degrees, but only one kind of soil actually produces fruit. And so it's actually not saying what I said. It's talking about the difference between an unbeliever who gives an appearance of receiving the word and then the believer who's the fertile soil who actually sees the fruit born in their life. So I remember several years later realizing, oh, it was right there. Like, all I had to do was turn the page. And that's the best kind of commentary, is when the Bible itself is illuminating what it says.
Yeah.
That's an extremely obvious example of that.
Sure.
But that's generally true when you're paying attention to the textual context of a passage, that you get immediate help just by paying attention to what's right around it.
That's a great reminder of why context is so important. Why some of those methods that we talked about earlier, where we pitfall into, I'm just going to cherry pick this specific passage, and understanding what's all around it can really help our interpretation of a specific passage. I also think that story is encouraging in a lot of other ways too. One being, sometimes I think when I have to interpret it and then that's my answer, I can't change my mind.
Right.
And so being willing to know that I can interpret something this way, but then as I continue learning and studying the Bible, spending time with it, being patient to learn, that the Lord can give me clarity on what something means on interpretation. I can come to a better understanding of that. I don't have to think my first interpretation is the only thing.
Well, and there are layers to interpretation, right? You could argue that what I taught to that group of girls, it didn't produce heretics, right? Like, they didn't leave that room. And now I hate that some of them probably still remember that teaching and are like, and that just changed the way I thought about my heart. But that's, it's at best a 3rd level interpretation or application of that particular passage, because Jesus gave us the 1st level interpretation.
Sure.
You don't really want to contradict that.
No.
But again, it wasn't dealing with a particularly critical aspect of Christian belief. And so when we think about, oh, there are different layers of interpretation and not everybody's going to arrive at the same place, that's true. But it is also true that there are things that we all agree on. And those are, we mentioned this in our previous episode, the main things that are plain things, and that would be just basic Christian doctrine. But because we live in such a divisive time, we think if someone disagrees with me on something, I just need to, they're reading the Bible wrong.
Yeah.
And that's only true of those issues that we would hold in the closed fist of orthodoxy. It's things like the dual nature of Christ, or the doctrine of sin, or atonement, those kinds of things. And so when you're getting into a discussion about the different meanings of a particular passage, it doesn't always impact those big ideas, those main things, as much as another passage might.
And I'm sure we're going to all come across times when we have a different interpretation than somebody else. What are some other things to keep in mind? I know you said that there's some specific issues of orthodoxy, of doctrine, that matter a lot that we agree on. Those things, those are foundational interpretive conclusions that we come to.
Yes.
But what do we do if there are other things? What are some examples of some things that maybe are okay, I guess, to disagree on? And what's a good posture for us to take when we interact with people who have different interpretations than we do?
Yeah, so the way that this is generally discussed is in terms of 3 levels, and it's an oversimplification, but for the purpose of entertaining the idea, maybe for the first time for some of our listeners. It's a concept we often refer to as theological triage. In other words, it's knowing whether a disagreement over an issue is a heart attack or is a hangnail. Okay, and so you're trying to determine what level of importance we assign to the disagreement. And so the 3 levels that I've used most typically to teach this would be, you have essentials, so those are the things that define orthodoxy, and then you have convictions. Those are things that we should care a lot about and that we probably are going to fight about, but hopefully in a way that is honoring of each other's positions. So essentials, convictions, and then preferences. Preferences are things that we care about, but they're not worth dividing over. You wouldn't split into a different denomination over a preference. So essentials are those closed-fisted ideas that you find in the creeds. They're on your church's website when it talks about their basic beliefs. Convictions would be things like how people feel about baptism, or how people think about the end times, or how people think about what men or women can't do within the church. They matter. They're really important discussions, but they don't determine whether someone is or isn't a Christian. And then a preference would be something like worship style, or should we use hymns, or should we only sing psalms, or can we use praise choruses? They're things that you might really have a strong opinion on, but you recognize that your strong opinion is not critical.
I think we've kind of come to the conclusion that there can be different ways to interpret different passages of scripture. Some of them are more important of how we agree with them than others. But can there be more than one right interpretation for specific passages? Can people come to different conclusions and that be okay?
I would say yes and no. I mean, I think when we are in the New Jerusalem, we will have clarity that we do not have now, but I also think that passages can have layers of interpretation to them. And so, and I also do think that while it doesn't mean something just for me, like it wouldn't just be an interpretation that only Jen sees and draws something from, that depending on your circumstance, there may be an aspect of an interpretation that is more top of mind for one group of people than it is for another, or for people who lived in one time period than who lived for another, which is why we need the church universal. It's why we need the historical witness of the church, so that we can have the benefit of those perspectives. We are not all living identical lives, and that's on purpose. And that's something that can be an asset to interpretation, but again, not around those close-fisted issues.
I think probably for most people, the times that they're going to come across maybe some disagreements in interpretation is probably in some type of small group Bible study setting. And those times can be a little uncomfortable. If you're sitting around with a group of people, somebody says an interpretation and you might disagree with them or think, I don't know if that's correct. What are some maybe few guiding principles that you can give to people in small group settings or Bible studies, or when they interact with other believers, how to disagree maybe well, or how to correct somebody whose interpretation might not be accurate?
Well, always lead with charitability, obviously, but sometimes if the group is generally defined as a group of peers, then maybe the best best way to offer a corrective is to say, let's look into that this week, and to go to a more authoritative source, and then gather maybe 2 or 3 different viewpoints that are from a more scholarly space. And you can even show how those don't necessarily perfectly agree with each other, but there are aspects of them in which there is agreement, and that helps people see, if these kinds of conversations can happen and have some level of agreement to cling to, then in our small group we can also look for that as well. It doesn't have to be one person in the small group who's like, no, that's not right. Although sometimes it may be, if someone does have a particular level of understanding that the rest of the small group doesn't have. I think the important thing for us to be developing in the settings is enough trust with each other that we feel that we're able to say, this is my interpretation as I read it right now. It's like going to your piano lesson and saying, this is my version of this sonata right now, but I'm really still working on it. I'm not ready to perform it yet, that kind of a thing. I do think for those who have some sort of a teaching platform, this interpretation piece is a big deal. You don't want to get up there with something that's half-baked, and you shouldn't. And that's why if there's something that I'm still working on when I'm teaching, I will acknowledge, hey, I don't think I'm done thinking about this yet. This is where I am with it now. And then I'll say, but here is what another person says who's thought about it a lot more than I have. Because I hope that's modeling something, but I also hope it's being true to my own level of understanding and not projecting myself to have more understanding than I do.
In reminding us that it is a process, and that we want to be faithful to try to interpret scripture as we're reading it, to do that throughout our lives, but that it's a process, and that it's not like we're just going to read something once, give one interpretation, and then it's like, okay, I'm done now forever.
But it is really important to recognize that the starting point for interpreting is to let scripture interpret scripture. And so you want to think about concentric circles, like going out from the passage that you're in. What do the verses around it say? What do the chapters around it say? What has been in the storyline of scripture? And to let that be your guiding principle before you go to the commentaries. Because again, a good way for people to recognize whether their own thinking has been engaged in the process of interpretation or not is when you are sitting and listening to someone teach with authority, do you ever disagree? Now, don't raise your hand and shout out, I disagree in the middle of the sermon, because you may discover on the back end that you were wrong to disagree, like that was the good interpretation of a passage. But if you never have that, I don't know if that's the way that I read that passage or not, it means that you've probably blazed past comprehension, and you are probably not owning interpretation yourself to any degree. So it is important for us to have moments of disagreement, even with our most trusted teachers. Like I always like it when a woman in my own local study will come up to me and say, I don't think I agreed with how you taught that last week. And I'm like, all right, now we're off to the races. It doesn't tear me down as a person, and it's also really good for me to hear how that's hitting people, because maybe it's a failure in my communication, or maybe I didn't land on the interpretation that I should have. This is the stage at which we have to allow ourselves to feel how lost we are. It just is, and it doesn't mean that we don't try to find our way home. It just means that we recognize that it's going to feel that way, and that's actually what we should expect. And this is where you just get to that point of people being so discouraged in their reading of scripture, and so infantilized in their reading of scripture, thinking that they need an expert to tell them everything, because at some point they didn't understand something and they assumed that the Holy Spirit did not illuminate truth for them for some reason, either because they're bad at it or they're sinful or they don't have as strong of a connection. And the Spirit illuminates truth for us as we are faithful to the process.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about being faithful to the process. How can we seek to be faithful as possible in interpreting, while acknowledging that we all bring biases to the scripture when we read it?
Again, I would say start by, if you're hitting an interpretive problem and you're like, I really don't know what is going on here, it might mean that you need to go back to the comprehension phase and spend some more time there. Looking at different translations is a huge help. It's just a huge help. Thinking back through, did I pay enough attention to what came before this and what's coming immediately after it? Like, you're probably missing a piece if it feels like a complete puzzle to you. You probably have moved too quickly around the contextual pieces. There are some passages in the New Testament, I would say throughout the Bible, where sometimes there is a piece of historical information that is a big help. And to us, it feels like, well, how was I supposed to know that? But if you have even a baseline understanding of what a particular period in history was like, it's actually not like a secret decoder ring to the passage at all. It's something that to the original audience would have been obvious. This is one of the things I'm running into as I'm putting together a study on Revelation, is that book was read aloud to a group of listeners who heard it and understood it. And we don't. We think it's impossible to understand unless someone tells us. But the more time that I've spent in the Old Testament, the more I am hearing what that original audience would have heard, because it's assuming that they have this whole memory bank back here in the Old Testament, and we don't have that. And so much of the missing puzzle piece that we're looking for could be something that's an obvious historical thing.
Maybe another question that we can talk for the person that feels really intimidated by this stage of the process. I think being willing, or understanding that it's, we just need to kind of try, be okay, kind of sitting in that discomfort, being okay with realizing my interpretation is not correct. I think there's still going to be the desire to want to see what other people have to say. So at what point is it, I've done enough interpretive work on my own, but now it's time for me to go and make sure I'm correct? Is that even the way to think about the process? Like, I try, but then, okay, let me now make sure I'm right.
I would say when you're gathering with a group to talk about it, you're trying to see if you're on the right track. And it depends on if that group has someone who is more of a subject matter expert, someone who is doing the work in the commentaries to help keep everything on track. There should be, I think, some teaching element to that gathering. There should be some deferring to the opinions and the interpretations of people who are more skilled at the work. But I would say, think of it again in terms of the musical instrument analogy. There's you practicing at home and getting so frustrated with yourself because you're still messing it up even though you've done it 10 times. And then when you go to that small group setting, it's like going to your lesson, your piano lesson. So it's not your recital, it's your piano lesson. And then you have to let your teacher know, I've made some progress, but I'm still super embarrassed about it. And that's okay. Your piano teacher's not expecting you to show up and give a concert-worthy performance. That's something that you're still working toward. And so I think when we think about it in terms of that time where you're interacting with other believers around what you've discovered, you are not performing, you are practicing, and you're doing a group practice effort. And that's very different. That means you don't have to feel ashamed. You can say, I'm in progress on this. And one of the biggest ways that this can be helpful in a small group is if the time you've spent on your own has been spent using 2 tools in particular. One of those is summarizing. When we are able to summarize something, it shows that we are synthesizing what's happening over a broad sweep. And we're trying to really get to, like, if this person said this in 1 or 2 sentences, it's the elevator pitch, basically, for a particular portion of scripture. It's a really helpful and hard exercise. It takes a lot of getting used to. So summarizing if you're dealing with a longer passage, or paraphrasing if you're dealing with a shorter passage or a verse. It's writing things in your own words. I know from years of teaching Bible study, people hate to do that, because it's like you get to your small group and you're like, here's my terrible paraphrase. And it's like going to your piano teacher and she has to hear whatever progress you were able to hack out during the week. But again, when everybody agrees on what the purpose of that conversation is, it should be a perfectly safe place for you to listen to someone else's paraphrase and say, I think you got closer to it than I did. Or to read Eugene Peterson's paraphrase in the Message and say, oh, that's the direction he took it. And so again, we're looking for a little bit of shared light, and then we want to sit under some really good teaching that helps us know if our shared light was in fact pointing us in the right direction.
Yeah, we're not alone in this part of the process.
No, we don't want to be alone.
Yeah. So Jen, how would you say that the person and work of Jesus should influence how we interpret the Bible?
That's a really good question. It's pointing us back to the idea we've already touched on of the big story of the Bible, because everybody would know that the redemption piece of the cross is that hinge point, and it helps us to understand how the rest of the pieces of the Bible all fit together. And so we do want to be asking, even particularly when in the Old Testament, how is this pointing toward that? We want to talk about, how does the law speak of Christ? How do the prophets speak of Christ? How do the New Testament epistles look back toward the finished work of the cross and give us understanding of its significance? So those are all really important things for us to keep in mind. We can ask generally what's true about God and how does that impact my reading, but also specifically how am I thinking about Christ and how it is going to shape my understanding of a passage. But I do want to talk to what I think can be an oversimplification of that idea. I know that sometimes people will be told you should be looking for Jesus on every page of the scriptures, and that is speaking to this impulse that we just talked about, which is a good one. But we don't want to take that too woodenly and try to force things into a passage that a passage may not be doing, because again, some books of the Bible are very long. They're taking their time drawing out an idea in a way that shorter books might not be. So we should have as a general principle, where am I seeing this passage pointing me toward Christ and his work of atonement? But we would not want to say, oh, I read a page of the Bible, where can I see Jesus? And it's not like Where's Waldo, but it is a good frame of reference to keep in mind always when you're thinking about interpretation.
All of this has just been so helpful. So many good things to keep in mind. And I really think give people confidence that while interpretation can feel really daunting, overwhelming, even people could feel like, I just don't know if I can do this. I think you've shared some really helpful practical ways that should give people confidence that this is something that we can do. Everyone can do this. We're all in this together. And we just have to kind of start getting into the Bible using those tools that you've mentioned.
Yeah. I would just say, if you're feeling discouraged around this, find yourself some good co-learners who are committed to fumbling their way along with you, and be sure that you have access to some good teaching, some good commentary that you can go to once you have spent some time together doing this work. And I really think it doesn't take long for you to begin to sense the difference, not just in the way that you're working on interpretation yourself, but in the way that you're processing someone else's interpretation with a lot more critical thinking skills than maybe you had used previously.
Oh, that's so good. Thanks so much, Jen. And thank you again for joining us for this episode of the Women of the Word podcast. Tune in next week where Jen and I will look at what it means to apply the Bible, which is the third and final step of the Bible study process. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you all here again next week. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Women of the Word podcast. I'm Lauren C. Santo here with Jen Wilkin. Jen, thanks for joining me again today.
Good to be here.
So we've talked through comprehension, we've talked through interpretation, and today we're going to be looking at application, which is the third and final step of the Bible study process, although it's probably one people are the most familiar with.
Right.
So let's start this conversation like we have the other ones. Can you define it, and how is it different from interpretation?
Okay, so think back to a couple episodes before. We did comprehension, which asked the question, what does it say? So it was dealing a lot with factual information, with the flow of arguments, being able to answer some simple questions over a passage after you're done studying it. Then interpretation says, what does it mean? So getting to the meaning that was placed there by the author, not assigning our own meaning to it, but the meaning that was placed there for us to discover. And then when we move on to application, we assume that we're doing this after having done those first two, and application is going to ask, what should I do with it? How should it change me? So we get very practical at the very last stage, and it's the one, like you've said, that most of us are familiar with, because a lot of what we have done over the last 20 or 30 years is the application piece. It's the other two that we didn't have underneath it that we've done ourselves first.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of start with this piece. People want to start here rather than do the first two processes to get to this point.
I know I've used a lot of metaphors as we've talked through all of this, but allow me to introduce another one here at the end. We can think of it in terms of like salad, main course, and dessert. And application is dessert. It's your reward for having eaten your salad and your main course. If you grew up in a home with a parent who said you're not allowed to have dessert until you have finished your dinner, but a lot of us have eaten a lot of dessert and not a lot of salad and main course. And so there's a little bit of a relearning that we need to do when we start to use application tools as part of a bigger process and not as the process itself.
Maybe let's talk a little bit about how we know it's time to move from interpretation to application. When can we know I've done the work of this? Here's how I know I'm ready to kind of apply the passage now, so we don't rush through any of the other two stages first. How can we kind of prevent ourselves from rushing?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the complexity of the passage itself and on how much time you have had to spend in it. You know, a lot of the resources that we're given can give us the impression that application is something that you do immediately. And sometimes it is, honestly, sometimes it is. The simplest way to reach the application stage is to have the Holy Spirit convict you of something, and you're like, I need to stop right now and pray about this, right? But that's not always the way that something goes. I mean, there are sometimes large swaths of the Old Testament, for example, where we just get done even after spending time in them, and we're just really not sure what we're supposed to draw from it for personal use or even for general use as the children of God. And so I think, you know, as we talked about in the approach, the 5 P's that sort of govern this, patience plays a big factor in this. You don't want to rush application. You also don't want to squelch an application that the Spirit is clearly giving to you that might arise in the moment.
You mentioned this briefly, but talking about how the Holy Spirit can sometimes prompt us to something that we convict us of ways we should or shouldn't be acting, an easy application potentially for a passage.
Or encourage or exhort,
Right. What other role should prayer take in the application process?
Yeah, I do think that the prayer element is, if you don't already know what you should do with it, then you can obviously commit to pray that the Lord would show you how you're supposed to react or respond to what you're seeing there. And then if you do know what you should do with it, then you can employ prayer to confess or to request whatever it is that is being drawn out of the passage for you.
Really helpful.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, most people are going to be really familiar with this stage of the process. We don't need to spend a lot of time defining it. It's pretty self-explanatory, but potentially people aren't necessarily utilizing this step of the process correctly, or there could be some misconceptions that could be helpful to hear from you on to kind of guide us in this part of the process. So maybe one question to that end is, should we have an application for every single thing that we read in Scripture?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, there is an application, but it may be that it requires several chapters for you to make. Some, there will be a single verse that there's something that you can apply. And so we've talked about genre, we've talked about different styles of writing, and depending on the kind of writing you're in, you may have greater or lesser frequency of pausing to have an application point. So like, if you've ever read through Proverbs, I don't know how people read through Proverbs in a month in a way that they're able to like take it all in, because you have to stop literally every verse if you were thinking about, oh, what do I do with this? There's something to do at every point. But that's not the way that the book of Isaiah is, for example. You might go on for several chapters thinking, I'm really not sure what to do with any of this. And that's okay, because application can be both the work of a moment and the work of a lifetime and somewhere in between. And so when we recognize that, we can also recognize that while we may have had an in the moment application, it might be pointing us to additional layers of application. In fact, I would say is I think there are cumulative application points that we begin to be better at drawing on the more time we have spent in the scriptures.
That's a good point. So maybe speak a little bit to when we find some, like when we're ready to apply a passage. Does application always have to be something that's going to change my actions or change my behavior, or is gaining new knowledge or a new way to think about something enough? Does that count, quote unquote, as an application?
Yeah, so gaining knowledge matters, and sometimes, like we said, you need that knowledge to sit and soak for a little bit. It needs to take on some time. In fact, it's funny. One of the quotes out of Women of the Word that I get the most questions about is in the book. I said something to the effect of course, knowledge for knowledge's sake would be sinful, and people read that and I think thought I meant that learning was potentially sinful. I mean, knowledge itself elevates. Knowledge that is just for the purpose of me feeling awesome about me, but knowledge that is over the course of a lifetime revealing to me the nature and character of God is never knowledge just for knowledge's sake, right? We've talked about how we're learning because it's relational, and so but that relational knowledge that we're gaining doesn't always immediately yield something that we know what to do with it. Sometimes it does. So anyone who's done my studies knows that one of my repeated application questions is what did I learn is true about God? So for example, I learned that God is omniscient in a particular passage. He knows all things. And then the general templated application question is knowing that God is omniscient shows me that I am, then I have to see myself in relationship to it. Oh, I'm limited in my knowledge. So that should do something. That should impact the way I think about myself and then therefore the way that I live my life. So then the follow-up question is therefore I will. And so an example of an answer to that would be I will trust that the God who knows all things is capable of managing all things. That would be an example of an application point. Well, trust is sort of a vague concept. Am I going to pray that way? Am I going to live that way? Am I going to speak that way? Is that going to shape my current relationships differently? Because if I really think God knows all things, then am I going to run around trying to know all things about what my kids are into or about what my husband's into? Or am I able to trust the Lord that the Lord can manage all of that? So you can see how the application idea can take on layers and can be a source of meditation, which expands and makes me think deeper and deeper about how I might respond. I think a good general, if you were to ask me what is the one application question that the Bible is asking as a whole, what is it calling me to? It would be holy for I'm holy. So like when I'm reading, I should be asking, how do I grow in holiness as a response to what I'm reading? So that's the overarching idea, but then that can filter down into a lot of different ways of thinking about application.
So thinking of that, there's different ways of application. Can people apply one passage different ways, and is that okay?
Yeah, we would expect that people would have different takes on the application of a passage, but they shouldn't be completely unrelated to one another. And this actually points us back to something we talked about in a previous episode. Before we can talk about what a passage means for me and for now, we need to first have spent time talking about what a passage meant for them and for then. That's the original audience. So that has to do with those interpretive questions we talked about, asking the 5 basic questions of a book and trying to get into the skin of the original hearers. And then after we ask what did it mean for them and for then, we want to ask, therefore, what does it mean for us and for always? What does it mean for the church? This, I would say, is the most underutilized aspect of application as we see it expressed in the church today, because we're so individualistic in our culture that we're not even very interested in that layer of application. What we're really interested in is for me and for now. But if I don't understand how something relates to the church as a whole, then I'm more likely to come up with a personal application that is so personal that it is not honoring to the way that the passage is speaking to a general audience.
What are some other good application questions for people to keep in mind? Those are great ones. And I'm sure I sometimes have a hard time thinking about that broader church corporate application questions. So that's really helpful. What are some other ones that people should keep in mind?
Well, so when I'm writing application questions, I'm always thinking, how can I hit as many people in the room as possible? And so I'll think through just some general categories, but they're also helpful to me personally. So whatever the truth is that I have seen emerge that I know that I need to apply, I'm going to ask, how does this truth change the way, so you can hear the action point in it, how does this truth change the way that I think, speak, act, pray? So think, speak, act, pray. You don't have to ask all 4 of those for a given truth. You could certainly, as a personal exercise, think through every aspect of those. But if you're leading a small group, for example, and you want to draw out an application point, you could choose 1. You could choose 2. You could say, based on what I know is going on in this group, which of these do they most need to deal with? If you know that there's a real issue with people committing sins of the tongue, you might spend all of your time thinking about the speak element, but then you could point them to how the thinking element is fueling the speaking element. So you can see how, but think, speak, act, pray is a really good way to think about application questions. And then related to the idea of what does it mean for us and for always is to ask people to think of application in terms of concentric circles of influence or contact. So how does this truth impact my home, church, community, state, nation, the world? If we were to actually start living this, how would it impact those spheres? If we corporately did this as a church, how would it impact our community? If a lot of churches did this, how would it shape our country? If the Church Universal did this, the living church today, how would it impact the world? So those can be underutilized ways of thinking about application too, because again, we're so focused on me and my immediate circumstance, and we actually think that is the most beautiful and important way that the Bible speaks to us. And so that's something we have to press back on a little, because the Bible is not thinking individual, it's thinking communal more often than not. So, or it's thinking first communal and secondly individual. So then a last lens that I'll use when I'm thinking through application questions is to speak in terms of primary relationships. So a lot of times, and this is for a small group leader, this is really important. You don't want to say, how does this impact your relationship with your kids? Because not everybody in the group has kids. How does this impact your relationship with your spouse? Not everyone in the group has that. Everybody has parents, which is a really helpful way to think about, if you want to talk about familial relationships, you can talk about the parent-child relationship from that perspective of like, how does a parent treat a child? Not how do you as a parent treat your child? That's a different way of expanding out the question. But rather than even going to a specific relationship, you can say, we all have primary relationships. Maybe it's through work, maybe it's through family, maybe it's through your church. Who are the people you're most invested in? And if you were to take this truth and actually live like you believed it, how would that primary relationship be materially better as a result? And those are helpful ways for people to sort of bring it home and think, oh, I really do have a hard time with this coworker, and it's probably because I don't want to deal with this truth that the Lord has been showing me. So those are just some general, it's not exhaustive, but those are some general ways to think about asking good application questions.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Help us to keep some of those broader application points in mind and not just to focus on application as it only relates to me or how does it change my life.
Right.
Maybe now let's talk through some potential pitfalls when it comes to application, maybe some common areas of misapplication.
Yeah, well, so obviously, if your interpretation is off, then your application is probably going to be off too. And as is the case with interpretation, with application, context is king. It's always, it's always going to be the governor on how we interpret a particular passage and then apply it. So, like, some of the most commonly misapplied scriptures would be Philippians 4:13 is a really common one. And there's actually been some good teaching lately on, like, hey guys, don't do this anymore. But where we're like, oh, I can do all things, and then we use it to baptize whatever harebrained idea we have, and say the Lord is just going to be my support in this, or we just naively think that it means that whatever comes my way, I'm going to be successful at, right? And so then when you zoom out and you look at the context of what Paul is saying there, you begin to realize he's talking about how he is able to be content no matter what circumstance he finds himself in. And he means he can do all these kinds of things. I can maintain my contentment in all of these different circumstances. And so you can hear the misapplication would be God is going to help me be a superhero, basically. But then the right application would be anytime that I strive for contentment in my circumstances, I will have the Lord there in the midst to help me, and it is possible for me to be content. So that's then the application question would be, where are you battling discontentment right now? You've told yourself there's no way I can be content. And then look to the example of Paul. Paul was shipwrecked and beaten and left for dead, and he's saying in all these things he could be content. So how might you reframe your current circumstance in light of contentment? So that might be an example there. Another one that I feel a lot of compassion for, but that we should pay attention to and give its due, a verse that deserves its due, is the beatitude that says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." We've all been in a funeral where that has been quoted, but that is to pull that particular verse out of context. It's talking about mourning over sin when you leave it in its original context, that you will be comforted because you'll receive the comfort of the gospel. And so people will sometimes hear this and they feel disappointment because they felt comforted when someone read that to them at the loss of a loved one. And so I'm always quick to point out, well, there is comfort for us when we grieve the loss of a loved one, and there are passages that are talking to that specifically. It's just not this one. And what you wouldn't want to do is lose the beauty of the true application of blessed are those who mourn, because it is important for us to know that we do receive the comfort of the gospel just because you only understood it to be used in the context of grief over losing a person to death. So, is anybody going to become a heretic for misreading that beatitude? No, but you might miss a more important application point from that. When you had somewhere else, you had the comfort for the other thing. If you bring your lens to it, it's not the right lens to read on that particular passage.
So context and really our interpretation work can kind of help protect us from maybe misguided or self-serving applications. So talk a little bit more about ways that people could arrive at wrong applications.
Yeah, I want us to kind of revisit some ideas that we talked about earlier in the podcast because they're going to become very relevant at this stage. So one of them is the instant gratification piece, right? Where I'm like, I have a problem right now, or I have a negative emotion right now, or I have something that I need this to do something for me right now, and I need it to do something for me on my own terms. And so having a top of mind awareness of this tendency in us and of our current circumstance or our current stressors, and realizing that we don't get to impose those onto a passage to medicate some feeling that we are having. So that's a big one. If all of your application only makes you feel good or encouraged, you're probably missing the part where you're convicted. If all of it makes you feel convicted, then you're probably missing the part where you are encouraged. And so we should also expect, thinking back to another idea we talked about earlier, magic 8-ball approach. If you are looking to apply something to your specific situation as a means of having certainty where you have uncertainty about something you should do, then you are probably misapplying a passage because you are, again, asking the Bible to do something that it's not designed to do. That overarching question I said that captures the heart of application was, be holy for I am holy, not make good decisions and God will bless you, right? And so when we think about application, we don't necessarily want to be reading a passage and say, well, I'm not going to say necessarily, we do not want to be reading a passage and say, oh, I think I'm supposed to buy this house or this car or take this job. We should be thinking, what kind of a person am I going to be as I live in this house or drive this car or take this job? It doesn't do us any good to marry the right person if we're the wrong person. So when you think about application questions, think about character formation as your watchword rather than circumstance manipulation.
Okay, so this was the last step of the Bible study process, application. Over the course of the past 3 weeks, we've talked through the whole process. So comprehension, interpretation, application. I'm sure there's people listening who think that was a lot of information. This feels really overwhelming. What would you say to somebody who's feeling a little intimidated by this whole process that we just outlined?
So really the metaphor that we use in Women of the Word is applicable here. We're recognizing the mountain of our ignorance, right? We're recognizing that there's something between us and the knowledge of God that we wish that we had. And if you want to move a mountain, you move it one spoonful at a time. So you take up your spoon and you do the work for the day, the work that you know that you can do. You make a good start and you know that there will be a cumulative effect. You're going to take that long-term view. You're going to be patient with yourself. You're not going to expect that you can do it on your own. And you're going to surround yourself with people who can help you on the journey, both physical people that you know and can have dialogue with, and then dialogue partners who have written commentaries or who can give you the teaching pieces that you need. But again, we're going to have to let it play out. You should feel the right level of intimidation and also the very right level of encouragement as well, because the Lord does want to make himself known to us. And so if we will take the steps of obedience, he's going to meet us. He's going to meet us in the scriptures, and he's going to show us who he is.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jen, for joining me today. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of the Women of the Word podcast. Join us again next week where Jen and I are going to discuss a range of different Bible study tools, from study Bibles to journals to commentaries. We'll talk about them all. So make sure to subscribe if you've enjoyed this conversation so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you all here again next week. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Women of the Word podcast. I'm Lauren C. Santo, here again with Jen Wilkin. So, Jen, today's episode is going to be completely different from all the ones that we've done up to this point. So rather than look at a specific principle or method of Bible study, we're going to talk about a range of Bible study tools that people can use to help facilitate their study, and whether or not they're helpful or useful, or if you recommend them or anything you would recommend, just things that people can have as they study the Bible to help.
Yeah, great.
So we're going to start with an easy one, a physical Bible, which honestly could kind of be, not many people bring them to church anymore. Right? People just have Bibles on their phone. So is a physical Bible a helpful tool when people are doing Bible study?
It is a helpful tool. A lot of this can depend on how you learn. I think people will know know better than I do, obviously, what their learning style is. I'm a very visual learner, and so for me, having a physical copy of the Bible, it does several things. It helps me to visualize where I saw something on the page, which is just something that makes learning sticky for me. But also, I think that it helps us to stay focused. I think anytime that you're reading on your phone in particular, like I know this because I teach the Bible from a platform all the time, and people will get out their phone Bible and then they'll get a notification or something like that. So it's not that you can't read in a digital format. It's just that it doesn't necessarily help us to focus the way that we might if we just have a physical copy of the Bible in front of us. And so, yeah, I mean, you can see I have this as a copy I've had since 2007. I've had it recovered, and I'm very like sensitive to like when am I gonna have to get a new one because I know where everything is in this one. It feels like an old friend at this point, and I don't know that a digital copy is ever going to have that old friend feeling to it. I personally don't make any notes in my Bible. It's a matter of personal preference. If you want to do it, you can. But for me, I like to keep it clean because I don't want like old memories of what I learned about a passage to bombard me when I go back to it. I want to be able to see it on a clean page each time. So I do have a Bible I've had for a long time, but it has zero writing in it.
So kind of going off of physical Bibles, what do you think about study Bibles? When would a study Bible be most helpful or useful?
Study Bibles are a really basic and essential tool for anybody who wants to take a learning journey with the Bible. It is important to remember what study Bibles can and can't do. So we've talked about when we went through comprehension, interpretation, application, sort of the right time to use a study Bible. You do want to use it for those envelope questions, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and then you want to put it away until you've spent some time in your Bible that doesn't have study notes. So like this Bible that I carry with me everywhere, it does not have study notes in it because we can fall into a pattern of thinking that the study notes are equivalent or roughly equivalent in authority to what we're reading in the Bible itself. So that's one aspect, is we forget those are not the inspired words of God. We wouldn't say that, but like in the way that we think about them. And then also we just want to be careful that we're not popping our head down to read an explanation of something before we've had a chance to let ourselves dwell in the I don't know and really let the sense of what we don't know settle in. So they have their place, and that place is at the beginning of your process, and then you can invite it back in once you've done work just looking at a clean copy of the text. But it is important to recognize that study Bibles are written by human beings who in some cases are writing from a particular theological vantage point. And so it's a useful exercise for everyone at some point to have more than one study Bible that they compare to just see how commentators handle different things differently in those spaces.
How would you go about choosing a study Bible if you don't own one? Do you have a guiding principle for how to choose that if that's not something that you've currently owned in the past?
Yeah, I think it's not a bad idea to talk to someone on your church staff and ask them what they found to be a helpful study Bible. You know, there's about 3 big ones that everybody, you know this better than me, that everybody would just kind of go out and purchase with a degree of confidence in them. And so you're really just looking, and so much of the information is basic. It's things like maps, you know, or defining doctrines or things like that, just some basic things that you would want, regardless of who the publisher is. So you're not going to go too far off the rails with any given study Bible that's been out there for a long time and has probably been recommended to you by someone who's sort of in your theological stream, where they can say, yeah, I've spent a lot of time with this Bible. And that's something I really can't overemphasize enough, is it's really helpful to the average learner, who I would include myself in that number, to have an access point, someone who does spend a lot of time in commentaries or in Bibles, to make sure that you're getting pointed toward things that are going to be consistent with your theological framework.
Yeah, makes sense. And you just mentioned commentaries. What role would a commentary play in this Bible study process that we've been talking about?
Well, you know, as we saw when we were going through our 3 stages, they definitely play an important role. That's a teaching component. And so even if someone were to sit and listen to me teach over a passage of the Bible that they had studied in, I'm giving them commentary. Basically, I've crafted my teaching from other people's work that they've done to bring together and synthesize ideas for people. So I would say, think in general terms of anything that's talking about the Bible is commentary of some form or another. And commentaries are best read after we have spent time working through comprehension, interpretation, and application on our own. But then they are very important. I'm surprised how many times I forget to tell new teachers, no, you should be using commentaries, because I assume that they would, but a lot of people who are new in the teaching process think they're supposed to read the passage and then some big idea is going to jump out at them that they're then to teach to someone. But that's, again, we need conversation partners. And so you're going to those conversation partners who are in commentaries. And just as with study Bibles, you want to get commentaries that are recommended from people who you're like, oh, I know that this person is a trustworthy person to recommend to me one commentary over another. Yeah, there's something to be said for reading bad commentaries, that you would want to do that when you have your feet underneath you.
Right.
You know, a little bit. That's right. You need to be able to have enough understanding to be able to tell the difference.
Are there any other cautions that you would say to people about using commentaries, just from maybe a big picture standpoint? Things to keep in mind, especially if, you know, I know a lot of my people I go to church with have study Bibles, but I don't necessarily engage in conversations with people about, oh, this commentary I read.
Right.
So study Bibles might be something that's pretty easy
Accessible.
for people to pick up, be able to use on their own if they've never done that before. But commentaries could be kind of a whole new ballgame, especially for people who might not have had a formal education in doing those for college or Bible classes or anything like that. So just any kind of helpful tips for people who might say, I just don't even know where to begin when it comes to commentaries or how to use them.
So my personal tips for choosing commentaries are, I generally try to get a range of things that are lay level accessible all the way to scholarly. And there are some of us who really are never going to have a real interest in the scholarly ones. I have to go there because I'm writing studies for wide consumption, and I want to make sure that I've honored the full thought processes that are out there, at least give them consideration before I say that's not going to be relevant to what we're trying to do here. But it is helpful to sort of understand that there are different levels of commentaries and different styles in which they're written. And I think that there are a lot of less academic commentaries that are out there that in many cases are someone's sermon series, a pastor's sermon series that was basically transcribed or reworked into a commentary. I'm a huge fan of those because the pastor-theologian combination is a pretty special one. It's someone who's not just thinking about high-level thoughts, they're also thinking about how to connect those thoughts to the average learner. And so that's me. And so I think, you know, my best case in point here is R.C. Sproul, who was so formative in my own thinking about teaching, someone who was able to take high-level ideas and then give them to people like me without reducing the impact or the content, just giving accessibility in the way that he spoke or the way that he taught. So and since most of us are reading commentaries not just for the sake of being more awesome at understanding the Bible, but for the sake of telling someone else what we're learning, I think it's really helpful to use commentaries that do use illustrations or do use metaphors, where they're looking for ways to connect the content to you beyond just simply, I've done scholarly research on this word in the Greek. Also, I would just say it is good if you don't have knowledge of the original languages, and I include myself among that number, to make sure that you use commentators who do, so that you're not out there trying to use, this will be a tool we'll probably have on our list, Hebrew Greek lexicon, like an online Hebrew Greek lexicon, trying to do a word study on your own when you don't have knowledge of the original languages. I would never do that. I want to get that from someone who I know knows what they're doing and use theirs if I need to use it at all. I actually think those are things to use pretty sparingly for the average person.
That makes sense. Let's just talk about that right now, since we just brought it up. So lexicon is a fancy word for dictionary. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, you know, you can go out to like Blue Letter Bible or some of these online sites, and you can say, oh, in this verse, the word for mercy is this. You know, where else do I see that word in the Bible? And there's some degree of usefulness that someone like me who does not know what's going on might be able to draw from that. Like, I might be able to see, oh, this word occurs this many times. But even that, you wouldn't want to make a major point in your thinking around that unless you were certain that the occurrences were all being communicated the same way. And I wouldn't necessarily know that, right?
Right.
So I just try to give a wide berth to those things because I don't know the original languages, but praise God, there are people who do, who devoted their entire lives to being able to do that. And that's a gift to the church. So I just want to make sure if I need to think through something like that, that I'm going to someone who does know what they're doing versus trying to put it together on my own out there just because I have access to a tool. It might not be the best tool for me.
Yeah, that's really freeing too, I think, for people who might not have had a formal Bible education to know there is such a wealth of resources available. But some of those things are very technical and talk about things that do require some level of scholarship. And so to know that there are tools that we have available at our disposal, that doesn't mean we have to use all of them.
Right, that's right.
So we don't necessarily, if you don't have formal education in the Greek Hebrew language, we don't need those lexicons. What would about a normal English language dictionary?
I'm a huge fan of this. So you know how you'll be reading along and you'll think, I would never have written this sentence this way, which tells you that a translator was trying really hard to pull something from the original language into modern English. And so two really good tools, two really important tools that everybody has access to are, well, technically it's three because the first one is a dictionary / thesaurus. So if you see a word, even if it's a word that is familiar to you, so like you might look up an unfamiliar word like propitiation and see what the definition is for that or what synonyms are that are out there for that. But you also might look up a word that you do know, like holy. And you might just see how the dictionary is defining it, or you might see some synonyms. What it does is it starts to sort of stir up your internal vocabulary around it. But then a next step, I used to point people more toward the English dictionary before we did have a lot of online access to multiple translations of the Bible. But now you can go to somewhere like Bible Hub and you can put in, whatever it is, John 3:16, and it will show you just that verse in major translations. Now it's going to show you some translations that might be less useful and helpful. But let's say that you just went out and you read that same verse in 4 major translations, like the New English Translation, the ESV, the NIV, and the Christian Standard, and just like look at the 4 different ways that 4 serious-minded translation committees worded the same verse in modern English, and you'll start to see some of that synonym and definition work is actually done for you by those translators who had knowledge of the original languages. And so that is actually a tool that I gravitate more toward now than having people go to the English dictionary, although I do still think that there's usefulness in the dictionary and the thesaurus as well. So I will just note, you probably heard it in there, one of the major translations that I did not mention is The Message. And that's not because I don't like The Message, it's because The Message is not a translation, it's a paraphrase. It's what Eugene Peterson would say if he were put, it was what Eugene Peterson did say as he was writing the Bible out in plain English for his own local church congregation. So I think it's beautiful, I think it is helpful, but it's not a word for word or thought for thought translation. And so if you think about that paraphrase and any other paraphrase out there in the category of a commentary instead of a translation, it can help you. So they're useful in our understanding, but they may only give sort of a sliver of an interpretation of a verse instead of a wider understanding of it.
So the 3 things that you mentioned of the thesaurus and the dictionary and looking at things in different translations, I think that's a good reminder that just because we're familiar with a verse doesn't mean that I know exactly what that means.
That's right. And those are all, as we looked at, as we were talking about interpretation and comprehension, those are tools that can help with comprehension and interpretation, because if you do enough comparing, enough thinking about the way things are worded, then you're ready to do the work of summarizing or paraphrasing, those 2 skills that are important to starting to ask, what does it mean? Because if you can summarize something, or if you can write it in your own words, even if you write it in your own words badly, as we talked about, or if you write a summary that's not awesome, you're still moving toward you doing the work of interpretation. And then when you read someone else's summarizing thought or paraphrase, you have to bump your own up against it.
Okay, let's take a little bit of a turn in this conversation and talk about some other types of tools.
Okay.
You said that in your physical Bible you don't take notes.
I don't.
Do you take notes in any other capacity?
Oh yeah.
Okay, tell us about your process.
Yeah, so if you've ever done one of my studies, or even if you've read one of the Word, you know that I recommend getting a copy of the text that you can mark on. Because one of the reasons I don't write in my personal Bible is the amount and type of writing that I'm hoping people will do as they're going through the learning process is greater than will fit in here. And also, if this is some special gift that someone gave you, you're not going to risk writing something that you might have to scribble through or rethink. You want to write things in there that are of lasting significance.
Yes.
And so I get a nice clean copy of the text. And when Women of the Word was written, actually, I was pointing people toward copying things a chapter at a time off of online resources. But in the intervening years, miracle of miracles, now we can get scripture journals that are affordable and beautiful. So you get an entire book of the Bible that is in a journal format with room for you to take notes and room for you to mark on the text with space in between. And I love them so much because it keeps everything in one place. And so when I am focusing on one particular book of the Bible, I get my scripture journal and I get my colored pencils, which I know we'll probably talk about in just a minute. And when we talked about having a physical copy of the Bible, right, there's another step in here for repetitive reading that is a huge help, and that is an audio version of the Bible. So I start listening to the book on repeat, and I start reading the book on repeat, and I keep my little journal with me because as insights start to come, or as questions start to arise, or as I start to hear repeated ideas and themes, I just start jotting them in there. And so I keep it on me all the time. Like sometimes I pull into the parking lot after driving down the road, and I'm like, I gotta note some things in there before I forget them, or whatever it is. But then I know right where that journal is, and if I ever want to go back, even if after I'm done studying that book, I can go back and find that journal and look in there and say, oh yeah, and I'll know even if I find something in a commentary, I'll know the page number where I found it, so I can get back to it. So for me, it's a really useful way to keep everything in one place, but also it's free of cross references, it's free of any kind of commentary, and so it really is good to force you to focus on just what you're reading, and you can't jump around other books of the Bible. It forces you to stay put too.
Right, helps in that repetitive reading and too, just in that. So you mentioned that you use colored pencils to take your notes. Do you have any other recommendations? Should everyone go out to Target and buy a pack of colored pencils?
Yeah, I'm actually more of a colored pen girl myself, and you really want to get the ones that don't soak all the way through the page, but now we're descending into insanity, aren't we? There are all kinds of weird preferences you can develop around the colored pencil thing, and depending on the type of genre that you're in, you would mark differently, as we talked about a little bit already, but the goal of marking those repeated words or phrases, or of like illustrating an idea out of the margin, anything like that, is something that we don't always think about. It's so that I have my scripture journal and I can flip through it and I get a visual sense of, oh, he talked about reconciliation here. I see a blob of it here. I see a blob of it here. I see a blob, and it helps you work toward an outline structure of the book. Even if it's not a well-defined outline in your head, you're way better able to get the general flow of an argument in your head if you've done some of that work as you're going through the book. I'm thinking specifically, I just worked through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and he basically is making 3 arguments in a cyclical nature. And so when I marked all of those up in those particular epistles, you can trace it all the way through, and you realize that what before felt like it was almost repetitive in a nonsensical way was actually really organized.
So we've kind of mentioned throughout the podcast a little bit just using and listening to different podcasts or reading books by solid authors that are going more in depth on a particular book of the Bible or a topical Bible study type of thing. At what point in the Bible study process would you recommend those? What are cautions to use? Anything that you'd say in kind of all of the world of other books, Christian books and podcasts, and things that people can go to that expand differently than what a commentary or study Bible would do.
Yeah, well, again, it depends on the subject matter, right? So if it's strictly commentary over the content of the book, then it belongs later in your process after you've done your work on your own and had good conversation with human dialogue partners in the flesh. But there are online resources. There are things that are technically commentary that would be more generally helpful tools. So things that are teaching you the big story of the Bible from start to finish, or maybe it is a podcast that's helping you do a reading plan versus a deep dive into one book, or maybe it is a teaching tool that is giving you basic historical timeline for the Bible. So like we have a thing that we use at my church. It's not a podcast, but it's a resource that we have that we use all the way from children all the way up through adults. That's the 40 major events of the Bible. And so for the children, we created a song that teaches them these 40 events in their flashcards, but the adults use the flashcards too. So that would be something that on one level it's commentary, but also what it's doing is it's helping you to understand if you're in the book of Leviticus, where exactly it falls in all of that. Or if you're in the book of Isaiah, where are we in the history of the nation of Israel? What are the significant dates? Because really, there are just a handful of historical dates that a good Bible student needs to be able to place books in the time period that they're in and understand a little of what's going on in Israel's history. So I would say anything that's dealing with those context questions, it's kind of helping you get into the ancient Near Eastern mindset. Those are generally useful tools. Again, you want to consider the source, like who is it that's telling you these things? But assuming that you've got a good recommendation on one to listen to, those can be helpful. But if it's talking specifically about a book of the Bible that you're studying, you want to hold off on listening to sermons or podcasts or commentary on that until you've worked on it yourself first.
So we've talked a lot about some physical Bible study tools.
Yes.
We can hold in our hands, we can purchase, we can look online. What role does curiosity play in this process?
Well, curiosity matters a lot, and it is depending on the curriculum that you might have gone and purchased. It may be one that is either encouraging or discouraging curiosity. This was one of the major factors that pushed me to want to create curriculum. So not just articulate a method, but actually give curricula that were helping coach people into asking better questions intuitively themselves. So I know that I can say, hey, you should read this passage as though it's a book about God. You should read looking for what attribute of God you see there. And you may or may not have immediate success with that based on how familiar you are with what's true about God. In a curriculum can ask guided questions that you, the learner, should know how to ask on your own, either eventually or already, to help you become better at reading any book of the Bible by the time you finish that particular curriculum versus just knowing the book of the Bible that you're in. So I always say with my studies, I have two hopes. One is that you'll have a working knowledge of the book that we're going to study from start to finish, and then two, that you'll be more comfortable studying any book of the Bible after you do the study because of the tools that we're giving you. So Howard Hendricks had this marvelous principle. He's a famous Bible teacher and teacher of Bible teachers, and he used this principle in teaching, and it was never do for your student what your student can do for themselves, which means that the kinds of questions that he would pose were questions that required work on the part of the student. They weren't the kind of thing where it was a leading question so that the student could feel like, oh, I answered that right and check off the box. They weren't the kinds of questions where if it was a hard answer, you just had to keep reading a little further down and it would give you the answer. And so you can hear in all of that what the good question does is it raises dissonance and then it lets the dissonance hang there. And so many of us think of using a Bible study curriculum as I'm going to do my homework, and when I get done, I'm going to feel like I got an A. Right. And so I'll put questions in my curriculum that will say, what do you think Paul means when he says, fill in the blank? And routinely women will say, well, what am I supposed to put there? Or they try to guess what they're supposed to think. And so it takes some time for us to allow ourselves to speculate, to think, I don't know, what do I actually think he's saying? Because we fear thinking the wrong thing. But often thinking the wrong thing is the starting point for getting to thinking the right thing. So you just allow yourself to work through it.
So that's a good example of a question that you help teach women that you teach Bible study to ask
Yes.
as they do Bible study. Are there any other foundational questions that you would recommend so if people aren't maybe familiar with your studies or they're doing Bible study on their own and not in a group that they can make sure to ask themselves as they're going through a process?
Yeah, a really good way to think about this if you're doing it on your own and you get into a portion of a book of the Bible and you're thinking, I'm bored or I'm confused. One of the things that you can ask is, if this portion of the book dropped out of it, how would the message of the book change? Like, why is this important to this whole book? And if you're having trouble answering that question, then it probably means you should stop what you're doing and do a few more repetitive readings of the book, because then it's going to begin to become more clear to you why a particular passage is there. But if we understand that everything that's in there is there on purpose, then it changes the way we might think of any particular part of it. So kind of a classic example of this might be the genealogies. Where you're like, this cannot possibly be important. Certainly not for me and for now. And so then asking yourself, but hang on, what would it have meant for them and for them? Because if it doesn't matter to me, that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It means I'm missing something really important because this has been preserved for me for centuries.
Right.
So why is it in here? Well, gosh, they didn't have copies of the Bible. They didn't even have a written copy of who their forebears were. And so this oral tradition that we're seeing preserved here, gosh, that feels like it might be really important. I can't think back even 2 generations in my family and name off who the important people are. But here is this important record that's kept so that we can see a righteous line that's preserved. And then why are all these lifespans in here? That doesn't seem useful. And asking yourself, rather than being dismissive or saying this can't possibly be important anymore, asking why would this have been valuable? And then being able to be patient as you wait for the answer to emerge.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
What would you say about literary imagination? Maybe define what you mean by that and why you think that's important as a Bible study tool.
Well, so we talk a lot about that the Bible should be read literally. You'll hear Christians say that a lot. And I understand what they mean behind that. What they're saying is like, we should take this as it is written, right?
Yeah.
But what we sometimes get into is a misunderstanding of that, which means we read it woodenly. And we really aren't trying to read the Bible literally. We're trying to read the Bible literately. We're trying to read it the way that it was intended to be read. And that's why we pay attention to things like genre rules. And that means that when we think about the way that it's read, we do want to have a literary imagination around it. We want to ask questions like, why is this story told in here and not another one? Like you think about the book of Judges, for example. There were not only 12 judges in the history of the nation of Israel. So why these 12 stories? And not only that, but why in this particular order? Because they could have been told in any, they could have been told in chronological order, but they're not. They're told in a different order than that. Why is Deborah in there? Didn't have to include her, right? In many ways, it feels like it complicates the book instead of making the book more simple. So what role does Deborah serve in the story? Why does the story of Samson come at the end instead of closer to the beginning? And when we begin to ask questions about why the book is structured the way it is, why the tone is the way that it is, why the character is presented the way that they are, and then I'm talking specifically about historical narrative here in this example, it would be different for other genres, then we begin to look at the Bible the way that it was written. Again, God didn't have to use human authors, but he did. And human authors used recognizable literary forms. And so when we allow ourselves to have that kind of imagination around it and ask the kinds of questions that we might ask of a book and book club, which is in no way to diminish the role of the Spirit and the inspiration of Scripture. If anything, I think it makes it more beautiful that the Spirit would work through human authors and show their unique elements of writing in this final product. But I think that it allows us to enter into the world and the words of the Bible the way that they were crafted for us to receive them.
So maybe talk a little bit about your personal habits and routine when it comes to Bible study. What is something that you do? If you could walk us through maybe an example of what your Bible study routine looked like, what would you have to share with us?
Well, I wish I could tell you that it was very well ordered, but you've already heard me disclose a little of how it sounds. That I've said it a million times already, but that repetitive reading piece, I just can't overestimate how important it is for people, and especially if you're someone who's felt like a failure at Bible memory work, and I'm getting older and memorizing is getting harder and harder for me. Repetitive reading is in many ways an adequate or a beautiful substitute for that, because you're gaining a lot of the benefit of the rhythms of the meaning, even if you're not getting word for word commitment of what the words are. But although I often do find that the word for word is getting stuck in there as I'm doing the repetitive reading. So a lot of what I'm doing is reading repetitively. I know it's an old joke, like what's your first step? I read all the way through. What's your next step? I read all the way through. You know, you just keep saying it over and over again, but it's actually true. And then on the later read throughs of a book is when I start to mark down what I'm beginning to see emerge, right? And then I read commentaries. I got to stand up and teach at least once a week, sometimes more than that. And so that means that I do have, even though I might have a process of repetitive reading that plays out across weeks, I do have a methodical way that I'm preparing for teaching. And I don't separate my teaching prep from my personal devotion. I know that some people do. Some teachers prefer to have one thing here and one thing here. For me personally, when I stand up to teach it, I need to know that I've felt it down in my core before I'm going to offer it to someone else. And so I have one discipline. And because of that, it means I am needing to go through and find the structure and think about what are the hot spots, so to speak, in a passage and how I communicate those clearly. So for me, I don't divorce study preparation to teach from my personal study time in the scriptures.
Maybe let's go back and talk a little bit more about this repetitive reading. Just as it's one thing to repetitive read the book of James. Easy, takes a few minutes. What if somebody's reading Genesis or Numbers?
I hope they are.
When people are reading Genesis and Numbers, what does repetitive reading look like when there's 50 plus chapters in a book? Is there a way that you go about breaking that up, or you read a chapter at a time?
You know, this kind of gets to the heart of quiet time culture, because for a longer book, you really probably don't want to read only 15 minutes a day. It's going to be hard to keep the flow of what's happening. In the same way that if you were reading a really great novel, you wouldn't just want to give it 10 or 15 minutes at night before you fall asleep. You'd want to have I got 3 hours in a day of reading this. And so I think generally speaking, we need to rethink a little of, if we only think of our interactions with the Bible in terms of a daily brief practice, some of us might do better to not do a daily practice, but instead have maybe 2 or 3 times a week where we have a much longer stretch, because you're just going to be able to think different thoughts. You're going to be able to absorb different things. If you want to have a daily practice as well, that's great. But I think sometimes we have sanctified the daily practice beyond what it is good for. I think it's great to have a daily practice that orients you to God being seated on his throne. But to say, and that is going to be my formational space for learning the Bible, is probably where we need to reevaluate, because there just isn't a substitute sometimes for having a longer stretch where you can just read.
Well, Jen, thanks so much for walking us through just a few of Bible study tools that we can utilize in our Bible study times. I know sometimes it can be kind of overwhelming and confusing. There's so many things out there that we can use to supplement and help our engagement with the scriptures. And so it was just great to have this short introduction on what we can do moving forward, some helpful tools to equip us in our Bible study process. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Women of the Word podcast. Make sure to join us again next week, where Jen and I will be talking through some tips for teaching the Bible and how anybody can teach the Bible. And yes, we really do mean anybody. So if you found these conversations helpful, we'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We'll see you all here again next week. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Women of the Word podcast. I'm Lauren C. Santo here with Jen Wilkin. So Jen, one of the reasons that we're talking to you about Bible study is because of your experience as a Bible study teacher and leader. And when I personally think about teaching the Bible, I instantly think of people like you or my pastors pastors or other authors or speakers that I trust who have knowledge of the Bible from a formal education or something like that, it's hard for me to think of myself as someone who can teach the Bible.
There is in the Bible a specific call to teaching, right? That we see as a spiritual gift, or however you want to say it. And then there is also a general call that goes out to all believers. And we find that several places. We find a lot of places actually. In the New Testament, you see it in the Great Commission, where it says that we're to go and make disciples, teaching them to observe all that he has commanded, which would imply, or actually would say, on plain sight, that those who are followers of Christ will by definition turn and tell someone else. But that's actually not a new concept at the time that Jesus says it, because back in the Old Testament, we have all of these calls that one generation will tell the next of the Lord's faithfulness and his mighty acts and his deeds. Deuteronomy chapter 6, most parents know, about training up your children and telling them as you're rising up and lying down and going about your way. And so we understand it in terms of the transmission of an ancient faith, that it's necessary that faith be transmitted through the business of teaching, and we're all called to do that to some degree.
Yeah, just the context can look different for different people.
That's
So your context versus my context,
different, but using some of the same skills.
Yeah. So I think it might be helpful in this episode if we give some tips for different people in different contexts on how to teach the Bible. So maybe let's start on just a one-on-one context, which might be the context that I personally find myself in the most. I'm not necessarily going to be standing on a stage talking to a bunch of people about teaching the Bible, which is fine by me, but it would be very common for me to be with a friend of mine going over something that we're reading together or learning together, or in a small group context. So what kinds of tips do you have for people like me who find themselves in just a very normal one-on-one situation with a friend or a neighbor?
Okay, first of all, I would just say don't make it weird, right? Like, can you imagine if you took what I'm doing on a platform and then you just dropped it into a one-on-one conversation? Yeah, no one wants to be talked at. In fact, as we move through this, you'll see that even as we get to situations that are large format, like I teach in, even in that setting where one person is talking to a lot of people, no one wants to be talked at. So this is pretty top of mind when it's just you and one other person. And so, like, don't make it weird. Let it be a dialogue. Let it be a conversation. And one of the ways that we always talk to small group leaders in my local church setting, which I think is also pertinent to those one-on-one times, is you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have the answer to every single thing. What you need to have is a willingness to walk with someone and find the answers that you don't have and help have some shared light between the two of you. So when you're in a one-on-one setting, one person is probably not authoritatively teaching another in any kind of lecture setting, but you can have some sort of more authoritative teaching piece, like a curriculum that is leading you through, or maybe you're both listening to the same teaching and then you're discussing it and trying to have your own reading of the scripture knock up against that, so that you can say, do we think this is accurate? What do we think was most helpful? What do we wish had been talked about? So it might not just be two people in a room talking about the Bible, although that can be fantastic. Yeah, it might be that you're pulling in someone else. But if it is just the two of you talking about the Bible, then I would say read it repetitively together and then compare notes on what you marked and what was interesting to you, and then go and have a shared experience of reading some commentary or teaching together that helps shape your thinking.
I think it's really freeing to hear that you don't have to be an expert to do this, and that we talked about the tools, the Bible study tools that are available to us in the last episode, and so some of it's just kind of being willing to say, let's go look and find those things together. I think it's easy, especially for me, to think, well, what if I don't know something, or what if I don't have all the answers, so therefore I'm just not going to at all.
Well, I mean, you go back to, again, do your best to present yourself as a worker unashamed. It doesn't say do your best to present yourself as an exceptional worker or as an expert in your trade. It says that you would be unashamed, right? Meaning that similarly to what we see in the parables, you took what you were given and you did what you could with it, right? So whatever your resources are. And so I think that's true in any of these teaching settings, is you're asking, what have I been given? And then therefore, what can I give out of what I have received? And how can I do that to the best of my ability and my skill up to this point?
Yeah. So maybe in a slightly different context, you mentioned the passage in Deuteronomy about training your children up in the way they should go. What would you say to moms at home as they teach their kids the Bible?
I'm not just going to address this to moms, because I know that some of you are not moms and you also need to be training the next generation as well. Whether we ever become biological moms or not, if we stay in the church long enough, we become spiritual mothers to another generation of younger believers. And so I think when we think about specifically with teaching children who are in our home, or maybe it's children you're teaching in a Sunday school class or a youth group setting, you're asking, how do I communicate essential truths in plain language? And my first formal teaching setting in the church was in 7th grade girls Bible study. It was their Sunday school class. And I remember thinking, I'm going to put in my time here until I get to go to the show and actually teach full-grown adults. And what I didn't realize at the time was that the skills that I was using to teach young people were the same skills I was going to need to teach older people as well. My husband, our whole marriage has taught children's ministry. He's one of our lead teachers in the children's ministry area, which means that he's exceptionally good at explaining complex ideas to people of all ages, and biblical truths are in that category. And so I think when you're thinking about having conversations with children, you're thinking, what is developmentally appropriate word choice? What this is a big one, especially with younger children. You're thinking in terms of what concepts are more abstract and what concepts are more concrete, because just based on cognitive abilities of children, you want to know kind of where they are cognitively before you start talking about concepts. And so this is actually with children. Christian parents have a tendency to pounce on we're all born in sin. We're dead in sin. We're dead in sin. We're dead in sin. And the kid is like, I'm sorry, what is sin? What? And if you think about it, the Bible doesn't even start with we're dead in sin. The Bible starts with theology, the knowledge of God in Genesis 1, and then it moves to anthropology, that we're all made in the image of God. And so I think when we think about talking to our children, if we would follow the pattern of the Bible, we're setting them up for a more foundational understanding. So you start by telling them who God is. God knows everything. God is in charge of everything, and you give them the attributes of God, which they may only be able to repeat back to you at first, but you're giving time for those things to take root. And then you move from there to you're made in the image of God. God made you. That means that you have value. You're precious. And we spend a lot of time there. And then at the point that a child begins to be old enough to be aware of how their actions are impacting others in very concrete ways, then they're very ready for you to talk about, hey, not everything is right, is it? No. Why? Because we're all born in sin. So I think thinking about the order and timing in which we talk to our children about things matters. But the key thing we want to think about is how can I take ideas that are adult-sized and then say them in language that communicates them age appropriately to kids, and teach them to read. Like if a child can read, a child can start reading repetitively and having a discussion with you.
What did that look like in your own home, in your own life? How did you teach your own children the truths of the Bible?
Yeah. So there's what we trained, and then there's what they just picked up. Right. Every parent can tell you more is caught than taught. So I'm going to tell you some of the structured things that we did, and then I'm going to give you a follow-up thought. But so when you have small children, here's how this works. You have a high level of frequency and a low level of depth, right? So you're able to do a lot often, but it's not very deep. And then as your kids get older, those lines are going to cross, and you're going to end up having a lower level of frequency that you're meeting together to talk about things, but a greater level of depth that you can reach. And so it's important as a parent to understand that's the way that's going to play out, so that you're not with a 15-year-old lamenting that you're not doing something every night anymore. You're saying, oh, this is actually great. We have one family dinner where we're sitting down and everybody's read the same passage, and they're coming with 2 observations and 2 questions, and that's going to make up our discussion time. So that's kind of what it looked like in our home when the kids were little. It was little bites of things. We tried to teach them the big story of the Bible, which I think is a huge gift to give to your kids. A lot of adults can't even tell that, right? We tried to teach them attributes, and then as they got older, it was let's read through books of the Bible together and discuss them to the degree that was age appropriate for the kids at a particular age. So those are the structured things. We never said you have to sit down every morning and read your Bible. We never said anything, that formulaic. But I really think that the reason that the kids developed a regular pattern of interaction with the scripture had everything to do with having seen Jeff and me do it regularly. They just knew it mattered to us. And so at one point, Jeff moved his time in the scriptures to later in the morning because he realized he was doing it before the kids got up, and it would be good for the kids to actually see him sitting at the table and doing it. So if you're thinking through like, what are they watching? With me, I'm like always mumbling in my bathrobe trying to put some study together. They were seeing me do it all the time. But for him, he thought deliberately about how to model that for them too. And I think that had by far the bigger impact is it's that whole, why do they love this? Maybe I should love this too.
And just that idea of setting expectations and knowing what is helpful and appropriate for your children at a specific age and kind of changing that as they get older. And
yeah. And paying attention to the individual child's abilities and needs obviously plays
not a one size fits all.
That's right. But what you really don't want is a ton of like just me and one child. Like as much as you can all be together, because then older children are helping younger children and they're understanding that principle we've talked about again and again in this podcast of this is not something that's primarily done on my own. It's something that I enjoy coming together and doing with others.
Right. But just because something works for your family does not mean that it has to work for somebody else's family. But keeping those overall principles in mind of teaching the important things, like you said, the attributes of God, the overall storyline of scripture, bringing in Bible stories for them to read on their own,
showing them how to look things up in the Bible on their own, giving them skills, just like how do we find 1 Samuel 2:15, showing them how the Bible works, having their own copy that they own, that's their very own, that kind of thing.
Not leaving that for the Sunday school teacher to teach them, or the church to teach them instead.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe now let's talk about if you are a small group leader. What are some tips that you would give to the small group leader? Let's start with maybe how if somebody is not a small group leader but they think they might want to be one, how does somebody know they're ready to be a small group leader? Let's start there.
Well, if they feel terror in the pit of their stomach and they still keep looking into it, that's generally a good indicator. People are always talking about calling, and you're like, how did you know you were called to this or called to that? And I'm like, man, I didn't. I just walked toward the need. Like I saw that something needed to be done, and then I looked over my shoulder and thought, oh, I guess I was called to do that. And I think that's true for all levels of ministry. And that small group. First of all, I do want to say for those who are thinking about or who are already leading in a small group format, I believe with all of my heart that is where the Bible literacy crisis is addressed effectively over the long term. I don't think that the majority of the heavy lifting on this happens with me standing on a platform talking to 200, 800, 1,000 women. I think that has something it can do. But I tell my own small group leaders in my local Bible study at the end of every year that this Bible study is not a success because I'm a good teacher or not. It's a success because of the work that's happened in that small group. And I am not blowing smoke, because if you've ever been in a bad small group, you know I'm right. It doesn't matter how good the teaching is, you're never going back. And so a small group leader, when she understands herself as a co-learner and a facilitator instead of again as having to sit in the seat of the expert, then that opens up a lot of freedom for her to step into that role. If she has access to good teaching resources that she can pair with just being that facilitator, then she gives herself a ton of permission to be the person who, if there is a question that they're having a hard time answering, she says, I don't know, let me look into it and I'll get back to you. And the group understands that she has a position of authority where she is the one who can make sure that she has access to the right places to go to get answers to questions. But the key element that she is going to perform is she's going to keep the conversation going, and she's going to know how to keep them on the path and they don't wander off down on a rabbit trail. Or if someone says something that you're like, oh, that's not the answer, she knows how to gently steer things back onto course. And she is doing a really important work of taking ideas and bringing them down to the ground level in face-to-face interactions with people. And so she's going to know whether the curriculum questions that she's using are good questions or not, because she'll have an immediate feedback loop from the way that people answer, and then she's going to course adjust. So it is to say that space is mission critical doesn't really even do justice to what it accomplishes, because that is where this really changes, where people do the work together.
You hit on a few points about facilitating conversations, the role of a small group leader in facilitating conversations. What do you have tip-wise for people on how to do that well? I think sometimes that can be such a hard thing to balance. You want people to feel like they can contribute, but you also don't want it to kind of devolve into something that it's not. So I know probably every group is different. Every small group leader probably handles that a little differently. Are there some good principles that small group leaders can keep in mind as they do that?
Yeah, there are some similarities, and some of this will be what people are accustomed to doing before they come into a group that's more literacy focused. And so it's a resetting of expectations. We're going to have a thought level discussion. It doesn't mean that we won't talk about how we feel about what we're learning, but it means that we're going to keep time to talk about the things that we're seeing in the Bible. We're going to keep time for our thinking to be developed so that our feelings will be informed by our thinking. So that's, you wouldn't necessarily have to say that to the group, although that is an expectation that we set each semester in my own study, as we say, I do want your heart, but I really want your mind, because I know that you know how to bring your feelings intuitively to this conversation, but you may be less intuitive about having a thought level discussion. Some women have never been invited into a small group space where there was a focus on a thought level discussion. And so that means you might have to guard, you probably will have to guard things like prayer requests and prayer time. You'll have to talk about, we do want to hear your story, but your story shouldn't consume the small group time. And in order to make sure that the small group time is utilized for a thought level discussion, it probably means that you'll have other times when you gather where they can share their story, or they can be devoted completely to just, let's talk about how you need prayer, so that they can understand the purpose of us gathering is for a learning outcome. And that's different than the purpose of us gathering is for us to go deeper in community with each other. Now, spoiler alert, women are going to go deeper in community with each other, even when a learning outcome is your highest stated goal. It just means that you're not going to make it your highest stated goal, and that can be a real course shift for women. So, the leader is going to be thinking through just typical group dynamic concerns, like what if you have someone who's an over talker, whether that means they're shouting the right answer before everybody else can, or whether it means they keep interjecting their story, or whether whatever, who's the woman who never says anything? How are you going to draw her into conversation? What are you going to do when someone says something that's straight heretical into the middle of your, coffee cups, and you've got to figure out how to steer it back to something that sounds more orthodox?
Maybe talk about that just for a little bit. I feel like that one makes me really nervous.
Yeah, it should.
I've been in groups where that's kind of happened.
Yeah.
And like everyone's eyeballs kind of get a little bigger,
silence.
and like everybody looks around like, who's going to be the one to say something? So what's a good way for a leader to kindly, because you don't want to hurt people's feelings or be rude or mean, but at the same time you also don't want that idea, if it's blatantly wrong, to be shared as truth. So
and also you want these groups to be places where women feel like they can say, I don't know if this is right or not, but I think it might be this. Like they need to have permission to test drive an idea that might not be, I'm gonna mix metaphors, fully cooked, right? They want to try something out and see, and that is what this group is for. It's for us to learn in community with each other. And so as the leader who's wanting to set that tone, let's say a woman says something that's just clearly wrong, you could respond by saying, no, that's not right, and giving the right answer. Or you can say, well, that's an interesting, first stab at this. Does anybody else have any thoughts in the group? And then you allow other members of the group to say, well, I don't know, I kind of thought it was this, or I thought it was maybe this. And then you begin to say, you know what, I think you're onto something there. And then you begin to direct the conversation toward the area, the way that you want it to go.
Yeah, so keeping it conversational.
You're keeping it because it should be conversational, right? And so you're preserving the dignity of this person who has done a very courageous thing by taking a shot at it, but you're also showing, you're modeling something about how we gain shared understanding. It's by having a good conversation and hearing other people's opinions and maybe reevaluating your own, and then listening to the, then you can also say, no, let's see what the teaching says. Which brings us to another important element of this. If at all possible, I would have a small group discussion before you look at commentary. identification process with their own thinking.
How is studying the Bible for yourself versus studying so you can teach it different?
For me, it's not. I know
Okay.
for some people it is, but for me, it's not. I want those two processes to be the same thing. And so I think of it in terms of, well, did this sting for me? Because I want to make sure that when I present it for them, that I'm honest about where I was personally with it. You know, no one wants to hear about their sin problem from someone who's like, yeah, this is not really an issue for me, but you go fix that, right? So in the area of application, when we're talking about, besetting sins and that kind of thing, I would never want to stand up and give someone else the hard word if I hadn't first had to stare it down myself. And I want that to be evident in the way that I'm teaching it. And so I keep those two things together because I do need my emotions to be fully intact in the teaching as it relates to what the message is going to be. And that takes time. Like it takes time for my thinking to inform the way that I should feel, and then for me to be able to communicate that effectively. So I want them to know, yeah, I hated this week. I don't want to talk about sins of the tongue anymore. But here are some things that I learned about myself. And there's so much, particularly in the area of repentance, that we learn from watching or hearing someone else have the courage to talk about it. So I think that's a big part I've often thought about, like in my own teaching. I have a sense of humor that pops out at unscripted times, and I think that the Lord has kept that a part of my teaching approach, because I have to say a lot of hard things, and it's a way to invite people in and say, we're all in this together, and we can laugh as much as we can, take the hit. There are things that we can laugh about too, but so I don't separate the two. I want my own process of development to be something that is translating into something I'm turning and telling to someone else.
I think that's really encouraging because that applies to someone like you who stands in front of a lot of people to teach, but that also could then be exactly the same for someone like me.
One-on-one, that's
yeah.
right.
And so it's just the method or the process that you can use to learn and study the Bible then automatically can translate into how you can communicate those truths to people in any context.
I think it's probably intuitive for people to understand that the larger the room, the larger the accountability,
Definitely.
on the teacher. It doesn't mean that you do a sloppy job on just one other person, but it does mean that you're aware the impact of your words is going to multiply the more listeners that you have. And so that's going to shape the way you might say something or what you may say or not say. But the principles are the same. I want to be the same person on a platform that I would be if you and I were sitting just the two of us in a room.
Yeah. So there might not be as many listeners who teach in front of a large group of people like you do, but I'm sure there's some out there that do that, who have a very similar role of teaching a whole women's Bible study or in a church context or conference setting, things like that. What kinds of tips would you have for those ladies or people out there who are teaching the Bible to large groups of people?
I think that as much as you can maintain a dialogic feel to what you're doing, your learners are going to be helped. No one is benefiting the way that they can if they're just sitting and receiving passively from you. And so I still to this day will picture the faces of the women who were in my Sunday school class at my first church that I was given a place to teach, because I don't ever want to lose the sense of these are people who have hard stories and happy stories and all kinds of things that they're going through. And I'm trying to speak to a person. I'm not speaking to an audience. And obviously, you're not going to be able to hit everybody where they are. But the more you don't go beyond your own experience, and start trying to teach something you haven't learned yourself yet, the more likely I think you are to be able to be empathetic in the way you present things, but also to be conversational. People are going to have different presentation styles. I have a very conversational cadence to the way that I teach. That just is what it is. Some people have a more formal cadence, but it still is a very invitational style of teaching. I do things like, hey, what's that next word in the verse? Or what idea have we seen repeated? Things that they can verbally respond to, because it just helps people realize, we're still all doing this work all together, even though we're no longer in a living room. So those are just some things you can keep in mind. Once if the numbers start to get, even above 30 and 40, you start to have to shift the way that you're communicating content, but always thinking, I'm teaching a room full of individuals, not just a faceless mass of people. It's helpful.
So you've been teaching the Bible for a long time.
Yes.
What would you say is one of the hardest things about teaching the Bible?
It'd be hard to narrow it down to one thing. I thought by now it would feel easy. I think that's what I would have said, 25 years ago is, well, eventually it's going to be easy. And there are things about it that have gotten easier in the sense that some things I've taught enough that I can just cue them when I need them, when I'm teaching. But I think that the thing that increases is just the sense of the weight of the responsibility. And who, like Augustine in his Confessions, who would ever think that they could possibly capture who God is in human speech? Like, who would even dare to try? And then he says, he balances it with it, but who that knows you would dare to remain silent? And I think that's, I just still find myself there 25 years later is terrified to speak and compelled to speak. It's that fear and fearlessness. And so that's hard, but it's also, I think it's the right kind of hard.
And I'm sure you wouldn't do it if you didn't love it. So what's one of the best things that you found about teaching the Bible?
People are so funny. They will apologize for offering encouragement. They'll come up and say, I'm sorry, I know you hear this all the time, but, and then they will tell you the most beautiful expression of gratitude that is not rooted in, I think you're amazing. They will say, I took these tools and I went to my church and I started this with a group of 3 women, and then it was a group of 10, and then it was a group of 30. And then the whole culture of studying the Bible changed in my church. And I hear that and I can't believe it. Like, I can't believe that happened. I should. That means I'm faithless, right? But I've thought about people who are performers and they perform a song set and then they go home, and I'm sure that they receive encouragement that they're gifted or they're talented or whatever, but that's not the kind of encouragement that I get. I took this and I built something with it, and that's something that's bigger than just any one particular meeting time where you open up the scriptures. That's something that could represent a legacy, in a particular church across years. So that will keep you studying, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, definitely. So you kind of mentioned how people have encouraged you that you found really helpful. For the listener that thinks, man, I also think that the lady that leads my Bible study is so helpful to me. What are ways that people can encourage their own Bible study teachers and leaders in their own lives?
When you hear them teach something that impacts you, if you can, it's one thing if you go up immediately after the teaching, you say, you said this today and it was profound, and I wrote it down and I'm going to really think about that. Giving specific feedback on things that were helpful is enormously helpful to a teacher. I would say a teacher also needs negative feedback, things that they need to improve on, and you need trusted people who are going to give you that. But then if you really want to bless your Bible teacher, you come back 2 weeks or 2 months or a year later and you say, I want to tell you how this thing that you said has changed the way that I think about this relationship or about this passage or about this sin that I just have not been able to get past. And that's where, for the Bible teacher, again, it's that right orienting of, well, I know that wasn't my words. I know that was something bigger than me. And then it keeps you, I think, in the right posture, I hope, of humility and also just compulsion, like, I got to get up there and do this again.
Well, thanks so much, Jen, for talking about this. It's been so encouraging, just even for me, and how I can teach the Bible in my own lives, and I'm sure for all the listeners as well. So thank you, too, for joining us for this episode of the Women of the Word podcast. Join us again next week for our final episode where Jen and I will talk about why Bible study should always lead to worship. And if you found this conversation helpful, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you all here again next week.
Bible in some form for about the last 25 years or so, and that could look like anything from a room of about 30 women at my church in a church building to my living room. I've had anywhere from 8 to 45 women crammed into my living room at any given time, and then I've taught essentially parachurch in the community. I taught a community format for about 6 years, and then currently I'm teaching in my local church, which is where the only place I've ever wanted to be was teaching the Bible in my local church, and that's a large format Bible study. But I always think back to those living room days and those days when it was a small enough room to where we were having dialogue around the things that we were learning, because that's really where I learned in short order. Like, you can ask a question of a room full of people and hear immediately whether the question was actually eliciting the answer you were headed for, or whether they went down a rabbit trail, and you also get a really good feel for what people know and don't know, and what was the question that was hard for them. Was it hard for them because I didn't ask it right, or was it hard for them because it's a hard concept and something they need to think about more? So, I know I would imagine there will be some women who are listening to this who are thinking, I want to do that. I want to be teaching, someone else. And I would just say, I can't overstate the significance of those living room experiences or those small format experiences for knowing not just the why, but the who of Bible literacy. Everything from young moms to elderly women, all kinds of life stages and circumstances. And it makes a big difference when you don't just want to teach the Bible, but you want to teach people the Bible. It just changes the way that you think about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And all of this relates to Bible literacy, because it isn't just enough to say, here, I'm going to give you good tools. It needs to be, I see you, I love you, I know right where you are, and I want to give you good tools.
Pavel, and I'm sure in all of your experience as a Bible study teacher, you've heard from a lot of different women, maybe some creative reasons, why maybe they've come to a study unprepared. What is maybe one or two stories of some of the craziest excuses you've heard of why they've come to study not done their homework or not ready to participate in discussion?
A lot of it is, plumbing broke or baby didn't sleep or something like that. The most interesting one that's happened recently was a whole group of women showed up unprepared because apparently when we had the workbooks printed, they printed 2 of the same week twice and left out 2 weeks of their homework. So I was like, well, that's on us. Yeah. Also, I don't even know how that happens. I don't even know how that happens. But then it's so funny because they're all, nervous. They're like, I would have done it. It wasn't in there. So it's been kind of funny. But we kind of make sure at the beginning of each semester, we do things in a semester format, that we say really clearly, hey, we know there are going to be weeks where you didn't get to do the homework, and that's okay. We're hoping that they're going to understand the value of the homework by the time they reach the end of the study, even though they might not immediately, and that your understanding of its value grows the more that you utilize it. So we just always say, hey, if you have a week where you weren't able to do the homework, we understand. Just read through the passage 3 or 4 times before you come if you can, and that'll help you to be ready to receive the teaching. Because a lot of I don't know that people don't always realize that what I've written in Women of the Word is what I would say the first day of Bible study if I had 6.5 hours, and I definitely don't. It's basically laying out a philosophy of learning that then the studies that I've taught are helping people to implement. So it's almost like this is the recipe book, and then the Bible study spaces, and I would hope that women who are going to take this and use it in a local church context would think about it this way. The Bible study spaces are where we say, okay, we've shown you the recipe, but now we're going to stand next to you and help you cook the meal. There is a hand-holding element to this. It's important. It's not enough to just tell someone how to do something. It's really helpful when someone will show you and walk with you through the process.
And obviously life happens. There's reasons that, things happen in their lives. They can't get to homework, and it's important that they just kind of show up to do Bible study with a group of people anyway. Do you think on a deeper heart level, there's hesitations that people have about just, being uncertain about being able to do this for themselves just more generally? So it's one thing if, your plumbing breaks in your house or you literally don't have the lesson that you're supposed to do that week. But do you hear from people regularly of just kind of an underlying hesitation or skepticism about themselves of, I'm not sure, I didn't do this, I'm just not sure that I can?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of women who feel like they don't know where to start, or they question whether they even have the mental capacity to do it. One of the biggest things that it has to be relearned, I think, for people when they start into this space is that many of us have forgotten what it means to be a student. We've been out of school for a while. A lot of things have happened to us in the interim. Some of us have started families, or we have a job that's sucking the life out of us, or that we love, and we've allocated our time lots of places, and then we hear this, and we might perceive an initial need for it and even have some level of desire, but we just think, that's not me. I mean, I'm not academic. I wasn't even maybe that good in school at some of the classes that I took, so I don't know. And that's very common. And again, a lot of what I'm offering to women are things that we probably should have learned in our high school English class, but for whatever reason they didn't stick. Maybe we didn't have a teacher who was particularly energizing in delivering that content to us, or maybe just from a maturity standpoint, we weren't old enough to value what it was being offered to us. And so there's really not a secret to what is being offered when you start talking about Bible literacy. It's just literacy tools that we're going to apply to the Bible. And so if you were maybe not that avid of a learner the first time these tools were presented to you in your just standard education path, this is an opportunity to remember what it means to be a learner. And I always try to tell people, like, think about your most positive memory of learning. What's the thing that you've learned that brought you the most excitement and joy? And then ask yourself, is it possible that I could feel that way about learning the Bible? And I think a lot of us just can't even conceive of that because it's never been an opportunity we've gotten to explore.
Yeah, it probably feels a little bit more like a task to do.
Absolutely. Drudgery.
Yes, there's not the joy aspect of it that people think of or associate with studying the Bible. Even maybe that word can kind of trip people up.
Which is, yeah, and that's a lot of like what I want to do with my teaching, and I know a lot of other women who are out there trying to faithfully teach the Bible, is I do want to teach the Bible well, but I also want to show people how much I love it and whether I'm teaching it, because they can't picture it until they can see it, and then they think, I want that. Why when I read it does it feel boring and confusing, and when she reads it, she seems to really come alive. And this is what I'm saying, is this is why someone didn't just tell me things, they showed me some ways to grow.
So now that we've kind of come to the conclusion that there are some barriers for people getting into the Bible, there could be the desire that I really want to do this. I know it's important. I hear what you're saying, Jen, that Bible literacy is important. I need to be in my Bible maybe a little bit more intentionally, or a lot more intentionally than I have been in the past. But here's X reason, for whatever reason, that I feel like I can't. So maybe let's get into some of those barriers that some women might be feeling or experiencing, and maybe we can speak to those and how they can kind of overcome them, work to overcome them in their own lives. So I know for me personally, and a lot of my friends or people that I go to church with, one of the main reasons that it's hard to do Bible study and work on Bible literacy is just the time factor. I say constantly, well, I just don't know when I'm going to have time. I don't really have the time. What would you say to that?
Well, that's me. I mean, that's how I feel about it. And I think that's the way a lot of us feel. And I always joke, but I'm actually serious, that the reason I teach regularly is because I need that level of accountability to get me to give it the time that it should take. I need to know someone's going to be staring at me, waiting for me to help them gain understanding. And so, yeah, they're all my accountability group. Everybody I'm teaching, my extended accountability group. And it's true, we all only have so much time in our days. And for those of us who are trying to introduce something new into an existing schedule, you do sometimes have to do some work to ask, well, where am I currently spending my time? Where could I find time for this? And, I don't know everybody's schedules. I know what draws me into things of lesser value. And so I can go back and reevaluate, well, how much time am I giving to screens? How much time am I giving to social media? But the reality for all of us is we all give time to things that we value. We do. We all give time to the things that we value. And especially like for church leaders, I'll often hear church leaders say, well, Jen, this is great, but our people are too busy. They won't do that. And I just want to say, well, but your people are doing they are following compelling messages to do hard things. Discipline is not dead, it just follows the most compelling message. And so what I want to do is compel people to have discipline around what I believe is the most compelling message of all, and then they can work out their time constraints on their own. We do have discretionary time, and we choose how we're using it. And then, but I do also want to say, as someone who had 4 children in 4 years, that I feel, and who's caring for aging parents at this stage of life, I do understand that there are some seasons of life in which we have less discretionary time than in others. That is a true statement. The trick is when you pass out of one of those stages into a stage where you do have more discretionary time to revisit where you've allocated your time. It's one thing to be in like a maintenance phase during a really, really busy season, but those seasons don't last forever. And so then regaining, recapturing, or finding space for a good habit on the other side of one of those seasons is important.
I've also heard from women that I go to church with or that I was in college with that another reason that they might not be interested in biblical literacy, Bible literacy, is because they like to read the Bible devotionally, not like a textbook. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, devotional reading has its place. In my experience, some of us are only reading devotionally, and not all devotional content is equally valuable, but we won't understand which devotional content is truly good and which is maybe just playing to our emotions if we don't have a foundational understanding of the scriptures. And so I would say if you love devotional reading, praise God, you are going to love it more if you start exercising some Bible literacy tools. I think you will be drawn more toward some people's devotional content than others as a result of that, because you'll begin to, again, peer behind the curtain and see who understands what truly beautiful devotional content is and who understands human nature and is offering you just a quick fix on your emotions potentially.
So one of the things you mentioned was having discipline. Part of utilizing our time well is having discipline to kind of know how we're spending it and then being able to choose wisely about reading the Bible, studying the Bible. So what would you say to the person who says, well, I'm not very good at discipline, I'm not a very disciplined person, I don't really do that? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's me. That's why I come up with structure to help, right? And I think the undisciplined person, the person who, I do think we all tend to be disciplined and dedicated to the things that we care a lot about. And so, this is why part of what I want to do is help people care about this in a way that maybe they haven't been challenged to before. But I don't consider myself to be a particularly disciplined person. And so I'm very aware of my own need for structure and for hand-holding and for accountability. And accountability sounds menacing, and it shouldn't. It just really means I'm not going to try to do this alone, because I know that I'm probably going to be more motivated to invest in this if I have some fellow travelers and some people who are going to ask me, hey, did you do this week or not, right? So that's the basics of any form of discipline or habit forming, and it's no different for learning how to study the Bible either.
So how should they think about, or how should other people who might enjoy devotional reading think about balancing reading the Bible devotionally versus doing the hard work of Bible literacy?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say if you were having an issue with how you were spending your money and you went to someone and said, I want to make sure I'm spending my money in smart ways, the first thing that they would ask you to do is not make a budget. What would they do first? They'd say, well, how are you spending your money currently, right? And then you would go into an inventory and say, oh, I'm actually spending way more than I mean to on eating out or on entertainment or whatever it is. And so when it comes to thinking about how to budget our time around devotional reading, the first step is to ask, well, how much of the total time that I'm spending interacting with my Bible is devotional, and how much of it is literacy building, or how much is the Bible reading plan, right? I mean, and so for many of us, we just over time gravitate toward the thing that feels most intuitive or comfortable for us at the expense of other things. So I would say for me, the press is, are you doing any devotional reading? Or are you only doing study?
Yeah.
And so, and I would also say that if you're doing Bible literacy properly, if you're growing your use of the tools, your study is deeply devotional. It becomes that. And I think we think we need prepackaged things a lot. And so over time, as you grow in your skill of utilizing the tools, you may discern that you have less of a need for someone else to draw you into a devotional space, because your reading of the scriptures is doing that more organically on its own.
So there could be people who are listening to this episode or this podcast and they think, wow, that sounds really awesome. I know that I need to be more intentional with how I study the Bible and building my Bible literacy, but it just sounds really hard, and it might just be too hard for me to do.
Yeah, I would say you should be encouraged. It's not hard. It's just unfamiliar. And so, there's really, an example I use a lot is my son learning to play the piano, right? And he wanted to learn. He liked the idea of playing the piano. He knew that that was a good thing to pursue, but the first time that he sat down to practice, he was terrible at it, and it was frustrating, and he felt dumb. And that's a lot of what we don't like, right? Like, we don't want that feeling of, ugh, I'm not succeeding, and I would like to succeed in the near term, not the long term. And so the reason that my son now plays the piano beautifully is because he came back and he sat down and he did it again, and he got a little better. And then he came back and he sat down and he did it again, and he got a little better. And I wouldn't say that his enjoyment of playing the piano was the immediate yield of his practice efforts. I think that took some time. But the better he got at it, the more enjoyment it yielded, because he was growing in his proficiency. And it wasn't just he was growing in his proficiency. This goes back to that connection of head and heart and hands, right? Is that the work that his brain was doing to learn the piano was actually connecting to his heart as well. He wasn't just learning to love piano music. He was learning to love expressing that music as well. And so I'd say when you think about the Bible, it seems boring and old and dull and inaccessible. But the first time that you sit down to a musical instrument or try to learn a new skill of any kind, you generally don't have the desire for it, but you should, and it grows over time.
So maybe just talking a little bit to that desire piece. People who look at the Bible and they say, it just kind of feels Old Testament, it's kind of boring, hard to read, I don't really know what I'm doing. What would you say for people who they think, I just don't know if I even have the desire? Sometimes I feel like that even. Wake up in the morning and I'm like, I just don't really know if I feel like doing this morning necessarily. How do you instill desire for something if you don't necessarily feel like you want to do that?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, so much of adulthood is doing things that we don't want to do because we have to do them, right? And I think that it's not uncommon for the Bible literacy journey to start a little bit that way, right? It starts a little bit that way, but we also recognize as adults that there are things that we started to do out of a sense of duty that eventually grew to be things that we actually enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think, I do think that your desire for doing this grows over time, but I don't think it takes 10 years for that to happen, because I think for so many of us, we don't realize how little we did know until we start to get into it, and then we start to make these discoveries, and the joy of discovery keeps drawing us along. I think in the book I talk about a study about how desire functions in our lives, and I'm a Southern Baptist, so this is a terrible example for me to use, but it was about the man who's doing the research talks about how we grow in our desire, and he uses wine connoisseurs as an example, and he says it turns out that people who are wine connoisseurs don't become wine connoisseurs simply by guzzling a lot of wine. It's not by having repeated experiences, which I think is what we have told ourselves is the nature of our desire in the Christian walk, is I need to have an experience of God over and over again. That's what the secret sauce is of Christianity. And he says that a wine connoisseur becomes a connoisseur, their desire for that grows as they learn more. And you think about the knowledge of God, which is really what we're after when we come to the scriptures, is that act of saying, I'm going to learn more about him, but not as a dry intellectual exercise. I'm going to learn more about him as a means to an end, because to know him is to love him. There is nothing I can learn about him that is unlovely, and it will only increase my affection for him. And so I think that if you say, I don't have desire around reading the Bible, yeah, I think a lot of people would say that. But do you have a desire to love God more? I think a lot of people would say, I do. But I feel like I don't know how to get that started. And so I would say maybe you're missing this key piece, which is where God discloses
kind of checking the thing off the list. And sometimes I think we ask these questions or these barriers exist in our lives because we lose sight of the end goal. And that ultimately we're doing Bible study, like you said, to love the Lord, to know the Lord more. And then that kind of just will help some of those barriers to naturally fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our barriers are because we have approached the Bible first with our hearts. You know, like, make me feel some way, make me feel some way. And then you hit Leviticus and you're like, ooh, I'm not really sure how to feel about that, right?
Right.
And not only that, but we've come to the Bible reading it fundamentally as a book about us. You know, we want it to tell me about me. And that's, again, we're going back to the two eyes I mentioned in our previous episode, instant gratification and individualism. Like, I want this to be a book about me. And it's not. It's not that it isn't a book about me, but it's only derivatively so. First and foremost, the Bible is a book about God. And so I think because we have gotten a couple of things backwards with it, we do tend to approach the book and meet with frustration because we thought it was doing one thing and it's actually doing something different and better than we thought it was. But we haven't been given any helps to know how to read it that way in many cases.
Are there any of these barriers that we've talked about or discussed in the past, or maybe a different one that we haven't, that you personally struggle with the most?
Oh man, I don't think there's one that I don't.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm empathetic to it, and I do think that it's one of the reasons that I kept going with the messaging is because I needed this help, and I continue to need this help. And I think for the person who's listening, thinking, yeah, I do feel all of those things, and I don't know where to start, and I don't know, there can be a sense of, and that's on me, like I have failed in some way because why are other people all feeling this and doing this, or how come no one is doing this, depending on what church you're in? Why are you telling me this is important? I don't know anyone who's doing this. And that is actually not a failure on the part of the learner. That is, in my view, something that has gone missing in church leadership. It's something that people like me who work on church staffs should have called people toward and to, and given them a vision for. And so if you're just if you consider yourself the average learner out there, I would just say to you, this isn't actually on you if this hasn't been given to you. But it is something, if you perceive the need for, you have the ability to move toward and to grow in. And it will absolutely change everything about the way that you read the Bible. It'll change the way that you think about God. I think it reorients us in the best way because when we begin to just read the scriptures, asking better questions of them, the very first thing I think that the scriptures yield up for us is a vision of God high and lifted up. And I can't think of something more needful in our particular age or in any age.
So would you say, are there any good reasons to not study the Bible?
Ooh, that's a spicy question, and it's a good one. It really is one that we should ask. Are there any good reasons that we wouldn't? And spoiler alert, I would say, yeah, I think there are some good reasons. I think that there are seasons in life where we are barely getting by. So when you are in the dark night of the soul and when you are having a crisis, you're probably, maybe it's a circumstance, you know, maybe it's the bad health report or the loss of a loved one or something like that. And those are the moments in which we should be ideally drawing on resources that we have been sort of making faithful deposits of up until that point. Because honestly, no one is going to sit down and do a line-by-line Bible study of the book of Romans when they're in crisis or when they're in a deep depression, right? Whatever the thing is that is coming at you, or, you know, or you have a newborn and you're getting 2 hours of sleep a night, whatever it is. And I always want to remind people that the Lord knows your season of life better than you do. Like, he's not scolding you from on high because you can't pull it together and do your Bible study when you are in one of these times. But when I say that the Lord knows your season of life better than you do, that it should be a comfort to us when we are in that difficult time, and it should also be a caution to us when we're not, right? And again, as I think we mentioned earlier, it's like knowing when you're in that season and giving yourself the permission to exhale, and to have other people come to you and give you a word, right? I mean, I've had that happen when you're low and you're like, I don't even know if I can open this book right now, and someone else comes to you and says, hey, the Lord brought this passage to mind, and I just wanted to share it with you today. But then to know when you're not in that season anymore, and to be able to pick up the work and move forward again, knowing that it's good work and it's sustaining work in those seasons when we're just barely getting by.
So I'm sure that there's times where, you know, people have been putting the work into their Bible study. They're in a season where they have the ability to really focus in, do the hard work, but they feel maybe that they're not getting anywhere, or they don't see a lot of fruit coming from it, and they might be starting to get discouraged. I know sometimes that's happened in my own Bible studies where I put a lot of work in studying a passage, and I'm just like, I just am not quite sure if I'm getting out of it what I'm supposed to be getting out of it. I don't see a lot of fruit coming out of it. I don't even really know if I feel like I'm gaining new knowledge. Yeah. What would you say to people who feel discouraged by their slow pace of change, or if they just kind of feel like they've been plodding away, doing the hard work, but maybe not seeing a lot of fruit or growth in their own lives?
I would say maybe give yourself a break. Don't be so hard on yourself, and trust the process, I think, is the phrase that floats around out there. Allow things time. You know, we live in a day and age where I think our attention spans have shrunk to shorter than 8 seconds, so shorter than a goldfish. So it's no wonder that we would be impatient with the state of our progress with regard to something that really is a long game, when everything around us is telling us we don't have to be patient with anything, not one single thing. We live in a time where waiting is seen as an enemy to be destroyed, not a discipline to be embraced. And so if you think about the discipline of Bible literacy and all of the different things that might be a subset discipline of those, one of them is certainly the ability to wait. So keep fighting the good fight. Yeah, absolutely. And trust that the Lord is going to yield fruit in due season. I'm a gardener, and so I often think if more of us were spending time outside in the garden watching the life cycle of a plant that actually bears physical fruit, we have more of an understanding of that metaphor in the scriptures, that it does take time. And unlike my garden where we never know if it will survive long enough to bear fruit, we have a lot of assurances in the scripture that the word of the Lord always does.
Definitely. That's so encouraging. Thanks, Jen, for joining me today, talking about these. I'm sure I know personally that I've heard myself in some of those common barriers. I've struggled with them. I'm sure people listening have felt the same way. And so really encouraging to know that the ultimate goal of studying the Bible is to know and love the Lord, and that when we keep pressing, he's faithful to make good on his word and to bear fruit in our own lives. And so we just want to invite those people in who might be feeling the same way, that we're going to, in the next few episodes, give them some real tools to help them continue that process for themselves. So thanks again for joining us for the Women of the Word podcast. Join us again next week where Jen and I will talk about if there's a right or a wrong way to study the Bible. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you all again here next week. Jen, thanks again for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. So the last time we talked, we explored how we can overcome some common barriers to Bible study, helping people actually get into the Bible for themselves. But once they get into the Bible, start that process, is there a right or a wrong way to read the Bible, study the Bible? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So in a previous episode, we were talking about time and how in order for us to build good habits, we first have to take an inventory of the habits we currently have. Right. So before we can get better ones, we have to know what we're currently doing. So what are some of the most unhelpful approaches, or just an example of a few unhelpful approaches that you've heard for people when it comes to studying the scriptures?
Yeah, so I do like to just qualify this by saying that the reason that I can speak with some authority on these ways that are maybe less than helpful is because I myself have used all of them, some or all of them at any given time in my own approach to the scriptures. And one of the reasons that I began to sort of keep an inventory of them is because I think a lot of us, we talked about people who perceive a barrier to doing this because they feel like they're not able to or because it feels intimidating. But there's also a group of people who would say, no, I do spend time in the scriptures. Like, why do I need a different approach? And what I would see is that there were people who had been in church for their entire lives doing things that they considered Bible study who couldn't pass a simple pop quiz over factual information. And so that should cause us to pause and think, okay, well, maybe my assumptions are wrong. One of the common assumptions that people have is that all contact with the Bible is good contact. And so you sort of superimpose that onto a quiet time subculture in the church of all contact is good contact. I'm just going to give my 15 minutes a day, and then the Lord will bless it because I was faithful to do it. So we have to think back to 2 Timothy 2:15 that says that we want to present ourselves as workers who are unashamed. Well, that must mean that there are ways of encountering the scriptures that would yield us to be workers who are ashamed because maybe we weren't using the best tools that we could. And so really the first one that comes to mind for me is one that I have somewhat playfully labeled the Xanax approach. It's been a pretty pervasive one really in women's circles, and that is when I come to the Bible asking it to make me feel a particular way. And so you've probably seen this.
Been there myself,
I mean,
honestly.
but like you look at like Instagram, for
Yes.
example, right? And let's say that I have been really having a lot of anxiety that I'm dealing with, and I just am worrying a whole lot, and life is weighing heavily on me. And so where am I going to go in the scriptures? Well, be anxious for nothing but all things through prayer and supplication, right? Make your request unto God. And then I'm going to like say it over and over again. I might like put it in a share square and put it out on Instagram because I want everybody else to feel what I'm feeling, right? Or let's say that it's New Year's and I ate too much during the holidays and my clothes don't fit anymore and I'm feeling like bad about the way that I look or my pants don't fit. Where am I going to go? Psalm 139:14. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm going to like say it over and over again over myself until I believe it. Maybe I'm super tired, right? I'm just so exhausted. Well, where am I going to go? Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now it says rest for your souls, but in the moment I just need something that's going to give me that. Oh, I feel seen. The Lord doesn't want me to feel this way. And so the Xanax approach will kind of we sort of self-medicate with the Bible. We're using it to fix our feelings, but we're just kind of randomly pulling things however we want to. And it's going to mean, if that's the primary way that I approach the scriptures, well, first of all, there's going to be large sections of the Bible I'm never going to go to, right?
Yeah,
Leviticus, right? Or Jeremiah 17:9 that says, above all else, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Like that doesn't leave you feeling warm, right? Yeah, yeah. No one puts that in a share square on Instagram, right? And so I think that when our primary approach to the scriptures is asking the Bible to make us feel a particular way, it shows that we have a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Bible is for. It's not primarily wanting to make us feel a particular way. It's wanting to tell us who God is, so we can understand ourselves in light of who He is, and so forth.
I mean, I've definitely been there myself in a lot of ways, and it's easy to kind of go back to the tried and true things just to make me feel a certain way when I'm feeling down. And not that there isn't a place for that, obviously, but it's not the primary way. We should always be reading our Bibles.
Yeah, it's not wrong to think that we should have feelings related to the scriptures, but the question is, should we demand that the Bible give us a feeling in the time frame that we have to give our time to scripture? So it's co-opting the Bible and asking the Bible to serve us rather than wanting to serve the God of the Bible.
What would be an alternative approach to this? If somebody would, I sometimes struggle with this myself. So if I have a tendency to say, okay, I'm just going to go find something in the Bible, I feel a certain way, I need to feel better. What is an alternative approach or well-rounded approach rather than the Xanax approach?
Well, it's a product of a long-term approach, right? And so it's rather than saying in the moment I'm going to fix this with a verse, it's saying, wait a minute, I know some things about the God of the Bible because I've spent some time in the big story. I know that God is faithful to His promises, and that if I'm anxious, that I'm anxious because I see this much and He sees all of it. And so it isn't that we wouldn't draw any comfort from that verse in Philippians or any instruction from it. It's just that it's going to be of limited usefulness in getting that big picture of scripture, because the Xanax approach is guaranteeing that you're getting spot knowledge of the Bible versus getting long stretches of understanding, which is that's where we become more grounded in our faith.
So let's look at another one. What is the pinball approach?
So the pinball approach is where I don't really have anything in particular that I want to study, but it's all good, right? It's all good. Everything in here is useful, it's profitable, and so I'm just going to randomly just hurtle the ball of my ignorance toward a flipper over here in Luke. Oh, here we go, I'll just read this. And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days. Well, I don't know, I'm not getting a lot out of this. I think I'll flip back here and read a little bit out of Psalms. And we just send our ignorance ricocheting around to different portions of the Bible as the Spirit leads. Like that's how we will assign sort of a higher meaning to what we're doing. And so it sounds kind of spiritual. Like I just want the Spirit to lead me where I should go. But really, what we're doing is we're reading the Bible the way that we wouldn't read any other book. Like the Bible is not meant to be read that way. It's not designed to be read that way. And imagine if you did this with your high school chemistry textbook. Like imagine if you came in the first day of high school chemistry and you flipped to the middle of chapter 4 and you read a paragraph out of it. And you really you spent some time really trying to think about what you were reading. And then you said, now how does that change my life today? And then you closed your chemistry textbook and you left. And then you came back the next day, and next day you turned to chapter 8 and you repeated the same process. And then you came back the next day and you turned to chapter 2 and you repeated the same process. Well, you can imagine you get to the end of the semester and take the exam and
fail.
You would fail. Yeah, you would fail because the chemistry textbook isn't written to be read that way. And
hard way to learn chemistry.
Yeah, and neither is the Bible, right? And so when we begin to recognize, an author wrote each of these books, and they did what your chemistry textbook author did. They knew who they were writing to. They had reasons for writing. They organized what they were writing so that they could communicate what they needed to communicate. And it's meant to be read from the beginning to the end. Then we begin to understand books of the Bible differently than we would if we were just sort of like ricocheting around.
Okay, let's go to the next one. What's the magic 8-ball approach?
So the magic 8-ball approach is kind of a variation on the pinball approach, but it has to do with decision making because we always are thinking, oh, what the Lord really cares about? Whether I make good choices. And now don't get me wrong, I think the Lord does care about whether we make good choices, and I think the Bible has a lot to say about wisdom principles that help us make good choices. But God is always more concerned with the decision maker than He is with the decision itself. And so we place the emphasis on the decision point, and He is like, I can use a good decision or a bad decision to grow you in holiness. And we all know this, right? But so like what'll happen is my life is filled with decision points, and I need to figure out should I marry Jeff or not. And so I shake up my magic 8-ball and I point to a verse, and it says, it came also in the days of Jehoiakim the son of Josiah, king of Judah, and until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah the son of Josiah. I know a guy named Josiah, and he's friends with Jeff, so that must mean Jeff is who I'm supposed to marry. And so we try to have this causation correlation thing with the way that we have picked a particular verse out of the Bible. And again, like what we're doing there is we are saying God wants me first of all to have knowledge of the future, which is actually not what the Bible would say. The Bible says that blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. And so we sort of cloak it in this wisdom language of Lord, give me wisdom from your word. But what we're really looking for is information and a specific kind, information of the future. But I think the biggest issue with the Magic 8 Ball approach is that the Bible is not magical and it doesn't exist to serve our whim. Again, it's me saying I'm going to put you to work for me and to do what I want you to do versus what it's designed to do. And it's not magical. It's not meant to be used for something that's really kind of a modern day equivalent of soothsaying. So we'll just want to be careful with that.
Yeah, and the pinball approach is kind of the same thing of being able to turn to any specific point and then immediately being able to glean some sort of wisdom or answer out of just one specific verse. So context is helpful too in both of these approaches.
Right, and there is a desire, there's an underlying desire that is admirable, we should say. It is important for us to recognize that the Spirit does speak to us through the Scriptures. That the Spirit doesn't speak to us through the Scriptures any way that we want the Spirit to. And in many ways that we think about the Spirit speaking through the Scriptures, we've over-spiritualized our understanding of how that happens and made it really essentially kind of Gnostic. It's like God is going to tell me something he's not going to tell anybody else.
So it seems like the pinball and the Magic 8 Ball approach have some similarities. What do they maybe reveal about how we approach the Bible in and of itself, or what we view the Bible to be in and of itself?
Yeah, I think also the Xanax approach would fall into this too, that we view it to be primarily therapeutic, or the way it's often been talked about is the Bible is a roadmap for life. In other words, it's supposed to tell me exactly what the decision points are and where to go, or the Bible is God's love letter to you. You can hear the Xanaxy idea in there of like, well, he wouldn't write me anything in a love letter that would be upsetting or challenging or anything like that. And so again, I think it's messaging that just kind of is in the groundwater a lot of times, but also I hope what you heard also in the statements I was making is that it's for you. It's for you, Lauren. Lauren, it's for you. Now it is for the individual, and that's a precious thing that's true about it. But the Magic 8 Ball approach or the pinball approach makes a lot less sense if you're sitting in a group of people having a discussion, right? Because then you begin to realize, oh, well, it is for me, but it's only for me secondarily. It's the layers I sometimes walk people through is that the Bible was for them and for them, for the original audience, it meant something to them, and then the Bible is for us and for always. It's for the Church Universal all time. And then lastly, we should think, how is the Bible for me and for now? But many of us don't know to even think about those first two layers of application, and so then we come to it saying, no, I have 15 minutes, and I just need for me and for now, for me and for now, for me and for now, and it can put us into that kind of a mindset, which is to say nothing of the number of people who've told us that's exactly what we're supposed to do.
Right, it can just be limiting and not helpful. There's more to what our Bible study can give us than just going to it for these little quick fixes or things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't read the works of Shakespeare. You wouldn't shake up your copy of Shakespeare and point to a line in it and ask it to speak truth into your life. Why do we think that's the way that the Bible operates, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going through some of these other unhelpful approaches. What is the personal shopper approach?
So the personal shopper approach is, I really want to know how to be a godly woman, or I really want to know how to have contentment in my life. But this is a pretty big book. I'm pretty sure there are verses in here that talk about that, but I'm not really sure where they are. So I'm just going to let Big Name Bible Teacher X pull all that together for me and walk me through it. So, for anyone who's done Bible studies, you would recognize this by its actual name, which is a topical Bible study. And so it's not to say that topical Bible studies are not helpful, because they absolutely are. Like, strictly speaking, if you were studying doctrine, like you were studying the doctrine of the church, for example, that would be a topical study. It would be taking passages from all over the Bible and showing how they come to bear on a particular topic. And so that's important. That's something that we need. But when we mistake them as being foundational studies rather than topical studies, then we actually have a fundamental misunderstanding of how they function. They're meant to function layered on top of a foundational understanding of the Bible as a whole. So in other words, I can only understand the beauty of the doctrine of the church if I have some sense of how the Bible as a whole is talking about that idea. And so we look at an idea like contentment, and it might help me to learn how someone else has synthesized all of the different passages in the Bible on contentment, but I'm still taking that person's word for it, right? And I need to be able to weigh what they're saying against my own reading of the Scripture, because you won't stand before God and give an account for how well you've loved God with my mind, right? Sometimes I am being named Bible Teacher X in this scenario, although I don't happen to write topical studies, but you don't want to just listen to my teaching and say, oh, that must be what the Bible says, because you're called to love God with your mind. So often with the topical Bible study space, again, we have forgotten to take an inventory of how much of our time is being given to topical study, and a lot of the resourcing that's come out through Christian publishing over the last 30 or 40 years has been geared toward topical study and away from line-by-line approaches to Scripture. And so many of us, kind of without even noticing it, have slipped into a pattern of only doing, or almost exclusively doing, topical study, which means we're not learning our own basic information about the Bible. We're taking that other person's word for it, and we may not be able to discern between who's doing that well and who's not.
So there's a balance in, kind of what we're doing here together of teaching people how they can study the Bible for themselves, but it can also kind of be, like we talked about a few episodes back, the balance between like devotional, reading the Bible devotionally.
Right.
Not that devotional reading of the Bible is bad at all. There's a time and a place for that. But if that's your main course of Bible reading, there's something we're just fundamentally missing. So that would probably be kind of what you would say, or that would be what you would say about the personal shopper approach too. That
Yes.
There's a balance.
Yeah, topical studies have their place. They absolutely do, but that place is not foundational. And so, again, what's the thing that you've neglected? That's probably the thing. There are people who have spent all their entire lives only doing Bible literacy building kinds of things, who really needed to do a study on the doctrine of the church to help them synthesize what they were seeing. So again, it has a lot to do with what has been your steady diet. I would say that what I have seen in most of the local church spaces that I've been in is an erring toward almost entirely or entirely doing topical studies.
Yeah, I resonate with that too.
Yeah.
My personal experience. So, what would you say the telephone game approach is?
So everybody's probably played the telephone game, and it's funny when your kid's sitting in a circle to whisper something in one person's ear and see how distorted the message gets by the time it gets around the circle. But it happens a lot with the way that we interact with the Scriptures, or where we substitute something else for our interaction with the Scriptures. And so, we live in an age of unprecedented access to things that are about the Bible, Bible-adjacent resources, so to speak. So whether that's commentaries or podcasts or blog posts or whatever that you have easy access to, and we get this flood of people who are talking about the Bible. And so they may be saying good things. They may not be saying good things. It's hard to say. But a lot of times what will happen is you might hear your pastor quote John Piper. And John Piper was actually quoting Athanasius. And Athanasius was actually riffing on Paul, or whatever it is. You can walk it all the way back, and you could add more layers in there than I've just given in this example.
Yeah, sure.
And so while what John Piper may have said may have been perfectly true and beautiful, you're still listening to what someone said about what someone said about what someone said about the Bible, right?
Right.
And so the more that our intake is from secondary or third sources, the more likely it is that we are getting static introduced into the system. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that all of those secondary, those Bible-adjacent resources are solid ones. Still, why would you devote the lion's share of your time to those at the expense of just reading the Bible? Because the Bible itself is what is going to help you have the right reference point for all of those other things. And so just sort of assessing, like, how drawn am I to what someone said? Because what has often become the case in our churches is that we are content to become curators of other people's opinions about a book that we don't read ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that. Right? But a gift that we actually have is that we each have a copy of it, multiple copies. So
yeah, it's like reading the Spark Notes instead of reading the book, or
That's right.
watching the trailer for a movie instead of actually watching
Yeah,
the movie itself.
and telling yourself it's the same thing. Or
Right.
you got enough of it. Right?
Yeah, yeah. And like it also reminds me of all of these is the foundational knowledge of the scriptures that we have for ourselves allows us to test what is true. Like in Acts, the Bereans tested what Paul said for themselves, and so if we don't actually know the Bible, there's no way that we're able to test that what we're being told is true, and we're just taking it as, well, if they say that's what's in the Bible, then that's what's in the Bible.
And that's what a false teacher is relying on you doing, is relying on you not knowing enough of the Bible firsthand to where they can put it together however they want to and present it to you as cohesive, and you'll believe it because you haven't done the work yourself.
Yeah. And so not that there's, again, like we've kind of been saying, there is a place obviously for podcasts and
Yes.
books. Those things can be such helpful, but they're meant to be supplementary.
They're meant to be supplementary, and not only that, we'll get into this a little bit more as we move through the podcast, but one of the things that they're doing for us is they are taking away that wait time, right? We feel the dissonance of what we don't know and we don't like it, and we want to mitigate that immediately. And so some of it is not that these are bad things in and of themselves, but it's that they have a place in the learning process, and if we run to them too quickly, we're actually sabotaging the learning process.
Okay, so there's one more approach that I want to talk to you about, the picky eater approach. How would you define that one?
Well, I've already confessed in an earlier episode that I definitely did this, and I think it's one that a lot of people can relate to. That's where I gravitate toward reading portions of the Bible that seem more accessible or relatable to me. And so in my case, it was the New Testament, but not just the New Testament. Like for years, I had a Bible that was just the New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. It didn't even have the Old Testament in it. And so I thought, well, that must be like next level, and so I'm just not even gonna mess with any of that. And so when you think about picky eating, think about how so often like women, we're like, oh, we should study Ruth. Because I can relate to Ruth, she's a woman. The story of Joshua, I don't know. I mean, he's a man. Or so it might be that we have this idea that there are pink parts and blue parts of the Bible. Proverbs 31 is for me, but the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, that's for men because it seems like it's maybe dealing with adultery, or we carve it all up the way that we want to, so that we sort of justify spending time in some places and avoid spending time in others. And so of course, a lot like the pinball approach or the magic 8 ball approach, what we're doing is we have a fundamental assumption about the Bible that the Bible does not say about itself. It says that all scripture is profitable and God breathed, which means that in the course of a lifetime we should be working to spend time in all of it, right? All of it.
Are there like specific books of the Bible in particular that, couching it by saying that, like you just said, all of the Bible is profitable, useful, we need to be in all of it, understand all of it. But are there specific passages or books of the Bible in particular that you feel like would be, that women's ministries in particular, just avoid at all costs, that actually have a lot to say for how we live our lives?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Some of it is just the sheer length of books of the Bible that impacts which ones we're going to study. So it's not even necessarily an issue of the perceived pink books of the Bible or pink sections of the Bible, although that is a part of the discussion. Like I'm sure that the women who are listening could tell you, oh yeah, I've studied Esther 1,000 times or Ruth 1,000 times, or I've picked out the female characters in the Bible and talked about their significance, completely ripped out of the context of their stories, that kind of thing. We have these ways, these workarounds we have to try to make the Bible seem like, oh no, ladies, we see you. So there is that aspect, but there's another issue that I think is a problem in the church as a whole, and that is this perception that we're all busy, we only have so much time, and the conventional wisdom, which I flatly disagree with, is that people won't commit to things that are longer than about 6 weeks. Typical sermon series length might be about that long, and so what that means is we get compressed into only studying shorter books of the Bible, and many times studying those over and over again, and never studying longer books of the Bible that won't fit themselves into these shorter time frames. And so I'll ask a large group of people, a room full of people when I'm teaching, how many of you have done a Bible study over the book of Ephesians, and all the hands go up. Then I'll say, how many of you have done more than one? The hands stay up. They've done all of these shorter books of the Bible over and over and over again, which obviously, yeah, is there value in going back to these books again and again? Sure, but not if, again, it means that you've never studied Genesis or you've never studied Exodus, because they're longer books of the Bible. And you can't get more foundational than Genesis and Exodus. But I know how many people will never go there on their own and have never been taken through them just because of the length.
So I'm sure that, myself personally, you've said that you've also kind of fallen into some of these approaches. All of these approaches?
All of them at some point, yeah.
At some point. And some of it could be season of life based. Some of it is just how we have a tendency to go to the Word. What is maybe an overarching misconception that all of these have? Is there something that all of them are kind of saying, this is really what we're getting wrong with all of them when it comes to how we approach the Bible?
So the first one is we think that learning the Bible should be easy. We just think that if we have any kind of habit of coming to the scriptures at all, then it should just make us a better Christian. And that's not how learning happens. That's not how interacting with a book happens. And so I think when we reframe the Bible as a book, as at least a book, and we determine that we're going to treat it with at least the level of respect that we would give to a common textbook or to the works of Shakespeare, then it changes things for us. And we begin to realize, oh, actually, I've spent a lot of years doing things that I said were Bible study that were actually something else. And so I think the assumption that it's going to be easy is one that we have to address, and we need to recognize that no aspect of the Christian life has been promised to us as being easy.
Yeah, right.
It's been promised to us as being deeply, deeply valuable and also really, really hard work. And I think some of the disconnect here is because we know that we're saved by grace through faith alone.
Yeah.
And so it's like grace is how we got here, but we don't recognize that grace-driven effort is what fuels our sanctification, and it's work. That's work. I think one famous theologian has said, your justification costs you nothing, and your sanctification costs you everything. And this is part of that everything, is that we devote ourselves to this disclosure of who God is, because we think He's eminently beautiful, and the more that we're able to see that in this lifetime, the more we'll be conformed by it.
But you mentioned there was 2 things that people typically have a misconception about or get wrong about Bible study. What was the second one?
The other one would be that all contact with the Bible is good contact. In other words, everything that involves looking into the Bible in some regard is a Bible study. And so, you're probably familiar with this even in a lot of local churches where they'll say, okay, these are our Bible studies that we're offering this month. And I've had this happen. It's been so strange for me to have people say, oh, we're doing your Bible study, none like him. And I have to say, oh, I don't say it, but I think in my head, that's not a Bible study. Or, oh, we're going to do your Bible study, Women of the Word. Well, that's not a Bible study. That's a book.
Those are both books you've written.
Yeah, and they have questions in them that are going to ask you to look up some verses, but that's not a Bible study. And so when we have a clear definition for what it means to actually be studying, then we're better able to discern, well, have I been doing that, or have I been doing all of these other things? And so if everything is a Bible study, then nothing is a Bible study. Essentially, anything goes. And think about how, because people have come to church for years and gone to things we call a Bible study, they're so stunned when they find that years down the road they still don't know the Bible, because we didn't have precision of terms. They didn't know what was the learning outcome associated with doing this thing versus this thing. And because in a lot of cases, what we've offered to people, we have asked a fundamentally wrong question as church leaders. We've said, what do our people want, instead of how are disciples formed? And so we have given people things that make them feel a particular way, or give them a sense of closeness to God, but perhaps haven't challenged them to behold Him in all of His unvarnished glory in the scriptures.
So actually, in the next few weeks, we're actually going to talk about what makes for a good Bible study, a good approach to Bible study. So that's what we're going to get into next. But briefly, how would you summarize that, especially in contrast to what we've been talking about today?
So you're going to want an approach that is helping you walk through 3 different levels of understanding. And the first is the least interesting and appealing when you hear it. It's comprehension. Sometimes people will say observation for this stage. I call it comprehension because when I hear you're going to read something and observe what it says, I hear a little level of subjectivity in there that I just have sort of steered away from in the years I've talked about this. So, because I might observe some things that are not actually there just because I'm still learning how to do things. So I use comprehension for that first level. Comprehension is just asking the question, what does it say? And it means that by the time I've spent some time in a particular portion of an entire book, I should be able to understand, I should be able to tell you what it says. I should be able to pass a basic pop quiz over the factual information. And then the next step would be interpretation. So once I've spent good time just trying to get the words under my skin, so to speak, then I'm going to start to ask, I move from what does it say to what does it mean? We start asking meaning questions, and there are tools associated with that. And then lastly, and only after those first two steps have been attempted, I begin to ask, how should it change me? In other words, what do I do with this? And one of the key elements of any application time in the scriptures is to reflect back on what I know is true about God from what I'm reading here before I run to the me questions, right? So, and that's you can probably hear in that in a 15-minute interval of time at 6 a.m. What are you going to be able to accomplish? And so that's some of what we can talk about in our upcoming sessions is how do I do, where do I find the time to do this? All those things.
Yeah, perfect. That's a great preview. So we'll look forward to talking about that in the weeks to come. And thanks to you for joining us for this episode of the Women of the Word podcast. Tune in next week where Jen and I will discuss 5 key principles for transformative Bible study. If you found this content helpful, we'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We'll see you all here again next week. Relevant in their own lives. And I think that oftentimes teenagers that are asking that question begin on a footing that is not very confident in their understanding of Scripture. And so when you start from that place and you think, I don't really know if the Bible's relevant to me, you're already starting off on the wrong footing. And so if you think about it as a student, if you showed up to an AP math class and your teacher said your entire grade for the entire year is going to be based on this one test at the end of the year, and she gave you the book and she said all of the problems are in this book, it will tell you how to work all of the problems, I'm here for you, I will help you, but you have to show up on the last day of school and take this test. and instead you went, I don't really know if that text has actually all of the answers, because I've heard from a lot of people in my cafeteria that it's a terrible book. And so if you as a student went about your entire school year just kind of outsourcing your knowledge of this AP test at the end of the year, and you're asking your friends and asking your parents and asking all these people, how do I pass this test? We would think that was ridiculous, that you're showing up on the last day of school and trying to kind of outsource your understanding of AP math, right? But that is what we tend to do with Scripture. We have a God who has created the entire universe and has graciously given us his word to guide us through a very complex world. And I think a lot of people go, oh, it's so complex. Well, the world is old and the problems have not changed. When sin is at the root of it, we see it play out in different ways, but our problems are not more complex than they were when Scripture was written. And so if we really believe that God has created the world and given us his living, breathing word to guide us, then choosing to walk away from Scripture and think it's not helpful is really the epitome of arrogance, to really think that it cannot speak to us when Scripture has been effectively guiding Christians for over 2,000 years. So I would say to the team that's wondering, if you feel like maybe the Bible isn't relevant, maybe ask someone to come alongside of you and begin to learn what Scripture says. And instead of saying, is it relevant, say, how is it relevant? Help me to understand. And really come to it with the humility that says, I need help understanding how God's word